Streaming. I'll pull up my YouTube live dashboard and make sure I'm actually seeing any of this really. Okay, let's see. Are we transmitting radio frequencies across the universe currently? I'm not seeing much. Okay, no, yeah, this is just continuing the previous little round that we did. Alright, I do believe that we are streaming. I see myself. Oh my god. We are in the mid 700s of the Project 2025 Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise document by the Heritage Foundation. Late 700s of like an 880 something page document. Now that it's in Microsoft Word, it's 900 pages if you use the raw PDF. Today, we are going to continue having it be read aloud in Microsoft Word. We tried Microsoft Edge until the 400s and then it fucking broke. We're continuing. Okay, this time we're playing Subnautica. There is no speedrun. There's no challenge. I'm just finishing it for the sake of information independence. Information resilience is kind of a language that I like to use. The idea of me getting off my ass. I'm lazy as hell. I'm not talking about you. I'm not trying to project. I'm trying to model something. I'm lazy as hell. I thought as we came into Trump's presidency that it would be valuable for me to finally read this document, not just a cursory glance provided to me by The Guardian doing some wonderful fucking summary. I'm talking about sitting down, reading it for yourself, contextualizing it, and being a thinking, feeling person. I actually even had someone mention in a post somewhere like, hey, why don't you just have AI summarize it? And I'm like, because AI is not a person. Because it takes a person that has lived a life, that has empathy and emotions and compassion to read this document and contextualize it like thoughtfully, right? Like as a human being. And I think very much there's been a lot of understanding and thinking and feeling throughout the time period I have had this read aloud to me. Now, we have an issue today that may compromise the viability of this challenge. For some reason, the entire section on a case for free trade is nothing but a bunch of diagrams. And you can't really have those read aloud. I'd have to start and stop it like 20 different times. And I'm going to be frank. I'm skimming through these, right? If you it should hopefully match up. I know I've accidentally skipped a couple of pages while like ending and starting the next stream, and I'll start like in the next page or something. But I know that we're in the section that's called like a case for free trade, and it started with a quote from like Warren fucking Buffett. Warren, go kill yourself, Buffett. Just the worst fucking dude. Just the worst person. He's just like, actually, he's ugly. He's a terrible person. Yeah, you know, Warren Buffett, that one. You know, Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett. Oh my god. So listen, they're talking about fair trade. I don't know what the fuck is going on. I think they're bitching about China, but then they're bitching about China using all kinds of like non-warfare tactics to mess with our trade while we do the exact same damn thing back to China. So like, sure. I'm not quite following, but listen, we're like into here. It's, you know, communist China has high tariffs. That's bad. Grr. We're angry. We have a reciprocal trade act. Listen, a lot of these I haven't been super like able to encode because I just don't know much about these sort of macroeconomic policies. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to like start here, and I'm going to read with my eyes without playing Subnautica. And I may even read it aloud to you, chat, because there's just too many diagrams, and it needs to get read. So I'm going to go to the full text mode that I have here. We're going to zoom in a whole frickin' bunch. Make sure that this is very visible. All right, mapping bilateral trade deficits against tariff differentials. Now, here's the issue. This is a picture, okay? So, again, Microsoft Word physically converted the PDF file that was listed on the Heritage Foundation's website into a Word file to make it readable via word. Largest bilateral trade deficit and or largest tax differential. Malaysia, Japan, China, India. What the fuck am I reading? Minimal trade deficits, China. So what? This is showing. You know, I have no idea. I can't read this graph. I have no idea the fuck's going on. It probably transferred it wrong. Estimated job and trade deficit effects. I don't know. There's a trade deficit. I don't know what that means, but it means something. Which accounts for 47.6% of total U.S. trades and 88.6% of the U.S. trade deficit in goods. Figure 1 shows that the USRTA, the United States Reciprocal Trade Agreement priority list, will include the countries in red, Communist China and India, along with trading partners in the yellow sign. Okay, so this is probably supposed to be colored normally. Or maybe it's a PDF and it doesn't show color. I don't know. Okay, scenario 1. Partner countries match our U.S. tariff rate instead of... I know that the document was complaining earlier that the United States has a such and such tariff on whatever, but China always increases it to disincentivize local manufacture in the country of China. Country of China? Yeah, right? The state. I like the word state. You know, that's what it is ultimately. The US is a state. China is a state. All countries are states. So we're complaining about the fact that different countries aren't matching our tariffs, which again, that just, I don't know how to describe that. It's like you're already doing this Cold War sort of warfare, and you were bitching about other countries going harder into, I believe it would be protectionism, right? No? Yeah, right? So tariffs are a form, I've been learning lots of new words throughout this document. So protectionism, right, is when you're like saying, hey, we're going to put tariffs on people importing your shit, so that way they just make it here. And also, if other companies in our economy import your shit, it'll kind of fuck everyone else over because you're getting it too cheap and no one can compete domestically. So you're protecting the businesses and economies domestically by putting tariffs on the importing of international goods. Apparently, China goes harder than us and does protectionism more hard than we do, and we're angry at that, apparently. I guess. Okay, yeah, like what the hell? Practice of economic aggression. Economic aggression. I don't know. This clearly didn't copy over well, but they're complaining about economic aggression, I suppose. Cool. I'm gonna be real. I'm not getting half of these documents. It's just different ways in which we seem to be complaining about prevent litigation consolidation. Yeah, I don't. It's just us complaining about China's control of different things. China's acts, policies, and practices of economic aggression. Okay, they're calling it economic aggression. I don't, again, for the country of free markets, which is supposedly the US, like the bald eagle screeching kind of free market country, why are we complaining about economic aggression? Isn't that like the game? Like, again, I personally don't. I think economies are stupid. I think we should get rid of money. I think we should like abolish money. We'd be like, fuck it. I don't want it anymore. All right. We're going to use a credit system. All right. It's like, did you, I don't know. Fuck it. Realistically, wealthiest country in the history of the world, the modern technology that we have, everyone should have free food. Everyone should have free housing. Everyone should have free healthcare. It should be easy. It should actually unironically, empirically be easy. But what if people get lazy? Awesome. That's fucking awesome. Hell yeah, lazy is awesome. Hell yeah. We should strive to a world. Like the old phrase of like what is it? Good times, strong men make good times make weak men make bad times make strong men, right? I can't fucking believe it, but the baby boomers are the weak men that made bad times. And they insisted that they were the strong. They were not. The silent generation was the strong men that made good times. The baby boomers were the good men that made hard times. And the hard times are being faced by fucking millennials and Gen Z. And I think Gen Alpha, I don't know, give it 10 years and they'll be dealing with this shit too. They'll be conscious enough to remember. So, hell, man. I don't know. All of this American exceptionalism, all this resiliency bullshit that the US talks about. Phytosanitary standards, raise non-tariff barriers. So they're just going about ways in which China is economically aggressive. For the millionth time, I thought the United States was the country of rugged free market individualism. I mean, in the U.S., it's so crazy. This document itself bitches about globalism so much, but here we are talking about how we explicitly depend on and other countries need to abide by our international trade agreements, but we're the ones complaining about globalism. There's no consistency. Oh, you know what? At this point, this is enough reading that I could probably get back to reading. Are we done? Are we done with pages? And yay, I can go back to reading. Okay, cool. I'm going to go back to having it read aloud. I am setting it faster and faster the closer I get to being done because I'm tired.
These results again underscore the high degree of unfair.
That is pretty quick. All right, we're playing Subnautica in the background.
Between the US and much of the rest of the world, which penalizes
and I'm going to try to...
and workers because of the WTO-MFN.
I'm playing Subnautica while I do it. I think this stream should be less than 8 hours, and then I'll be done. We are on page 783 of 884. We only have 100 pages. I think it takes about 4 or 5 hours to go through 100 pages at this speed. So, we're doing it. Like, we're actually doing it. Yeah.
Because under WTO rules, America
okay. I'm just going to accept that, like, I tend to slouch and it's going to block my head. Alright, where am I at in this game?
With the US more than $70 billion a year. While Japan has relatively low tariffs, it ranks high on the non-tariff barrier scale. In such cases, which are numerous, passage of the US RTA would likely also be very helpful in reducing non-tariff barriers. This is because under the powers provided by the US RTA, if a foreign country imposes significantly higher non-tariff...
Reinforce once again, we are not trying to beat Subna. We're just kind of playing it while listening. So it's a fun little game for me to play. I like it.
The president has the authority to levy reciprocal duties to offset or mirror those barriers. In summary, passage of the US RTA would go a long way toward leveling the playing field for American farmers, ranchers, manufacturers, and workers who are now forced to compete in an intrinsically unfair, unbalanced, and non-reciprocal WTO-MFN system. Nor is the US RTA necessarily the only possible legislative way to address this issue. In 2017, then House Speaker Paul Ryan, Republican Wisconsin, and then House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Kevin Brady, Republican Texas, proposed a border adjustment tax. The proposed border adjustment would have eliminated the ability of corporations to deduct the cost of imports while eliminating the tax on income attributable to exports. This border adjustment tax would have shifted the U.S. corporate income tax from an origin-based tax applying to the production of goods and services in the United States to a destination-based tax applying to the consumption of goods and services in the U.S. This tax, strongly opposed by American multinational corporations and big-box retailers, not only would have leveled the playing field with respect to WTO rules, but also would have provided an innovative alternative to the application of tariffs. Point 17. A conservative administration might do well to look at such a tax as part of its trade agenda. Challenge number 2. Communist China's economic aggression and quest for world domination. 18.
Dude, how are we any fucking different?
America's relationship with communist China is
for the 100th time.
The problem is not just that the relentlessly mercantilist and protectionist trade policies that China has pursued.
I do need to figure out what the word mercantilism is again. I don't remember it. I haven't learned it.
Communist China's economic aggression in the traditional trade policy space is...
Well, they love just calling it communist China, though. Isn't China functionally very capitalist in terms of its foreign markets?
The Chinese Communist Party's policy goal is to propel the Chinese economy, but its broader goal is to strengthen Communist China's defense industrial base and associated warfighting capabilities.
Well, that's the same thing the US is doing. We're just saying that they're the bad guys. Yes, no, they definitely do. And we definitely intend to supplant everyone else too. And we have for fucking ever.
She has promised that the deed
damn, y'all are dumb.
The 100-year anniversary of the communist takeover of the mainland. Point 19. In light of communist
Dude, there's so much lore I just don't know about China. And the issue is, so much of what I know is probably just US propaganda.
January 2025 must view the U.S.-China trade relationship and associated policy reforms within the context of the broader existential threat posed by communist China. The question is whether the next president should seek to decouple economically and financially.
These damn commies, man.
As America's first best response to China's unrelenting aggression or continue efforts to negotiate with an authoritarian country and brutal dictatorship with a well-established reputation for failing to abide by any agreements it enters. Institutionalized aggression.
Say, I'm almost certain you can, like, I will not infer that China and the US are meaningfully comparable in terms of level of authoritarianism. I will never say that. I will hopefully never say that. I'll say, there are anecdotes where you could look at evidence of the mistreatment of civilians in like protest situations and in various like social control situations. Yeah, you could make those comparisons, but I know that the United States, unfortunately, in my opinion, has enough bureaucracy in the way that when someone like Trump tries to take over, when someone like Trump tries to hop in and take over and really cause horrific and serious change all at once, which, ironically, that's the entire point of this document, is to empower the guy to do that. Actually, I've had that thought before, but like, just to reinforce, the entire point of this document is a plan to outline how to give Donald Trump, a singular president, more power than one American president usually should ever have. That is the entire point of this document now, which is ironic because they're complaining about China being authoritarian. But talking about China being authoritarian, what is relatively certain in evidence is that the United States has a lot of bureaucratic systems in the way that slow down authoritarianism by the system of having a president. So I will not deny that America has something akin to democracy, something akin to a representative system, an electorate representative system. I will never say, like, ooh, the same as China. China's the same as us. No, obviously that's fucking different. Obviously.
Table 6, extracted from the White House Office of Trade and Manufacturing Policies Report on Communist China's Economic Aggression. 21 provides a summary of the various policies.
Dude, it is like, they love saying only Communist China. Is that like just normal behavior for everyone? Do you neoliberals call it Communist China too?
As noted in Table 6, this policy is carried out, for example, through state-sponsored IP theft, coercive and intrusive regulatory gambits to force technology transfer.
I think intellectual property is stupid anyway, so fuck off.
Communist China's looting of American technology is further enhanced by information harvesting conducted by Communist Chinese nationals who infiltrate U.S. universities, national laboratories, and other centers of innovation.
Dude, this shit with the Chinese foreign exchange students, it sounds so conspiratorial and also just racist.
It has been estimated that the theft of trade secrets alone,
like, are spies probably a thing? Well, fucking yeah. I don't have a lot of personal anecdotes to reinforce that, but yeah, obviously spies probably fucking exist.
These laws are designed to prevent the export of sensitive technologies with military applications. Point 24, however, a significant problem facing agencies like the Departments of Commerce, Defense, and State is the growth of dual-use technologies, which have both military and civilian utility. For example, airplane engines.
I think we might have read this page before, unfortunately, but we'll deal.
Acquired by a strategic economic and military competitor like Communist China, however, such commercial items can quickly wind up propelling the aircraft of the People's Liberation Army. As an example of Communist China's coercive and intrusive regulatory gambits to force the transfer of foreign technologies and IP to Chinese competitors,
they're very angry,
into joint ventures or partnerships with minority states,
very large and angry fish in the distance.
Once a U.S. or foreign company is coerced into entering a joint venture with a Chinese partner, the door is open to the transfer of technology and IP. Similarly, a relentlessly coercive Communist China has forced American technology holders to accept below-market royalty rates in licensing and other forms of below-market.
You wouldn't even try.
And the American government has done little or nothing about it. Information harvesting. Every year, more than 300,000 Communist Chinese nationals attend U.S. universities or are hired at U.S. national laboratories, innovation centers, incubators, and think tanks. To put this in perspective,
so Chinese people are getting STEM jobs, that's what I'm hearing.
Nationals were studying abroad at Chinese universities on the mainland in 2018.25. These Chinese nationals, often members, or the sons and daughters of members of the Chinese Communist Party, now account for approximately 1/3 of foreign university and college students in the United States and about 25% of graduate students specializing in science, technology, engineering, or math, STEM.
Implied racism in the logic of these people.
Report has warned. Academia is an opportune environment for learning about science and technology since the cultural values of U.S. educational institutions reflect an open and free exchange of ideas. As a result, Chinese science and engineering students frequently master technologies that later become critical to key military systems, amounting over time to unintentional violations of U.S. export control laws. Point 27. State-backed Chinese enterprises also increasingly finance joint research programs and the construction of new research facilities on U.S. campuses. For example, Huawei, well known within the American intelligence community as an instrument of Chinese military espionage, has partnered with the University of California, Berkeley on research that focuses on artificial intelligence and related areas such as deep learning, reinforcement learning, machine learning, natural language processing, and computer vision, all of which have important future military applications. Point 28 in this way.
I had a Huawei phone. I want to get soon. I want to reinforce that. Okay, no. So there's something sketchy about, like, these people from an authoritarian government that forces you to have a one-party system. Not that we're much better for the two-party system, again. You know, we're being all like, these people who are in an authoritarian regime are part of the authoritarian political party. Well, yeah, that's authoritarianism. Why are we not giving a single of these people the benefit of the doubt that, like, maybe they're a foreign exchange student and they want to get the fuck out? Like, if you really think that way, why isn't it like, oh, hey, we have lots of students and there is a potential information leak in that. Okay, cool, say that. Rather than being like, every damn one of them is a communist. You know, I thought the idea was that they're authoritarian. They're kind of being forced to, in your logic, no?
These agents of the Communist Chinese government push their foreign direct
damn, I'm getting the moon pool already.
Mergers and acquisitions, seed and
damn, I'm getting fast.
Greenfield investing, particularly in strategically
whoa, give me a bubble, please. Yep,
since
thank
2012, you. CB Insights has cataloged more than 600 high-technology investments in the United States worth close to $20 billion, with artificial intelligence, augmented and virtual reality, and robotics receiving a particular focus by Communist China, based investors. Point 30. All of these behaviors raise the question of whether communist Chinese nationals should be granted visas to penetrate our universities, think tanks, and research institutions.
Yeah, they're going that far as, like, forbidding Chinese people from being in the area.
It should be clear from this review that communist China's economic aggression is both widespread and systemic. The CCP's self-proclaimed goal is to supplant the U.S. as the world's dominant economic and military superpower.
Yes, and the U.S. intends to do the exact same damn thing back to them.
Policy responses range from further attempts to negotiate with the CCP to strategically decoupling economically and financially from communist China. The fruitlessness of further negotiations. If the past is prologue, and as we learned during the Trump administration, any further negotiations with communist China are likely to be both fruitless and dangerous. Fruitless because the CCP now has a very well-established reputation for bargaining in bad faith, and dangerous because as long as the CCP's aggression continues, it will further weaken America's manufacturing and defense industry.
Okay, well, as long as the U.S. aggressions continues, it'll be the exact same. Again, there's... if anyone's bad faith, it's your arguments here. What the hell? The American exceptionalism is crazy. Like, I'm not saying that authoritarianism is good. I just want to reinforce that for the 15th time, right? If anything, I'm closest to like an anarchist or something. I don't like states at all. So I especially don't like abuses of power. I don't like excesses of power, right? That is where I'm at. It's very obvious. But there's something that gets lost in these arguments because, like, you're ignoring the fact that these are people still. Like, there are still people involved in this. I do not need this chair. I don't know why I'm scanning it. That's what I'm just saying. It's like, there's such a clear and obvious disregard for humanity in these arguments that are being made here.
On May 3rd, 2019, however, Liu would renege on that 150-page deal and seek its drastic retrading. Point 35. Finally, on January 15, 2020, the U.S. and Communist China signed a Phase 1-inch deal that was a pale shadow of the original deal. Point 36, the so-called skinny deal. As it was derisively and rightly called, combined proposed modest communist Chinese reforms on issues related to forced technology transfer and intellectual property theft with promises of large-scale purchases of agricultural, manufacturing, and energy products.
Can't tell.
To date, this deal has been a predictable bust. Communist China has failed to consummate a significant fraction of its promised purchases and has made little or no progress on reforming its mercantilist, protectionist, technology transfer, forcing policies. The clear lesson learned in both the Obama and Trump administrations is that Communist China will never bargain in good faith with the U.S. to stop
stasis rifle. Damn, this took forever.
An equally clear lesson learned by President Trump, which he was ready to implement.
Stupid, I already have to leave.
The better policy option was to decouple both economically and financially from Communist China, as further negotiations would indeed be both fruitless and dangerous.
Hell.
Table 6. Vectors of Communist China's economic aggression in the technology and
30 seconds to get down from 200 million meters. I don't know if that's viable.
Physical theft of technologies and IP through economic espionage. Cyber-enabled espionage and theft. Evasion of U.S. export control laws.
This is a lot of shit.
And piracy. Reverse engineering. Coercive and intrusive regulatory gambits.
Isn't literally every country doing half of these things?
Adverse administrative
No, probably not that,
licensing
actually.
requirements. Discriminatory patent and other IP rights restrictions. Security reviews force technology and IP transfers. Secure and controllable
It's a scary
technology
noise.
standards. Data localization mandates. Burdensome and intrusive testing. Discriminatory catalogs and lists. Government procurement restrictions. Indigenous technology standards that deviate from international norms. Forced research and development. Anti-monopoly law extortion. Expert review panels forced disclosure of proprietary information. Chinese Communist Party
Ooh,
co-ops
got the notification station.
placement of
That's good
Chinese
for the game.
employees with foreign joint ventures.
No, I don't need that
Economic
anymore.
coercion. Export restraints restrict access to raw materials.
Let's see.
Monopsony purchasing power. Information harvesting.
It's a water bottle,
Open
not
source
that important to
collection
me.
of science and
Stasis
technology
rifle.
information.
I'm not really going to use
Chinese
this, but
national
I'm just going to
security
scan it while I'm
non-traditional
here.
information collectors. Recruitment of science, technology, business,
Okay, I
and
don't
finance
particularly
talent.
see a good reason to keep
State-sponsored
pressing with
technology-seeking
this
investment.
area. I
Chinese
really
state
just need the
actors involved in
Cyclops.
technology-seeking FDI. Chinese investment vehicles used to acquire and transfer U.S. technologies.
Oh, this might be a bad idea.
Mergers and acquisitions. GreenFi ELD investments. Seed and venture funding. Source: White House OFFIC of Trade and Manufacturing Policy, How China's Economic Aggression Threatens the Technologies and Intellectual Property of the United States and the World, June 2018, https://Trump White House. Archives.gov/wp-content/.
Okay, this might be a way out, maybe. Nope. Alright, at this rate, I am literally not going to make it. I have made a terrible mistake, is what I'm
The
understanding.
following policy options were on the drawing board or in discussion as preparations for a potential Trump second term were being made. These options span the spectrum from purely trade-related like increasing tariffs to cutting off Communist China's access to American financial markets, research institutions,
Through
and
here,
consumers. The next American president should
Is it
strongly
there?
consider adopting all of them as a package, else strategically expand
I'm
tariffs
trapped.
to all Chinese
Okay.
products and increase tariff rates to level
Well, I'm
the
dying.
knockout made in China products.
That's a shame.
Execute this strategy in a manner and at a pace that will not expose the U.S. to lack of access to essential
Yeah, you know, I would love to swim to the surface, but I've clearly made a consistent and ongoing lapse in judgment in getting stuck in here. So I will drown. I am currently drowning. God damn it. Damn it. I'm gonna have to go back there. And that also means I've lost most of the things I've scanned. Unless I completed their blueprints, I'm pretty sure.
TikTok and WeChat, which pose significant national security risks and expose American consumers to data and identity theft. L. Prohibit all communist Chinese investment in high technology industries. L. Prohibit U.S. pension funds from investing in communist Chinese
I
stocks.
did get one of the whole blueprints, and it looks like it did keep it, apparently.
Accounting Oversight Board standards or, alternatively, close off the Chinese shares
God dang it.
to U.S. investment and to register U.S.-sanctioned communist Chinese companies. L. Prohibit the use of Hong Kong clearinghouses as transit points for American capital investing in the Chinese mainland.
No, so I kept the things I scanned. I always have so much trouble finding,
L. Systematically reduce and eventually eliminate any U.S. dependence on communist Chinese supply chains that may be used
I always
to
have
produce
such trouble
such as
finding
medicines, silicon chips, rare earth minerals, computer
Cyclops Hull fragments every time. Like, I played the game enough to know, but that's the one thing I can never find when I get pretty far.
Communist China's use of its great firewall surveillance and censorship capabilities.
I don't think I actually need radiation gear anymore, so I'm gonna put this back permanently. Alright, I'm gonna run to the bathroom. Still listening, though.
Disrupting both the domestic groups and CCP influencers' social media operations and funding streams using public information as a rapidly available offensive measure. L. Reinvigorate and expand the DHS crackdown on the CCP's use of e-sellers, including third-party sellers, and the shippers and operators of major warehouses such as Amazon, eBay, and Alibaba to flood U.S. markets with counterfeit and pirated goods. L. Compel the closure of all Confucius institutes in the U.S., which serve as propaganda arms of the CCP. L. Significantly reduce or eliminate the issuance of visas to Chinese students or researchers to prevent espionage and information harvesting. L. Hold the CCP accountable for the COVID-19 virus, which almost certainly originated as a genetically engineered virus from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and do so through the establishment of a presidential commission or select congressional committee that would investigate the origins of the virus, its various costs, both economically and in human life, and the possible means of collecting damages from the CCP, which are likely to rise to the trillions of dollars. If the new U.S. president wishes to defend this country against the serious existential threat posed by Communist China, that president will adopt all of these proposals through the requisite presidential executive orders or memoranda. Effective trade policy in the real world. To conclude this analysis, it is useful to offer brief reflections on a number of key obstacles to implementing the policy initiatives recommended in this chapter. These obstacles include The dogma of the Ricardian free trade model, which has been used as propaganda to thwart the adoption of measures that seek to level the global trading field for American manufacturers, farmers, ranchers, and workers. The politics of trade policy, which has led to a great divide that makes trade policy reforms difficult to implement. The economics of trade deficits, which are not adequately understood either by the American public or by the policymaking intelligentsia. And the crucial role of supportive White House and administration personnel in implementing effective trade policies. The dogma of free trade. Clearly, the fair and balanced trade orientation of this chapter runs starkly against the free trade grain of the globalist Ricardian orthodoxy, which is predicated on the theory that free trade represents the best path by which to achieve both American and global prosperity. This orthodoxy is based on the ivory tower academic conclusion that if countries trade freely among each other, each will pursue its own comparative advantages, production will be most efficient around the world, the economic pie will be bigger both for the globe and for each free trading country, and, so long as workers who lose their jobs are fairly compensated from the gains from trade, everyone will be better off. The most obvious problem with this orthodoxy, there are many more, is that nowhere is Ricardian free trade mirrored in the real world. Instead, America trades in a world where the WTO's MFN rules are stacked against us, scofflaws like communist China run roughshod over what meager WTO rules there are, and the United States among all of the world's developed nations is the biggest victim of the free trade Ricardian orthodoxy. During his first term, President Donald Trump preached that there can be no free trade without fair, reciprocal, and balanced trade. He was right then.
I might just barely have something of value to say in this section. I didn't know what Ricardian trade is, but I understand the premise of mutual aid. Mutual aid, right? You know, countries should be trading with each other because different countries have different geological resources, different cultural resources, different all kinds of stuff, right? Different cognitive resources, right? There's going to be random geniuses in different countries that make up cool ideas and all this sort of stuff. So I am probably maybe a globalist insofar as I think if, you know, a country, if people in their lives have like a material need and another country has it, well, yeah, trade. Fucking, we should do free trade. Absolutely. And everyone should try to get their needs met, right? The issue is once you throw in this thing of internal competition, yeah, everything goes to shit. If you turn it into a competition instead of a game of mutual prosperity, yeah, instantly everything goes to shit. So for them to say, in practice, however, other countries are greedy. Yeah, we're other countries. We're them. Like we essentially established that premise. Likely, I don't know all the history, but yes, we're no better. To say like, ooh, other countries end up just kind of pursuing their needs though instead of just getting their needs met. Yeah, they're gonna do that. But the reason that they're gonna compete for power and aggression is because, I don't know, the biggest country in the world does that aggressively. We almost advertise it explicitly. This document alone makes mention of it 100 times. I think there is an assumption in this, like, ooh, instead of trying to be globalist, we should just like be strong men and like and you know, do, you know, China's being unfair and all this shit. So we should try not to be fans of objective free trade. We should be very careful and limit our trade. I feel rather, because thoughts are more complicated than the feelings in this case. I feel that as a sustainability advocate, as a person who's interested in mutual aid, as someone who focuses on decentralization and minimizing the role of big government, I think it's really important that we look at the microeconomic, maybe I'd say micro resource scale, right? I think individual towns and communities in the United States should be 20 times more independent and energy resilient than they are right now. In terms of energy, in terms of materials, in terms of all these things, I think individual states easily should be way more independent, especially because of their scale. I think that means that cities in different parts of the country should look different consequently. Oh, it's almost like native people already had that figured the fuck out. Yeah, why does Phoenix exist? Why do some of these cities, giant air-conditioned cities that are using stick-built houses for their suburbs, that don't have, like, why? Like, they don't have the resources to be doing these things. So I'm actually, to some extent, not a globalist because I think community should develop as much resilience as possible. But simultaneously, I probably am a globalist insofar as like, oh, if you literally cannot get something, then yeah, that's what trade is for. We should support each other. A rising tide will lift all ships. will lift all ships. But simultaneously, I'm a big fan of decentralization. So figuring out how to get your needs met by adapting your behaviors to your environment. I don't know. I actually don't know what a conservative would say to that kind of logic. I wonder if I'm reasonable or not to them. I don't know. I'd be curious, for sure. Alright, back to the game. I keep fucking dying. I just stop fucking dying. I low-key suck. Like, I'm not very good at this. Gotta go back to reading.
Dogma of free trade. Clearly, the fair and balanced trade orientation of this chapter runs starkly against the free trade grain of the globalist Ricardian orthodoxy, which is predicated on the theory that free trade represents the best path by which to achieve both American and global prosperity. This orthodoxy is based on the ivory tower academic conclusion that if countries trade freely among each other, each will pursue its own comparative advantages, production will be most efficient around the world, the economic pie will be bigger both for the globe and for each free trading country, and, so long as workers who lose their jobs are fairly compensated from the gains from trade, everyone will be better off. The most obvious problem with this orthodoxy, there are many more, is that nowhere is Ricardian free trade mirrored in the real world. Instead, America trades in a world where the
That's
WTO
due to actual greed and corruption. You had countries actually being run by individuals.
And the United States among all of the world's
Rather, run as a true representation of communities and collectives.
During his first term,
And maybe that wouldn't fucking
there
happen.
can be no free trade without fair, reciprocal, and balanced trade. He was right then, and whoever is the next president in 2025 should heed this critical principle whenever the flag of free trade is waved to prevent the adoption of needed reforms.
And they were really careful and uncertain that he would make it.
Policy, who benefits? Today, there is a great divide among Americans that stands in the way of constructive trade policy reforms. This great divide is certainly not about a partisan desire for low taxes and a reduced regulatory burden. Rather, it is over whether our borders should be open or secure and whether it is prudent to offshore our manufacturing and defense industrial base and associated supply chains.
Wow, dump the Cyclops. That was, damn. That happened, huh?
Okay. To enhance our national security. Some Americans
Oh, but I need lithium while I'm here. I don't know how much lithium I need, but like a fair amount.
Flow of both labor and capital. Yet it is equally true that open borders and offshoring also help American multinational corporations to maximize their profits by minimizing their labor and environmental protection costs. In particular, an open border policy, which allows for the unlimited migration of cheap labor, depresses American wage rates and thereby boosts corporate profits. At the same time, offshoring gives American corporations readier access to the sweatshops and pollution havens of Asia and Latin America. Our skies and water may be cleaner, and our products may be cheaper. Main Street manufacturers and workers bear the brunt of these policies. The obvious political problem in adopting many of the policies proposed here is that they will be opposed by the special interest groups that benefit from open borders and offshoring and that contribute lavishly to both political parties. These special interest groups range from the hedge funds of Wall Street and tech entrepreneurs of Silicon Valley to big box retailers that stuff their aisles particularly with cheap made-in-China goods. Yes, trade deficits matter. Oh, our country has been behaving like an extraordinarily rich family that possesses an immense farm. In order to consume 4% more than we produce, that's the trade deficit, we have, day by day, been both selling pieces of the farm and increasing the mortgage on what we still own. Warren Buffett, 37. Historically, one line of attack against attempts to implement fair trade policies in the name of reducing America's massive and chronic trade deficit has been the claim that trade deficits don't matter. The intellectual tip of this sphere has often been think tanks that generate reams of analyses in support of a purely free trade and open borders. American posture. Point 38. Yet both common sense and several very good reasons tell us that trade deficits matter a great deal. Economic security. The economic security argument that trade deficits matter begins with the observation that growth in any country's real, inflation-adjusted gross domestic product (GDP).
Props to this document in a couple of contexts.
Government spending, business investment, and net exports.
The
between exports and imports.
largest of which is that
through implementation of the US reciprocal trade
they do regularly, occasionally say like, oh, these giant corporations do not have people's best interest at heart. Occasionally they'll say it.
The American president persuaded.
I've done that here a couple of times.
Protectionist tariffs and Japan to lower its formidable non-tariff barriers. America would surely sell more Florida oranges, Washington apples, California wine, Wisconsin cheese, and Harley-Davidson motorcycles. The resultant fall in the trade deficit would increase America's GDP, and the real wages of blue-collar America would rise from Seattle and Orlando to Sonoma and Milwaukee. But that's not all. Consider, too, the investment term in the GDP growth equation. When U.S. companies offshore their production to chase cheap labor or manufacture in a pollution-haven country like communist China or India with lax environmental regulations, the result is reduced non-residential fixed investment and a GDP growth rate that is lower than it would be otherwise.
There's just so much that doesn't make sense. They're talking almost negatively about these countries being pollution havens with no environmental regulation, when in this very document, they spent like many pages talking about how to deregulate our own environmental regulations. So that's a great example of the kettle meeting the pot. One time I used that phrase. Someone called me racist for using that. I said the old phrase of the kettle calling the pot black. And someone was just like, that's racist. And I'm like, you're losing it, bro. And then I clicked their profile. And it was a bunch of like, it was a right-winger trolling leftists. And all I did in response was link the Wikipedia article to the actual phrase so that anyone else reading would be like, oh, it's not a racist phrase. They were trying to have, they were still a conservative troll just trying to like piss off like neoliberals, which it didn't particularly work on me because I just didn't give a shit. I know damn well that anyone I've ever talked to would be like, oh, it's the you're using the idiom, the old saying about not being a hypocrite. And that's what that phrase means, the pot calling the kettle black. It's because they're both covered in soot and they're both cooking devices. So like, remember your humanity. You're still a person. Don't be a hypocrite. But this fucking dude was trying to have some sort of conversation about like, why is black bad? And it's like, well, it's because it's covered in soot. And like, they're like cooking utensils. Like, you understand? But there is like actually this like whole thing about how like the concept of blackness and the fact that black people are literally like they're literally not black. They're people with brown skin color that ranges from like super dark brown to like maybe like black, but also like light and brown and all these other colors. Like, why do we use that word specifically? And how is it associated with like the history of dirtiness? Like, you know, those old ads from like, I don't know, the 20s, where it's like a black kid and then like they use soap and they turn white or something. Like, yes, there's like this whole like anti-black thing going on. But I don't think that phrase should be bad. It has like Italian origins or some bullshit. Like, no, Spanish origins? I can't remember. But I'm going to keep using that phrase until I'm dead, probably. It's a really clear and obvious phrase. And I don't think anyone's ever being hurt by it, so. You think the people of color in my life would give a shit? No, not a single fucking one of them cares.
Suppose, for example, that under the US RTA,
but that, you know what? That's what the U.S. does. The U.S. calls the U.S. is the pot. China is the kettle.
America would surely sell more Florida oranges, Washington,
We're all
California wine,
states.
Wisconsin cheese, and Harley-Davidson motorcycles. The resultant fall in the trade deficit would increase America's GDP, and the real wages of blue-collar America would rise from Seattle and Orlando to Sonoma and Milwaukee. But that's
Often don't spend enough time talking about how GDP actually fucking matters to individual people.
When U.S. companies offshore their production to chase cheap labor or manufacture,
like, for a document that seems so obsessed with the sort of premise of being like they're posturing as populist and like cosplaying it. What they don't do is explain how any of this shit is actually good for people. Like, how is this good for you watching? Like, how is this good for me, random person reading? Right? No, like, this entire part of the document has talked about these elitist, high-level, high-class, high-wealth systems of power, such as economics and trade and all this other bullshit. It's gone on and on about those topics.
indeed not matter as foreigners turn our trade deficit dollars.
But how is that actually good for individual people? How the fuck are these systems even valuable to keep and maintain? Like they want to violate globalism by being more protectionist ourselves and also being aggressive with China and all this other bullshit. Why don't they just like pause for a second and be like, man, fuck this economic shit. This is not helping people. We should do something different. Why isn't that happening? Why are those brain blasts not occurring to these people?
Wealth transfers offshore as conquest by purchase. To Buffett, the big danger is that foreigners will eventually own so many U.S. government bonds that Americans will wind up working longer hours just to survive and service that foreign debt. There is an even bigger national security danger, however, that Mr.
Already work longer hours because of our own corporations fucking crystallizing wealth at the top. What are you talking about?
Like communist China that is intent on world hegemony. By buying up America's companies, technologies, farmland,
intent on world hegemony. You have an entire section in this document about our foreign communication systems where we use propaganda to influence other countries.
In this scenario, might America thereby lose a broader war for America's freedom and prosperity, not by shots fired but by American cash registers ringing up made in China products? Might America even lose a broader hot war because it sent its defense industrial base abroad on the wings of a persistent trade deficit? It follows that for both economic and national security reasons, trade deficits do indeed matter.
Did they just say that? Might America even lose a hot war, a violent war of aggression, because it sent its defense industrial base abroad on the wings of a persistent trade deficit? So they're saying Americans need to keep building our own weapons. That's what they're saying. They're saying we got to make sure we're making our bombs here locally. They got to be homegrown apple pie. Can't have China make our bombs. They'll fuck us over. Oh, I just lost my webcam. That's funny. Uh-oh. Racer. My racer thing is dead. Hella dead. Oh, that's unfortunate. There goes my camera for a bit. I'll deal with it. So now they keep edging the concept of hot war with China. And they're like fully obsessed with it. Alright, let's see if there's a way I can get my my other camera. That didn't even work. It's that broken. Uh-oh. That would be the first time the stream got scuffed enough that I actually lose my camera. That would be really unpleasant. Yep, it's just me making a single funny face. That's hilarious. Okay, properties. Are we gonna bring it back or no? No? Okay. Let me preview my camera. Nope. It is not happy at all. Wow, this is a very unhappy. My software is not happy at all right now. Cool, I'm back. Wonderful. They are edging war with China. It is creepy as shit how hard they are edging a hot war, a hot violent war with China. God damn.
Wings of a persistent trade deficit? It follows that for both economic and national security reasons, trade deficits do indeed matter. It is therefore of critical importance that we bring America's global trade back into balance through free, fair, balanced, and reciprocal trade, and that we do so through the kind of policy initiatives and reforms recommended in this chapter. Personnel is trade policy. Having a clear set of trade and industrial policies to achieve one's economic and national security goals, while essential, is not enough. The lessons of the Nixon, Reagan, and Trump administrations teach us that personnel is policy, or, in this case, that bad personnel will mean bad trade policy. 39 That is why it will be equally critical to the next president's trade policy agenda to have key personnel in place who not only have the skills to implement the policies, but also have the firm commitment to do so. During the Trump administration, President Trump's key policy advisors and cabinet officials clashed on the issues of international trade and combating Communist China's economic aggression. As much as President Trump did on the trade front that was bold and innovative, and as much as he achieved by challenging Communist China, too much of his trade policy was disrupted or derailed by key personnel who did not share the president's vision of fair, balanced, and reciprocal trade.
So it's never Trump that's wrong. It's always his personnel. He needs better personnel.
The most obvious position to get exactly right is that of the United States Trade Representative. The USTR is at least putatively the top official on trade policy, and it is critical that this position be filled wisely. Historically, during Republican administrations, the USTR has been a free trader who rarely challenged the protectionist and mercantilist policies of America's trading partners and typically would seek to expand global trade. The Trump administration broke this globalist Republican tradition by appointing as USTR Attorney Robert E. Lighthizer, who not only had a keen understanding of the various legal levers a president can use to advance trade policy, but also was committed to the president's fair, balanced, and reciprocal trade agenda. The next administration should make every effort to find someone with that understanding and that commitment to fill this position. Less obvious, but almost as important, is the need to fill the position of Under Secretary of Commerce for International Trade wisely. One of the most important functions of the International Trade Administration, which is an agency in the Department of Commerce, is to impose anti-dumping and countervailing duties against trade cheaters who dump products below cost into American markets or unfairly subsidize their exports. In fact, much of the cheating that does take place in the global trading arena can be addressed through such anti-dumping (AD) and countervailing duty (CVD) cases. Within the West Wing itself, it is equally critical that the National Security Advisor, the Chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors (CEA), and the Director of the National Economic Council (NEC) all be aligned on trade policy. During the Trump administration, with the notable exception of the President's third National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, and third CEA Chairman, Tyler Goodspeed, this regrettably was not the case. Finally, and perhaps surprisingly, the Secretary of Defense plays a key role in trade policy, at least when it comes to advancing Section 232 cases. Under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, the President has the authority, through tariffs or other means, to reduce imports from other countries if the President determines that such reduction or elimination would threaten to impair the national security. As a practical matter, the Secretary of Commerce spearheads any Section 232 cases, but in order to proceed with a Section 232 case, Commerce must obtain sign-off from the Secretary of Defense. When President Trump wanted to implement steel and aluminum tariffs, he had a willing servant in Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross. However, Secretary of Defense James Mattis resisted. Mattis simply did not understand a key tenet of the Trump administration: economic security is also national security. Without vibrant steel and aluminum industries, it will be difficult for America to provide the Pentagon with the kind of weapons it needs to defend the homeland. Conclusion. A Harvard professor once told me during my doctoral thesis days that if I tell you how it is, I've told you why it can't change. Despite the obvious exploitation of American farmers, ranchers, manufacturers, and workers by the international trading system and communist Chinese aggression, powerful political forces nonetheless exist that profit from the status quo. The stark lesson of this chapter is that America gets fleeced every day in the global marketplace, both by a predatory communist China and by an institutionally unfair and non-reciprocal WTO. Addressing these two challenges would go a long way toward restoring American greatness, both economically and militarily. Ignoring these two challenges will simply continue the parasitic draining of the American manufacturing and defense industrial base. Author's note: the author alone assumes responsibility for the content of this chapter, and no views expressed herein should be attributed to any other individual. However, the author would particularly like to thank Joanna Miller for her dedicated work and significant contribution to the chapter. The case for free trade can't last.
Alright, are we suddenly on a... Is this a copy? Did it copy a section? No, that can't be. No, I haven't read this stuff. I mean, I've seen NAFTA come up a few times, but I don't think I've seen this exact stuff happen so far. Nope, okay. Alright, new section, technically new section, seems about the same, it's just more trade policy. We'll start here. Come on, read it.
Is about more than goods and services, it is a statement of American identity. Our trade policy choices reveal America's values and where we put our trust. Do we place our trust in Washington elites to revive a declining country, or do we trust in America's tradition of entrepreneurs and everyday people blazing new trails? Do we follow China by copying its strong-arm trade policies, or do we lead China and the rest of the world by forging our own path? Our trade policy decisions will tell you what we Americans really think of ourselves.
Framing is so weak.
A conservative vision for trade. The policy recommendations.
Responding to your aggression with similar aggression, we're forging a new path.
Its economy, and its people. They are based on data showing decades of American progress with all.
And again, this macroeconomic shit is so complicated and dumb because, you know, let's say they do go super hard into
Policymakers should be modest about what they can accomplish through trade
implementing
policy and to
tariffs
exercise constant vigilance against abuses. For example,
on
consumer price
the importing of foreign goods into America, that's just going to raise prices for consumers bad as hell. So if the US Gov really wants to do something, they'll have to bail out the consumer while they do it, and there's no way. Oh, I've lost my camera again. Wow. That is not good. My camera's really unhappy, isn't it?
It is not a panacea for every policy.
Man, I wonder what the problem is.
Trade policy cannot favor one sector over another without causing trade-offs that outweigh the benefits. 41 Neither free trade nor protectionism will create jobs.
Maybe it's just this USB port. I'll use a different one.
But it has no long-run effect on the number of jobs. Labor force size is tied to population size more than anything else. The American people are smart and sophisticated enough to hear these truths. It is not just conservatives who overestimate the power of trade policy. Recent progressive attempts to use trade policy to advance whole-of-government initiatives on climate, equity, and other issues will fail for the same reason that a hammer cannot turn a screw. It is the wrong tool for the job.
Okay, 1 second. Let's try this.
Similarly skeptical of recent attempts on the right to use progressive trade policy to punish political opponents, remake manufacturing, or accomplish other objectives for which it is not suited. The next administration needs to end the mission creep that has all but taken over trade policy in recent years. Trade policy works best when it sticks to trade and treats separate issues separately. Trade agreements since the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, have been increasingly...
We still have the right microphone set up. Let me double check that the filters are good. Okay, so we still have audio. Properties.
Were a side agreement to NAFTA in the 1990s,
and now it doesn't even see the camera. Wonderful.
Of the United States, Mexico,
that's awful.
Canada Agreement, USMCA, in
oh, I'm going to keep fighting this. I can still hear, though.
The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, IPF, that the Biden administration is currently pursuing consists entirely of trade-unrelated provisions. Negotiations are steering clear of trade altogether. Trade-unrelated provisions are routinely hijacked by progressives and rent-seekers and dilute otherwise worthwhile trade agreements. They also create additional points of contention that make agreements unnecessarily difficult to pass. A conservative trade policy should limit trade-unrelated provisions in trade agreements.
Restart the PC to set up this camera?
Conservatives should ignore international
that would be a problem.
On labor, environment, intellectual property, and
I
other
sure hope not.
issues.
I might just have to swap to a different one for the last several hours of this video.
Rather than letting them die in committee, with each providing an additional sticking point for delaying the others.
Stupid. All right, give me a sec.
Trade policy must also take seriously the reality that in a democracy, the other side holds power about half of the time, but progressives run most agencies almost all of the time. A cardinal rule in public policy is not to give yourself powers you wouldn't want your opponents to have. That means building institution-level safeguards against mission creep to limit abuses. Foreign policy considerations are not as separate from trade as are labor or environmental standards. China deserves special consideration, as does the World Trade Organization, WTO, along with its possible successors or alternatives. While trade is not the star of American foreign policy, it does play a supporting role.
I can still hear while I'm doing this. I'm just going to walk around and put some stuff together to get a camera going.
Making economic and cultural inroads inside them. The next American president should use this aspect of trade to the nation's advantage. Drawing from America's roots. In 1776, nearly 90% of Americans were farmers. For 10 people to eat, 9 had to farm. That meant fewer people could be factory workers, doctors, or teachers, or even live in cities, because they were needed on the farm. Accordingly, life expectancy was around 40 years, and literacy was 13.42. Today, fewer than 1% of Americans work on farms, yet America is a net exporter of food. People have infinite wants, so as rising productivity pushed some people off of farms, there were countless other jobs they could do. In true American fashion, many of these jobs were in brand new industries. This was possible because the same can-do cultural values that inspired the American founding were accurately reflected in its new government. The U.S. Constitution created what was then the world's largest free trade area, and it did so on purpose. 43 The combination of the American self-improvement ethos and the large, free internal market guaranteed by the Constitution yielded intensive growth on a scale never before seen. Many displaced farm laborers got jobs making the very farm equipment that made intensive agricultural growth possible, from railroad networks to cotton gins. Each fed the other. Agriculture and industry are not separate, they are as interconnected as everything else in the economy. None of this could have happened had the government enacted policies to preserve full agricultural employment. Understanding value. Just as communication is impossible without agreed-upon definitions of words, coherent policymaking is impossible without coherent categories. Policies are not likely to succeed when they try to separate an interconnected economy into arbitrary categories. The factory worker who builds a tractor does as much to boost farm production as the farmers themselves, yet economic planners put them in different categories. This problem is baked into industrial policy, as progressive planners have learned again and again. A conservative approach to economic policy should treat value as value, whether it is created on a farm, in a factory, or in an office. A dollar of value created in manufacturing is neither more nor less valuable than a dollar of value created in agriculture or services. Pursuing access to growing markets. American history holds lessons for today's conservative trade policy. Some modern analysts see a correlation between high tariffs and high growth and confuse it for causation. 44 But 19th century America teaches a different lesson. While the Constitution banned internal tariffs in the U.S., international tariffs reached their highest levels in U.S. history during the 19th century, beginning with the 1828 Tariff of Abominations. 45 At their peak in 1830, the average tariff on dutiable goods was 62%. 46 Fortunately, however, the tariff's distorting effects were outweighed by market growth elsewhere. The 19th century saw Western expansion and a growing population, including millions of immigrants, working for the American dream. America's growing internal free trade zone allowed for still more specialization and more trade across state borders. America's geographic expansion ended long ago, but population growth, the U.S.-led rules-based international trading system, and the steady 75-year decline in tariffs after World War II have made possible decades of continued prosperity. Intensive growth requires specialization, and the larger the market, the more specialization is possible. Fighting pessimistic bias. Farmers' share of the population continued to decline through this entire period, yet employment remained high, and the Chart 1. U.S. real GDP per capita. Real gross domestic product per capita, in chain $2012. Seasonally adjusted annual rate. 1950, 1955, 1960, 1965, 1970, 1975, 1980, 1985, 1990, 1995, 2000, 2005, 2010, 2015, 2020. Source: Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, real gross domestic product per capita. https://fred.stlouisfed.org/series A939RX0Q048 SBA, accessed March 2, 2023. aheritage.org. Economy continued to grow.
Going crazy.
Factories were not the only beneficiaries of agriculture's productivity boom, and the
Slowly
labor
getting
services also
shit
grew.
working again,
In
chat.
fact,
Give me a bit.
service sector employment surpassed manufacturing employment around 1890, far earlier than most people realize. 47.
Oh,
Pessimistic
what does that
bias
mean?
is one of the most important cultural problems that conservative policymakers need to address. In trade, as in most other areas, few people ever zoom out to see the big picture,
Hey,
which is
that
one
looks
reason
like
why so
something to
many
me.
people mistakenly believe that U.S. manufacturing and the U.S. economy
That
are
looks
in
like a
decline.
camera to me.
The data do not show American economic carnage. They show more than 2 centuries of intensive growth, made possible by a growing internal market throughout the 19th century and a growing international market in the post-World War II era. The transition from farm to factory did not shrink the labor force or farm output. Later, the transition from factories to services did not shrink the labor force, factory output, or farm output. Both transitions affected the types of jobs, not the number of jobs. Americans today can more easily afford everything from air conditioning to flat-screen televisions and smartphones, and trade is one reason why. Bigger markets mean more specialization, more innovative ideas, more customers, and more people from whom to buy. America's official unemployment rate went as low as 3.5% during 2022, while real per capita gross domestic product, GDP, rose to an all-time record. Clearly, people who wanted to work were able to find work that paid well, even as manufacturing jobs grew more slowly than service jobs. Implementing the conservative vision. Vision will be crucial for the next conservative administration, but nuts and bolts policies are also important. Making the conservative vision for trade a reality will require several actions, some of which may prove to be more difficult to achieve than others. Specifically, implement tariff relief to help counteract inflation by reducing prices for affected goods, as well as to strengthen supply chains and boost manufacturing. And Section 232, 201, and 301 tariffs. Work with Congress to pass legislation repealing those provisions so future presidents cannot abuse them. Resist calls for more spending on trade adjustment assistance, which is often hijacked for progressive ends. Technology and changing tastes displace 6 times as many workers as does trade, yet those workers get no such special treatment. Displaced workers should receive the same benefits regardless of the reason. Remove never-needed supply chain restrictions, which give families fewer places to which they can turn. The recent shortage of baby formula, for example, was caused largely by heavily protectionist regulations. Strength and resilience come from openness.
That's a little bit of a wide angle,
recognition
guys.
For allies. If a product is safe enough for European or Japanese consumers, then it is safe enough for Americans as well, and vice versa. This can reduce regulatory costs and open new markets.
Well, that's such a wide angle. It's such a difference.
Which serves mainly to
Okay,
subsidize
well,
foreign buyers'
we're
purchases
running
of
with
goods
this
from a
still.
handful
This
of
is how I've looked the whole
well-connected
time, by the way.
manufacturers. Repeal the Jones Act.
I already have it on like the narrowest view too. So.
Work with Congress to restore the President's Trade Promotion Authority, which would
Okay,
expedite
back to playing, I guess.
with the United Kingdom,
Do
Switzerland,
other
Taiwan, the
I've gone through like
European
4
Union, and
different
other
cameras
allies,
in
and
this
keep
stream.
trade-unrelated provisions out
Over
of trade
30
agreements.
hours or whatever.
Restore the World Trade Organization's dispute resolution process to full strength. Create a successor to the WTO, assuming that it has been fatally wounded, that is open only to liberal democracies. This would prevent authoritarian countries like China from abusing the organization for their own ends. Adopt a
Yes,
multi-pronged
I know.
China
30
strategy to
seconds
convince
off
the Chinese
again.
government to reform its illiberal human rights and trade policies.
Please let the
L
sun come
rejoined
up
the
in this game. I
Trans-Pacific Partnership,
cannot see
TPP,
anything down
whose
there
11
right now.
members are developing institutional trade norms in an important
I can now
geopolitical
make the
region without
Cyclops,
US
but I
input
need
or involvement.
lithium. I need
L reorient the proposed
teeth.
Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for prosperity to focus only on trade issues,
Once I make the
which it currently
Cyclops, like,
ignores in favor of progressive.
all I have to do is like 3
Wishlist
upgrades,
policies. L
and
strengthen
then, I don't know,
diplomatic
that's like a
pressure
lot of
in
work
concert
done.
with allies
Uh-oh.
against Beijing's abuses. Encourage cultural and intellectual engagement with the Chinese people, remembering that blue jeans and rock and roll helped to win the Cold War. Tariff relief. When people try something repeatedly and it still doesn't
Okay,
work,
so they
should
got a little
stop
bit
doing it,
humanizing
especially
for a
when the
moment there,
consequences turn
saying,
out to
hey,
be just what
Chinese people are
conservative
still
economists have long
people. We should
predicted
have
would be
conversations
0.49
with them
tariff.
instead of
The
just
proper
treating them
reform
all
is
as
not only to get rid of the individual
communists to be
tariffs that have
killed,
backfired, but also to
or
build
to go to war
institutional
with,
safeguards
or
against future
spies.
abuse. We are 5
There's a
years
little
into
bit of
the biggest
humanization
experiment
in
with
there,
tariffs since the
but
Great Depression,
it's still
and the
a lot
results are in.
of
The new tariffs raise consumer prices for ordinary
sliding
Americans
in
by about
American
$1,200
exceptionalism
per household every year,
nonetheless.
and benefit only a small number of special interests. Steel and aluminum tariffs, enacted on national security grounds, angered allies. Beijing made not a single substantive reform in response to 4 rounds of tariffs plus an attempted Phase 1 agreement. The Biden administration has left the tariffs in place and is expanding them to pursue progressive policy goals. The first order of business for a new administration that is focused on American workers and consumers is to repeal all tariffs enacted under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 196,251 and Sections 201 and 301 of the Trade Act of 1974.52. The President can do this unilaterally, and Congress can do it through legislation. The second order of business requires Congress to pass legislation repealing Sections 232, 201, and 301.
We are on page 801. 883 pages to go. We are less than 100 pages right now.
Congress used those provisions of law to delegate some of its taxing authority to the president because it was having trouble passing clean tariff legislation in the 1960s and 1970s.
83 pages left.
Unless
That's
and
huge.
until this
That's
constitutional
awesome.
question about delegation is addressed, important reforms are available to the next Congress and the next president. Congress faced a problem of collective action in the 1960s and 1970s. As a whole, members generally wanted to lower tariffs, but few individual members were willing to remove tariffs that benefited special interests in their districts. Trade bills were invariably watered down through amendments and log rolling. The thinking was that the president, whose constituency is the entire
Oh yeah, by the way,
nation,
I've
would be
played
less
this
prone to special
entire...
interest pleading
I've
than
done
members of
all of
Congress
these
would be.
streams
So
off of a
Congress
laptop.
delegated some of its tariff-making
Just to be
authority
entirely
the
clear.
president in 1962 and
It's
1974
been a
trade
laptop the
legislation.
entire time.
Delegating tariff-making might have worked in the short run, but in the long run, it was both constitutionally dubious and ripe for abuse. That came to pass in 2018, the Section 232 steel and aluminum tariffs, invoked in 2018 against Canada, Europe, and other allies on national security grounds, raised car prices by an average of $250 per vehicle and gave America the world's highest steel prices. They also harmed the construction, canned food and beverage, and other metal-using industries. While this may have benefited the steel industry itself, each steel job saved cost an average of $650,000 per year that had been taken from elsewhere in the economy. 54 That is no way to strengthen American manufacturing.
I need to mine this lithium, god dang it.
In 2019 that the Section 301 China tariffs cost the average household $831 per year, 55 a figure that has likely increased with inflation. The new tariffs have a clear record of failure, as conservative economists almost unanimously warned would be the case.
But yeah, I have
Job
done
number
this
one for
entire
the next
stream off of a
administration is
laptop.
to return to sensible trade policies and eliminate
So,
the destructive Trump-Biden tariffs.
that has
Strengthening
surprised
American
me
manufacturing.
deeply.
The decline of American
I
manufacturing
was
is a
completely
common
certain it would
political
not be
trope in
able to
both
do
parties,
anything. I mean,
and
obviously,
vote
I've had
for a
to
call for more government
swap
intervention.
cameras. I swapped
This
the first
narrative has
camera because it
several
didn't look good
problems.
enough, and then the second
One
camera
is
just
that
started
American
acting stupid.
manufacturing output is currently at an
It would
all-time
require me
high.
to restart
The
the
record was not set
computer
during World War
and stop
II
the
and not during
stream.
the 1950s boom.
I'm not doing that.
Output did not peak when manufacturing
Thankfully, I
employment peaked
have
in
many
1979 or
alternatives,
during
and I
the
am
Reagan
always
economic
ready.
revival in the
So,
1980s.
but they're not
It
all
is actually
webcams.
higher
This is
now
a
than it has
GoPro,
ever been.
which is a
American
very interesting
manufacturing
look.
is buoyant because each manufacturing worker's productivity is also at an
Very
all-time
different
high. The key to prosperity
angle
is doing more with
and
less.
view.
The next president should ignore special interests and populist ideologues who want government to do the opposite through industrial policy, trade protectionism, and other
Be real,
failed
I can't
progressive
find any
policies.
more lithium.
It takes surprisingly
2 is all
few
I
people to achieve
needed
America's
in
record
the
high
beginning
manufacturing output, currently about 13
to
million
build this.
people out
Oh,
of a
look, more
workforce of
lithium.
than
That's
160
bullshit.
million, compared to the 1979
Come
peak
on.
of 19.5 million people out of a workforce of 104 million.
Salt isn't
56
as important.
productivity growth
I'll
has
say
freed the
it.
time and talents of millions of people for other additional uses.
What, could I have found it?
The
I could have
belief that
found it on the
manufacturing
side
is
of this
efficient
rock
for
this whole
services to grow
time.
is the zero-sum fallacy against which sensible economists often warn. It is anathema to the optimism, hope, and confidence that are the natural birthright of conservatives. Growing productivity enables more output of both manufacturing and services. That is why America continues to
There
have
was
sustained
lithium
booms
on
and
the side of this
record-setting
rock the
world
entire
GDP
time.
despite
This
the
is
long-run
bullcrap.
decline in manufacturing employment. Economists distinguish between two types of growth, extensive and intensive. Extensive growth
There's
is
so
the
much good
Soviet
stuff
and
on this
Chinese model
rock.
for manufacturing. If you have more people use more resources,
I'm about
they
to
will
get
create
killed,
more
aren't I?
output.
More lithium. What?
Extensive growth is doing more with more. Intensive growth is doing more with
Again,
less.
this is...
That is where
Hey,
America's
you know, I've played the
superpower
game a
lies.
lot, but not as much as
The story of
Minecraft.
American manufacturing is one of
Because
intensive
I don't
growth dating back to our
have
agricultural origins.
existing strats in my
Conservative
brain
leaders should draw
ready.
on this history to position
Like
America
I
for
don't
continued
know
success.
every biome
With
and
intensive growth,
everything
it
that's
is
in
not
every
manufacturing
biome.
or services.
I
It
don't
is
know yet.
manufacturing and services. Retaliatory tariffs. Raising tariffs on another country almost always
No,
invites
lithium's more
retaliatory
important.
tariffs against the U.S. The latter tend to be directed at politically sensitive American exports. Retaliatory tariffs by both China and American allies in response
is
to the
huge.
2018 steel tariffs were targeted primarily
We'll
at American
also need that for a
agriculture.
variety of important
According
items.
to the U.S.
Alright, I'm
Department of
heading back to
Agriculture,
the ship.
those tariffs cost farmers $27 billion with losses concentrated particularly in heartland states. 57. Retaliatory
Okay, we're
tariffs
talking about
also targeted
retaliatory
US industries
tariffs,
that were
even
not
though we
protected by
already
tariffs.
have done and
Many
do
imports are coming
retaliatory
inputs into
tariffs.
US manufacturing. The motorcycle maker Harley-Davidson was already
It's...
facing higher production costs.
There's
as
no such
domestic
thing
steel
as fairness
producers
in
raised their
war.
prices to accommodate the new steel tariff. A retaliatory tariff on
This
its
really is
motorcycles
like
imposed by the
economic
European
warfare.
Union
They
further
need to
raised
reinforce that
exports
there
and
is no
hurt its
such thing
export
as
business.
fairness.
Harm to such innocent bystanders was another unintended, though foreseen, consequence. Chart 2. Total U.S. industrial production. Source: Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, Industrial Production, Total Index. https://fred.stlouisfed.org/series/indpro, accessed March 2, 2023. aheritage.org. Federal Reserve research shows that the tariffs have cost about 75,000 manufacturing jobs while creating only about 1,000 jobs in the steel industry, not including the effects of the retaliatory tariffs described above. 58 Higher steel prices added an average of $250 to the price of new cars, and larger trucks, the vehicle of choice in rural America, were hit even more dramatically. 59. Trade is generally a win-win for both participants. Tariffs are a lose-lose game,
here?
with
What's
the
the plan?
tariff
What did I
raiser
do?
losing affordable goods, the tariff target losing exports, and the tariff raiser losing again from retaliatory tariffs. Tariffs also have an additional overlooked hidden cost. Companies redirect resources to dodge tariffs by redesigning products, switching to more expensive suppliers,
Why does it
using
look
lower
like
quality materials, and lobbying. This might be good for lawyers, but it is bad for the economy. These resources could have been used instead to make a better product more cheaply.
This is
Conservatives warned against
too
retaliation
close
from
at
the
this
beginning.
point.
It was exactly what happened after the 1930 Smoot-Hawley tariffs that worsened the Great Depression. 60.
Okay, I gotta
Undoing
fix that. That's
normalization of
ridiculous.
protectionism. Inertia is one of the strongest forces in politics. Radical new policies can become the new normal very quickly and are extremely difficult to unwind if they backfire. This happened with the Trump administration's progressive turn on protectionism. The Biden administration quickly undid the Trump administration's conservative regulatory reforms but left its progressive, self-defeating trade policies in place, in many cases even strengthening them. 2 presidential administrations is a long time in politics, and the next conservative administration will have a tough time getting tariff relief past a bureaucracy that dislikes change and special interests that will fight hard to preserve their special privileges. But given the stakes for future American prosperity, it will be worth it. Dealing with disruption. It is true that trade is disruptive. Though its long-run effect on employment is approximately zero, in the short run it can cost jobs and even depopulate towns. 61 America's resilience depends on its ability to adjust, but successful and timely adaptation is generally spontaneous in nature, the work of human action but not human design. Planned adjustment by governments has a much poorer track record. Context is also important to adjustment efforts. Technological change costs approximately 6 times more jobs as does trade, though, again, only in the short run. 62 Any argument made against trade's disruptive effects applies even more strongly to technological change, yet no one seriously argues for reversing the dramatic changes the internet has wrought. More than 11 million American jobs turn over through hirings, firings, retirements, layoffs, and resignations every month. 63 And nearly 85% of all jobs turn over in the course of a year. Yet America has suffered only 4 bouts of double-digit unemployment during the past century. 2 of them, the Great Depression and the comedown from the 1970s stagflation, were due to monetary mismanagement, not trade. 64 The third, the Great Recession, was due to a financial crisis worsened by monetary mismanagement, not trade. 65 The fourth was due to COVID-19 lockdowns, not trade. 66 Using trade restrictions to slow this churn is a mistake for 2 reasons. 1, trade is at best a minor contributor to job churn compared to other factors like technology, changing consumer tastes, inflation, and business cycles, and 2, churn is evidence of a healthy economy. Agricultural economies have low job churn and low living standards. When people see better opportunities, they should be allowed to pursue them. To do otherwise slows economic growth, harms individual dignity, removes humanity from our policies, and can contribute to societal ills like depression, addiction, and isolation. Trade adjustment could be made easier by regulatory reforms to remove its attendant friction. These include
these
less
things go away
restrictive
so I
zoning
can
and permit
actually
rules,
use this now.
occupational licensing reform,
Okay, the
automatic
best I
sunsets for
got.
new regulations,
I don't
an
know
LA
what the issue is,
presidentially
though.
appointed regulatory reduction commission that would examine the code of federal regulations each year and send repeal packages to Congress that include old, obsolete, redundant, and harmful regulations. 67 People who need help should be able to get it. Progressive trade policies help only special interests while harming the very people they are supposedly intended to help. Trade adjustment assistance. Trade adjustment assistance is a popular policy for aiding displaced workers. Though flawed, it is a bargaining tool that can potentially help to get sound trade policy adopted. A conservative administration should approach trade adjustment assistance with caution and use it as a last resort political bargaining tool and not as a first resort policy. Funding for job training programs and the like will typically find its way to labor union slush funds, left-leaning nonprofits, and other progressive causes that will not necessarily help displaced workers. A better approach to trade adjustment assistance, if it must be expanded, is direct cash transfers. Not only would this prevent progressive hijacking of programs and their funding, but cash is the most flexible type of aid. It treats people as adults and lets them make their own choices about their next steps. Major life decisions should be made by individuals for themselves, not for them in Washington.
Trade adjustment so much.
Trade adjustment assistance should treat workers who lose their jobs to international trade the same as workers who lose their jobs for any other reason are treated. While that will not likely come to pass in the near future, steps in that direction are possible. Technological change displaces 6 times as many workers as trade displaces, yet workers displaced by technology get no special treatment. Nor should they. Unemployment remains low because it grows alongside population, and real wages continue to rise over time. Trade displaced workers should be eligible for the same benefits for which anyone else is eligible, no more and no less. Supply chain lessons from the baby formula debacle.
The baby formula debacle.
Into supply chains.
I'm sure that had nothing to do with the greed of the actual corporations running those groups.
But remains an ongoing concern.
Completely certain.
Domestic
had nothing
baby
to do with that
formula
at all.
producers benefit from a decades-old tariff that averages 17%, which is effectively high enough to shut imports out of the market. As if tariffs were not enough, other requirements also help keep competition out of the market, ever-evolving labeling requirements and nutritional standards that, conveniently for domestic manufacturers, are always just slightly different from international standards. As a result,
I'm playing like this for now.
Shortage in 2022, approximately
way fucking funnier.
of the country's baby formula was produced domestically. With foreign competition out of the way, other government policies helped to concentrate almost the entire domestic formula industry.
What is
into
wrong
4
with
firms.
this? What is going on?
Roughly 40% of baby formula purchases are made by state-level food assistance programs, which typically do not let families choose their own formula brands. Instead, they must buy from a single producer, which guarantees producers large market shares in states where they win contracts. This situation gives incumbent producers a cozy existence but puts consumers at risk. Like all protectionist policies, the benefits are concentrated in the hands of a few producers while the costs and risks are widely distributed. With so many eggs in so few baskets, whenever something goes wrong, which is inevitable even when nobody is at fault, families find themselves scrambling. That happened early in 2022 when contamination entered a Michigan facility that makes about 40% of America's baby formula. Trade protectionism all but eliminated other options for many parents, who suddenly found empty shelves and sky-high prices for an essential item that many of them were already struggling to afford, while families in other countries were unaffected. In response, Congress passed the Formula Act 68 in the summer of 2022. The act eased formula tariffs and loosened never-needed labeling requirements and
looks
other
good enough. We're rolling.
But it was temporary. It expired at the end of 2022, leaving families still vulnerable to the
Did nothing
cascading
but screwing with
consequences
my
that ensue
camera
if
for
one thing
half of
goes
this
wrong at
entire
only
stream.
one plant.
Oh, hi, Andrea.
The baby formula debacle has 2 lessons for the next administration.
Uh-oh. Oh,
The
okay,
administration needs to attack the root of the problem. Temporary fix-it bills are better than nothing, but they leave the rot in place. The president needs to encourage bold liberalization. Strength comes from openness. In the real world, markets fail. Factories will get contaminated, and health inspectors will not always be as thorough as they should be. The baby formula market is essentially a natural experiment in self-sufficient industrial policy. When something went wrong, that single failure point crashed the whole system. It should not be that way, and the next president can change it. Part of the problem is that the supply chain analogy itself causes sloppy thinking. In a chain, a link is connected only to the link ahead of it and the link behind it and not to any other links. Real-world supply chains are more like networks in which each point connects directly to countless others and is rarely more than 6 degrees of separation from nearly anywhere on Earth. Because market failures happen all the time, it is important to have as many connections as possible. Americans need access to more ways to adapt and reroute around failure points, especially for essential products like baby formula.
I completely agree. Is this like a thing they disagree with?
But free trade makes our families and communities more resilient. Loosening restrictions similar to the ones that stunt the baby formula market would make it
I actually agree. The better you network, the better. That's actually a good thing.
That come with every crisis,
Am I accidentally agreeing with something? Uh-oh.
Shortage or as expansive as a pandemic. Mutual recognition. A simple way to reduce friction in supply networks is mutual recognition of other industrialized countries' regulatory standards. This can be done either in a larger trade agreement or independently. For baby formula, this would mean allowing in brands that meet European Union standards even if they do not meet Food and Drug Administration (FDA) labeling requirements. Infants' nutritional needs do not change across borders. If a formula is deemed healthy for European babies, then it is also healthy for American babies. The reverse is equally true.
Interesting.
Mutual recognition could help to open new
Their
markets
lines
for
of logic
American
are so
producers in countless
interesting.
industries and give American
Making
consumers
me
access
smaller.
to
There's
countless
no
new
reason
products
for
on
me to
more
be
competitive terms.
so
For
much of the
example,
screen.
U.S. regulations require washing machine power cords to be at least 6 feet long, while the UK requires them to be at least 2 meters. 69. The difference, about 6 inches, affects neither safety nor performance, but it does keep American-made washing machines out of an important foreign market. A mutual recognition policy would circumvent the problem. Given the recent
American-made washing machines are made for 120 volts.
policies like mutual recognition that have
The gauge of their wire is different
while
as a consequence.
regulatory footprint.
European washing machines are going to have the 240 volt, 220 or 240, I don't remember which.
And other governments with high standards
So they're going to have a different gauge wire on their power cord.
Large benefits for pharmaceuticals because America's FDA drug
I
approval
imagine that
process is
that's
both slower and more
inconvenient
expensive than those of other countries without being any safer.
for the American companies, so they just make
Americans would
one
gain
model and
access
sell to
lower-cost
America.
medical treatments,
What?
And American pharmaceutical companies could defray development costs and innovate faster by gaining access to more markets, all while cutting prices.
All
The
right.
Jones Act. The Jones Act,
We got
worked into
shit to
Marine Act
do.
of 1920 requires that ships traveling between U.S. ports must be U.S. built, U.S. owned, and U.S. crewed. In practice, this is an America Last policy that has decimated the American maritime industry. 71 Because of Jones Act regulations, American-built ships cost 3 to 4 times more to build than foreign-built ships cost. As a result, the entire Jones Act fleet is down to just 92 ships, many of which are old and obsolete. In fact, Jones Act-compliant shipping is so expensive that it is often cheaper for East Coast ports to import oil from Vladimir Putin's Russia than it is to send it up the coast from Houston or New Orleans. The national security, to say nothing of energy security, implications of reliance on Russia for oil and gas are obvious. The Jones Act's original national security justifications are just as dubious. The Act's goal was to guarantee a sizable fleet of American ships that could be pressed into war service if needed. Aircraft carriers and other post-1920 naval innovations have made this argument obsolete. An $800 billion defense budget has plenty of room to maintain a navy to defend American security interests around the world. The U.S. Navy would likely prefer not to use Jones Act ships anyway, because they tend to be older and in poorer condition than its own ships or similar foreign-made but domestically owned commercial ships that could also be pressed into service. As with many other industries, U.S. shipbuilding could be the envy of the world if it could operate in a free market, but the maritime lobby prefers a quiet, cozy existence on the dole even as it harms American consumers and national security. The next conservative administration should unleash American potential by unilaterally enacting Jones Act exemptions wherever allowed, as currently happens most years during hurricane season, and working with Congress to repeal the Jones Act. Trade and inflation. The post-COVID inflation spike may be over long before the next administration takes office, but keeping it under control should remain a high priority. Free traders should not oversell their case by saying that liberalization would solve inflation. Inflation is predominantly a monetary phenomenon, not a trade phenomenon, but tariff relief can help at the margin by immediately lowering prices on tariffed goods and slightly boosting long-term growth. 72 While this would not affect the money supply, which is inflation's key variable, even rolling back the tariffs enacted since 2017 would likely have a positive effect on the consumer price index. The easiest way to curb inflation, or to create it, is for the Federal Reserve to work the monetary side of the equation, but the real output side has a similar effect on prices.
Steel ingots.
Lifting trade barriers is one way to boost output.
Looks
It
like.
also has the added benefit of requiring no additional spending. At the very least, this can make the Federal Reserve's job easier as the spending excesses of Congress and President Biden continue unabated in the coming years. It is important not to oversell trade's inflation benefits as a cure-all, but at the margin, it can help. The next administration should keep this in mind as it tries to cope with this politically volatile issue. Trade and foreign policy. We have seen how trade liberalization would boost the domestic economy and make American businesses more competitive, but conservative trade policies also benefit America's foreign policy interests. Policymakers should therefore, negotiate multilateral and bilateral trade agreements.
2, 3.
Reform the World Trade Organization or build a successor organization with membership limited to liberal democracies. Repeal the Jones Act to replace Russian energy imports with domestic production. Develop a multifaceted, long-term China policy that takes seriously America's biggest foreign policy threat and deals with it on several fronts. National security. The most persuasive arguments against a market-oriented trade policy come from another national objective, national security. Protectionism and similar progressive policies tend to weaken American security, but trade creates peace. The more countries trade, the less likely they are to fight one another and the more robust their supply networks will be. Going to war with customers is bad for business. Without a strong economic
Lubricant lead
interest in
and an
continued US
advanced
investment in
wiring kit.
exports,
Okay,
for example,
I'll go make that
China's
next.
behavior would likely become increasingly less predictable and more dangerous. Anyone who thinks Chinese Communist Party, CCP, General Secretary Xi Jinping and the government in Beijing are bad actors now, which they are, should consider what would happen if the Chinese convinced liberal countries
did
like
not
the United
even
States
load
to
in the
decouple from them,
pillars holding
leaving them
up
free to
this
pursue whatever
habitat.
policies they wish without the significant counterweight that America can provide.
I think I need
That is one reason for Xi Jinping's emphasis on
couple
centralization and
those.
self-sufficiency. He does not like international
copper
pressure about his
wire.
government's human rights
I need
violations and bad faith
gold.
trading policies, and decoupling from trading partners like America is one way to avoid that pressure. A less constrained China would be
Upper
poorer
one.
but much more unstable and dangerous to its neighbors and to America than it would be if it still had to engage
Computer
regularly
chip.
with the rest of the world. Trade Promotion Authority. Trade agreements
No,
can take years to
get 2
negotiate.
gold and a computer chip.
One way to accelerate the process is for Congress to grant the President trade. Promotion Authority, TPA. It was first granted under the 1974 Trade Act, which contains the sections 201 and 301
Advanced
tariff
farming kit
delegations.
made. Easy.
TPA, then called Fast Track, has aided
Easy,
several trade
easy,
agreements,
easy.
including NAFTA and the USMCA, which took effect in 2020. TPA has lapsed before during slow periods in trade policy, most recently in July 2021, and remains lapsed today.
The biggest
President should
issue
work with Congress to
is,
renew
and
TPA
it
to
always
rationalize
is,
negotiations
making
for upcoming
enameled
trade
glass.
agreements with the United Kingdom, the European
Requires
Union,
finding
and others. Both supporters and critics have
a
questions
variety of
regarding TPA's
inconvenient
implications
items.
for the constitutional separation of
Mostly
powers,
just the
and
stalker
policymakers
teeth.
should take those questions seriously.
I need
As things
3
currently stand,
enameled
Congress
glass.
has some
Okay, so
oversight
first I'm going
powers
to
over
make
the
3
president's
glass.
negotiations under TPA,
Glass.
but they are limited. Congress can increase its oversight by passing
2
new
glass.
legislation superseding relevant provisions of the 1974 Trade Act. However, that is a double-edged sword.
3 glass.
A Congress that largely favors free trade could
Not
exercise
to
oversight to
enamel
keep
it.
the president on the straight and narrow in trade negotiations.
1, 2, 3.
A
Okay,
progressive
now I need to
Congress
go
would
look for
instead
stalker
insist that the
teeth
president
over
negotiate for as
here.
many trade-unrelated provisions as possible to benefit
So I've got to
labor and
look
green
for
constituencies while pushing progressive
pieces of
policies on the US
titanium that
and
are
its
being
trading
played
partners.
with by these
On balance, a
guys.
single voice at the negotiating table that is subject to congressional oversight is the best posture for American workers and consumers. A fractious Congress has yet to demonstrate the capacity to negotiate with other nations, but it can help to hold the administration accountable. Trade agreements with the United Kingdom, European Union, and others. Even with a renewed TPA, trade agreement negotiations will likely take years. The Trump
Here's what
and
I'm
Biden
gonna do. I'm gonna try to
administrations were not inclined
befriend
to start
one
the
of these
process,
guys
so
real
that
quick.
job may well fall to the next administration.
Bring your
In
paper.
that sense, the
I'm
delays
gonna
may
need like
end up
4
being
of you
worth it.
minimum.
If there is one lodestar to follow, it is to restrict these agreements to trade issues only. Ever since NAFTA, trade-unrelated provisions have taken on a greater role
Do
in trade
4 and
agreements.
see if I can get them
These
to
create
be
sticking
friends
points
with
and are
me.
routinely hijacked by rent-seeking special interests and progressive ideologues who demand subsidies, carve-outs, and economically distorting labor and
This is a
environmental
pretty good
standards
flat
that have
area.
nothing to do with trade. If governments are to negotiate these issues, they should do so in separate agreements so they do not torpedo efforts to liberalize and engage with allies.
To
Trade agreements
attach
should
these
lighten
to
burdens,
3.
not create new ones by attempting to address non-trade issues. Policy leaders in the United States and the United Kingdom, including experts from the Heritage Foundation and the Competitive Enterprise Institute,
Teeth.
have prepared
This.
a model trade
Thank
agreement
you.
along these
Very
lines.
good.
Point 73 along with TPA renewal. This would greatly reduce negotiating costs. This template is also readily adaptable
grab
for
yet
agreements
another.
with Europe and any other allies that are willing to liberalize
Will
their
you drop a
economies and build a
tooth?
stronger alliance with America. The draft U.S.U.K agreement includes an accession chapter to allow others to join on the same terms. Restoring or replacing the WTO dispute resolution process.
Where?
The World Trade Organization,
You're
as we know it, may be mortally wounded. This deprives the U.S. of the WTO's dispute resolution process, under which the U.S. had won 85% of the cases it brought. The WTO's slowdown
Drop a
began under
tooth,
the Obama
please.
administration, which refused to allow appointees to the WTO's appellate board, which as a consequence is now non-functional.
Here, eat this.
Both the Trump and Biden administrations
it.
have continued the Obama administration's approach.
Okay, sure, whatever.
That means that every case in the dispute
Y'all
resolution
ain't giving me
process will
teeth, though.
sputter to a
Give me
halt
your
as parties
teeth.
file appeals that cannot be heard. If the WTO is no longer fit
Drop
for
a
that purpose,
tooth, bro.
it may be better to look in a different direction. More than 20 years ago, a Heritage Foundation senior fellow proposed that America and other free economies should form a global free trade alliance that is open to all countries that
Only
adhere to a
dropping no
truly free
teeth,
market
though.
system with appropriate
Eat it,
safeguards
come on.
such as property rights, lack
There you
of
go.
corruption, and enforcement of contracts. Point 74 alongside a general agreement on
Listen,
low
I'm
tariffs.
trying
The
to
alliance
befriend
would
you
move to
guys,
reduce the
but you
effect
are
of
not
non-tariff
helping.
barriers, such as the previously noted baby formula ingredient. And labeling barriers, by basing trade around the principle of mutual recognition. Such an alliance could be started by a trade agreement between the United States and, for example, the United Kingdom with an accession chapter.
Am I
allowing
not
others
caring
to
much
join
because
if they
I
meet the
don't...
criteria.
Ooh, 2 teeth. Huge.
It would be essential
Nice,
for a
okay.
global free trade alliance to avoid the WTO's most serious problem.
So that kinda
exemptions
worked.
from its rules that are granted to
Kinda.
developing countries. When China joined the WTO in 2001, it was granted developing nation status.
You gonna
which
drop
it
a
continues
tooth?
to use
Oh,
to dodge rules
nope,
that should apply
okay.
to it. Other countries have used that
Drop a
status
tooth,
to
though.
delay needed
Both you.
reforms.
Up
Rule
teeth.
exemptions
Oh,
give some
that's not a
countries a
tooth.
perverse incentive to remain poor and
That's the third
autocratic.
one. W.
A global free trade alliance would allow
Huge.
the U.S. to enjoy the benefits of a rules-based international trading system without the WTO's
Am I
shortcomings.
not paying a lot of attention because I don't have a
Negotiation costs
child
would be lower
or a
because the
baby,
countries would
so I
already
haven't
be
cared much
allied on
personally
many
for
issues.
baby formula?
In
I mean,
addition,
it's
there
highly
would be no
relevant for
separate tiers
the
with
well-being
different
of
rules,
fucking
and this
everyone,
would give
but like,
developing countries an incentive to liberalize. In addition to being good for its own sake,
is that like why I
liberalization would give them
don't
entry into
know
a
much
prestigious
about
club
baby
that tilted
formula?
toward America's orbit and away from China's. Closing the Export-Import Bank. The Export-Import Bank, EXIM, is an unusually clear example of how vulnerable trade protectionism is to being hijacked by special interests. Point 75 in most years.
Alright,
About half
making
of Exim's business
some
benefits a single company, Boeing.
Enameled
Their
glass.
relationship is so cozy that Exim's nickname around Washington is the Bank of Boeing. Unlike most other agencies, Exim has a charter that expires. Congress must renew it periodically, or else the agency will
What else do I
permanently
need? 2
close.
power cells?
Its current charter expires at the end of 2026. Closing this New Deal-era legacy agency would be a conservative victory on a number of fronts. It is also a winnable battle. Congress just needs to do nothing. Conservatives have both foreign policy and economic reasons to oppose EXIM. EXIM has a long history of providing financing for authoritarian governments
It
in
just
China,
makes
Russia,
its
and the
own
Middle East
power
that
cells.
often
I don't have
oppose
to make
US
any
foreign
extras.
policy interests, and its
That's
deals
cool.
often oppose US economic interests. EXIM financing also harms
1,
domestic
2,
airlines.
3.
Many EXIM
Over
financing
here.
deals enable foreign state-run airlines to buy Boeing jets at a discount.
1, 2, 3.
These foreign airlines,
That's
subsidized by the U.S. government,
lubricant,
then compete
that's it.
directly with U.S. airlines on international routes.
Hell yeah.
More recently, the Biden administration has expanded
Alright,
EXIM's mission to advance progressive
I
policy
have
goals,
no idea where
including
I put
limits on
my...
financing for projects that involve fossil fuels or contribute to climate change, preferential
There
treatment
it
for
is.
renewable
Cool.
energy projects, and quotas for projects that benefit
Make
women
me a
owned and
Cyclops.
minority-owned businesses.
That would be giant
All of these would
progress
raise EXIM's default
in a
rates,
4-hour
putting
deep
taxpayer dollars at
playthrough.
risk.
Low key.
The strongest argument in EXIM's favor is that it boosts U.S. exports by financing projects that would otherwise never receive financing. We now have evidence
Heck
that
yeah.
this argument is false. EXIM does not finance additional exports. Instead, it largely substitutes for other forms of export financing that would occur anyway. EXIM's authorization lapsed in 2014 to 2015 because of conservative opposition to renewing its charter. During this lapse, EXIM maintained its existing portfolio but was unable to take on new business. Boeing reported no
Yeah.
trouble finding alternative financing and even reported record
Well,
profits
I need to
during
go
EXIM's
get
lapse while working
the
to fulfill a
upgrade
7-year
module for this
backlog of orders.
immediately.
76.
The one that recycles engine
EXIM
heat.
boasts an extremely low default rate, but that is because of selection bias. EXIM
They already
overwhelmingly
talked
takes
about
on low-risk
EXIM. Why are
projects
we
that
why are
private
we back
banks would
in?
be
Is
happy to
this
finance,
is
although
this
this
another
admittedly
example
could
of
change
it like
somewhat with EXIM's
copying
narrow mandates to finance climate and
words?
other policy-focused projects.
Copying
EXIM
sentences
is
from
also a
this?
textbook example of regulatory capture. ELID has a long record of deals with authoritarian governments. ELID subsidizes direct foreign competitors of domestic businesses. ELID has been hijacked by progressives to advance their climate and other preferred policies. ELID's beneficiaries have proven they can get adequate financing from private banks.
Efficiency module.
EXIM's
Huge.
charter expires
Cool.
at the end of 2026.
I'm never gonna make a
The
Seamoth.
agency
I'm
will
just gonna
close
make a
automatically unless Congress and the president decide to extend
deep
it.
dive, buddy.
Closing EXIM
The
should be
thing
one
that
of
looks
the
like a
next
shrimp.
administration's easiest decisions.
A swimp.
Adopting a multi-pronged China strategy.
Who doesn't love a swimp?
An effective American policy toward China needs to take a realistic view of the country, its leaders, their strengths, and the
Alright, and then I'm going to
challenges they
promptly
face.
essentially
It should be comprehensive
deconstruct
and
this
flexible.
entire
A threat to
place.
CCP is dangerous,
and take
perhaps
everything
now more
with
than at
me.
any time since Mao Zedong, as Xi Jinping continues to use strong-arm tactics to consolidate his power and saber-rattling to challenge the international order. At the same time, recent revelations about China's official statistics overstating its GDP by 30% track well with other problems that were already known. 77 These include one of the world's worst demographic
Charger?
aging curves thanks to China's one-child policy, a population that may
Indicator?
already be
Both these
declining,
come with
an
me.
unsustainable debt load that is already causing problems, countless failed boondoggles, from empty cities to its underwhelming Belt and Road Initiative, that are wasting significant resources. Xi Jinping's authoritarian turn.
I want to tell you, if you read this document and you see what Trump has already done regarding...
America has
Uh-oh.
its problems, but
Did
it
I
is in
just
better
lose
shape
it?
than
Oh,
China
I
on
just
nearly every
lost
measure,
my camera.
especially in the long run.
That's not good.
While the facts on the ground should inoculate the next administration against the most strident China fear-mongering circulating in the media and in Washington, that does not
What
mean
just
that the
happened
government
there?
in Beijing is no threat to American
Processing
interests.
files. There are no
The
files to
question is,
process.
what should we do about it?
Never
A
recorded
serious
anything.
China policy will require American
We're starting to
policymakers to
cancel,
integrate
yeah.
doctrines,
away.
institutional prerogatives, expertise, and
sweet.
realistic objectives. Traditional cabinet-level bureaucracies like those at the Departments of Defense, State, and Commerce will need to work together to pursue a comprehensive American strategy. Scores of incremental, narrowly targeted policies are necessary. They will not make for good soundbites on cable news, and many will operate slowly and out of sight from most news cycles even as progress is made. An effective China policy must also allow for adaptation because the CCP will not sit idly by. As people react to developments, America needs flexible options. Trade isolationism is inherently inflexible because it reduces the number of contact
To do it
points
like
with
every
China.
half hour or something, that would be
This is a tougher political sell than loud, simplistic
really
pure
annoying.
alliance, but going the extra mile to solve these difficult coordination problems is
Okay.
vital to
Also, does it
America's
look
interests.
closer now? Does it look
Trade
less
and
mess?
engagement with China are necessary if we are to contain the threats that
Whatever.
China poses to its
I'm
neighbors and to
losing
the
it.
U.S. The next administration should align
I
China's
swear
developing
the
nation
camera looks
status in
better
the
now.
WTO
What
and other
happened?
international
Whatever.
organizations. China is an advanced manufacturing economy and should be treated as such, even if its political and legal institutions
Fucking
remain those of a
losing it.
developing nation, to prevent it from
Material
exploiting its status
modules,
to gain special
fabricator.
privileges.
Cool, give me a
LU is a
fabricator.
target, not a blanket. There should be actions against Chinese firms that are known to
Give
have engaged
me
in unfair trade
a
practices such as intellectual
battery
property theft.
charger.
Rather than blanket tariffs or non-tariff barriers aimed at entire Chinese industry sectors, firms that act in bad faith should be targeted individually. This policy was employed to good effect
Computer
early in the
chip,
Trump
fiber mesh,
administration,
silver,
but
or
was abandoned
titanium.
in
That will
favor of
come
a less
after.
effective blanket tariff policy.
First, I need to
rejoined
move
the
all this other
Trans-Pacific
crap in.
Partnership. Dropping out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement might have been the Trump administration's biggest trade policy mistake. The TPP was already negotiated and would have strengthened an alliance against China.
TPP, it sounds like they did not want
East Asia and
the
Americas. America's departure created
They actually
tensions and
disagree with
infighting,
something. That's
distracting
weird.
The US and its allies from the goal at hand, countering
Very
China.
weird indeed.
The other 11 TPP countries continue
They are
without
fundamentally disagreeing with something.
American input or influence under the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership (CPATPP) to develop a modern
Wow, that
institutional
was
framework to contain Chinese commercial
A
imperialism.
big word that was really unnecessary.
Rejoining this alliance should be a top priority in the next conservative administration's China policy. Accession negotiations are likely to be difficult, given that the CPATPP suspended several clauses that were important to the United States, such as provisions relating to patents and aspects of investor-state dispute resolution, when the U.S. pulled out of the TPP agreement in 2017. Diplomatic and economic pressure against Beijing will be more effective when its largest trading partners work in concert. Beijing's diplomats will have a hard time employing a divide-and-conquer policy against a united front of the sort that the TPP offers. It'll refocus the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity on trade. President Biden began the process to create IPF in 2022, but any agreement will likely still be under negotiation when the next administration takes office. IPF is similar to the TPP, but its member countries are mostly China's neighbors in Asia. Like the TPP, it seeks to create an alliance to push China toward the rule of law, but the Biden administration so far has left trade entirely out of the agreement. Instead, the IPF negotiations are focusing entirely on non-trade issues like climate and labor policy issues that give progressives opportunities to impose their policies on other countries and provide rent-seeking opportunities for labor unions and politically connected businesses in renewable energy and other favored industries. IPF has the potential to be a powerful diplomatic tool that helps to bring countries into America's orbit and away from China's. Beijing's chauvinistic approach to foreign policy has alienated most of China's neighbors and allies. They follow along because they lack alternatives.
Did you use the word
IPF
chauvinist?
and the TPP could offer them a way out
There's
and
no
make
way.
it easier for China's smaller neighbors to stand up for themselves in a united front as they move toward American-style institutions that protect civil, political, and economic liberties. IPF could do all that, and so could the TPP, but America currently has no voice in the TPP,
so
and
close.
IPF
God
risks
dang it.
becoming little more than another tool that progressives can use to force their policy wish list on countries that don't want it. From the perspective of IPF's members, the Biden administration's approach is little different from Beijing's. The next
That's because America's approach is oftentimes barely different from Beijing's also. Again, you guys have outlined that in this entire document.
While pressuring Beijing to make needed reforms.
They made it incredibly clear that economically the U.S. at a foreign scale acts very similar to China indeed.
The economy is inherently inferior to free market capitalism played a role. So did diplomatic, military, and economic pressure from free countries. But culture was just as important, and it did not come from any government. Blue jeans and rock and roll helped to win the Cold War as much as any deliberate policy did. So did images of fashion and prosperity in American movies and television shows like Dallas. Such informal bottom-up processes will also play a vital role in helping to turn China from an authoritarian threat into a freer and less hostile power. It will take a long time, and the slow process will garner few headlines, but it can work. A conservative administration will support efforts by ordinary Americans to engage with ordinary Chinese people through social networks, internet memes, fashion, movies, student exchange programs, tourism, and more.
They're really starting to
China's
reuse a
leaders are
lot
set in
of
ways,
sentences.
especially with Xi Jinping presumably
I'm getting
now in
pretty
power
sick
for
of
life.
it.
But the younger generation is more open than their parents were, more individualistic and open to change. Effective outreach to the Chinese people will need the same humility that other sound trade policies require. Government-directed cultural and economic outreach risks being heavy-handed and could backfire. Everyone involved needs to know that the process is generational in scope and will not work overnight. At the very least, Washington should stay out of the way as much as possible when regular people want to contact each other across national, language, and cultural divides. Each of these many components, from tariffs to
Agreed,
trade
that was actually
agreements to
very
culture,
reasonable.
is a small part of a larger China policy. Many are
But-
not attention-grabbing and cannot be put into sound bites. Cultural engagement is not something Washington can plan. China's own demographic and debt problems, along with aging leadership and growing discontent over the zero-COVID policy, might even cause
Okay,
an
maybe I
internal
won't make it
collapse.
bad. I just think it would be
American
neat.
policy must therefore be prepared to face any contingency. Conclusion. A conservative trade policy needs a conservative vision. America's founding institutions, based on free trade and entrepreneurship, have made America the world's leading economy and will help keep America strong through the next century. However, recent departures from those principles have hurt America's economy and weakened alliances that are necessary to contain threats from Russia and China.
There's no
Reaffirming
way
those
we're
principles
only
through
on
policies
page
of openness,
810.
dynamism, and free
Oh,
trade will
man.
boost America's economy, make us more
Take
resilient
forever.
against crises, and remove opportunities for progressives and rent seekers to use the levers of government for their own purposes.
God dang it, it's gonna take
Rediscovering
forever.
conservative principles on trade policy and embracing America's long history as the world's leading commercial republic are an important part of restoring a government of, by, and for the people. Authors note, the preparation of this analysis could not have been completed without the valuable support of a small, sturdy, and principled community of trade policy experts. Among them, my colleagues at the Competitive Enterprise Institute, Ryan Young, Ian Murray, and Ivan Osorio were essential. The author alone is responsible for this report. No views herein should be attributed to any other individual or institution. End notes. Warren E. Buffett and Carol J. Illumis, America's growing trade deficit is selling the nation out from under us. Here's a way to fix the problem, and we need to do it now. Fortune, November 10th, 2003.
Okay, cool. Moving on. Oh, I was reading the literal pages before 18, 19. Oh, no, it just hadn't updated. Yeah, we were like at 17 minimum. Holy crap, this is a lot of citations. Oh dear. Section 5, independent regulatory agencies. I don't really know what that is. Actually, do I know what that is? I don't remember one of these. What was it? It's not the Federal Reserve, right? It was one of these earlier. It was an independent regulatory agency. It didn't touch any of the branches of government, but it still had a job. I can't remember. It might have been like the train one. Actually, I don't remember. I guess that's what we're talking about now.
Addition to the executive department
60 more pages.
Discussed previously, a number of independent commissions exist that are loosely affiliated with the executive branch. In general, the president can appoint people to these commissions but cannot remove them, which makes them constitutionally problematic in light of the Constitution's having vested federal executive power in the president. Nevertheless, they exist, their constitutional legitimacy has generally been upheld by the courts, and there will be an opportunity for the next administration to use them as forces for good, particularly by making wise appointments. Few appointments to these commissions will be as important as the president's selection of the next chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, FCC. In Chapter 28, FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr writes that the FCC chairman is empowered with significant authority that is not shared with other FCC members. Under a new chairman, he writes, the FCC needs to change course and bring new urgency to achieving four main goals, R, Ining in big tech, P, promoting national security, U, unleashing economic prosperity, and E, ensuring FCC accountability and good governance. The FCC, writes Carr, has an important role to play in addressing the threats to individual liberty posed by corporations that are abusing dominant positions in the market. Nowhere is that clearer than when it comes to big tech and its attempts to drive diverse political viewpoints from the digital town square. Carr writes that the FCC should require more transparency from big tech, which today offers a black box.
Fucked over internet
and it should issue an order that interprets Section 230, which provides protection from legal liability to online computer services that mandate for leadership, the conservative promise. Moderate content in good faith, in a way that eliminates the expansive, non-textual immunities that courts have read into the statute. In addition to taking unilateral action, Carr says, the FCC should work with Congress on legislative changes to ensure that internet companies no longer have carte blanche to censor protected speech while maintaining their Section 230 protections. Carr writes that during the Trump administration, the FCC took an appropriately strong approach to the national security threats posed by the Chinese
there
Communist
was
Party.
a
The FCC put Huawei
person
on its
leading
covered list of entities,
this.
its list of those posing an unacceptable risk to U.S. national security. Carr writes that TikTok also poses a serious and unacceptable risk to U.S.
She
national
can't remember
security,
really
while
anymore.
providing Beijing with an opportunity to run a foreign
Very well
influence
could have been,
campaign
but
by
it was
determining the
what
news
is
and
it called?
information
Internet
that the app
something,
feeds to
right?
millions of Americans, and the next administration should ban it. What's more, Carr writes, U.S. businesses are aiding Beijing, often unwittingly, in its
They
effort
really
to
hate
become,
TikTok,
by
huh?
2030, the global leader in artificial intelligence. In part, they are doing so by providing Beijing access to their high-powered cloud computing services. Carr asserts that it is time for an
Why do
administration
they
to
say
put in place a
Beijing like that?
comprehensive
Why does
plan
it
that
say
aims
it
to
like that?
stop U.S. entities from directly or indirectly contributing
Man,
to
I want to
China's
put a
malign
bed in
goals.
here though. I just think
Former
beds are
Federal Election
awesome.
Commissioner Hans von Spakovsky writes in Chapter 29 that while the authority of the President over the
Here.
actions of the Federal
we
Election
go.
Commission is extremely limited, the President must ensure that the Justice Department, just like the FEC, is directed to only prosecute clear violations of the Federal
I
Election
really wanted to
Campaign
put a
Act.
bed in here
The
for the
department must not
premise of it.
construe ambiguous provisions in a way that infringes on
Where could
protected
I
First
put it?
Amendment
There's nowhere else to
activity,
put
he
it.
writes.
Dang.
The FEC has 6 members, 3 from each party, and its determinations require a majority, so they require the support of at least one member of each party.
About another wall
DOJ
locker
should
here.
not prosecute an individual for supposedly
Oop.
violating the law when the
Huge.
FEC has previously determined that a similarly
Huge.
situated individual
putting
has
all
not
the
violated
titanium
the law,
there.
writes von Spakovsky.
I can always reach it
Moreover,
quickly.
he writes that the president should vigorously oppose all efforts, such as the language in the For the People Act of 2021, to change the structure of the FEC so that it would have an odd number of members. The current structure ensures that there is bipartisan agreement before any action is taken and protects against the FEC being weaponized. In Chapter 27, David R. Burton writes that the Securities and Exchange Commission (SEC) should be reducing impediments to capital formation, not radically increasing them by pushing a costly climate change agenda, as it is doing under the Biden administration. Discussing the Federal Trade Commission, Adam Kandub writes in Chapter 30, antitrust law can combat dominant firms' baleful effects on democratic notions such as free speech, the marketplace of ideas, shareholder control, and managerial accountability as well as collusive behavior. 826. Section 5, Independent
Why
Regulatory
did I make all those
Agencies.
power cells?
With
Why did I do
government.
that?
Under the Biden FTC,
Why
he
did
writes,
I do
first
that?
try to get out of antitrust liability by offering climate, diversity, or other forms of ESG-type offerings.
Man, I
says
wanted
that
to put a
state AGs
bed
are far more
here.
responsive to their constituents than the
I don't
federal
know what I'm
government
gonna do.
generally is, and he recommends that the FTC establish a position in the chairman's office that is focused on state AG
Ooh,
cooperation and
are they
inviting
allowed
state
to
AGs
place
to
things
Washington,
here?
D.C.
Am I?
to
That's
discuss
crazy.
enforcement policy in key sectors under the FTC's jurisdiction, big tech, hospital mergers, supermarket mergers, and so forth.
Still wanted to put a bed
27
here.
Financial Regulatory Agencies Securities and Exchange Commission and related agencies. David Ark Burton. The primary purposes of the laws and regulations governing capital markets and of capital
the
market
bed there,
regulators
like-
are to deter and punish fraud and other material misstatements to investors, foster
That
reasonable,
would be
scaled
pretty
disclosure
annoying
of information that is
long-term, I
material
can
to
tell.
investors' financial outcomes and proxy voting decisions,
I wish
and
there were like a
maintain
cot
fair,
or
orderly,
something.
and efficient secondary capital markets. The Securities Act of 19,331 and the Securities Exchange Act of 19,342 reflect nearly 9 decades of rushed and haphazard amendments. The securities laws are now extremely complex and do
Come
not
on,
constitute
let me
a
put it in the
coherent, rational
corner.
regulatory regime.
Dumb.
For example, the current SEC has proposed a climate change reporting rule that would quadruple the costs of being a public company. 3. This would have a substantial adverse impact on existing companies. Over
can deal
time,
with
it would
that.
also
I'm not-
substantially reduce the number of public companies and therefore the number of investing options available to ordinary Americans. The Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, should be reducing impediments to capital formation, not radically increasing them. The SEC and Congress should fundamentally reform the securities laws governing issuers, broker-dealers, exchanges, and other market participants. Among other things, they should establish a simplified and rationalized securities disclosure system with L3 basic categories of firm, private firms, and intermediate category of smaller firms, and public firms. L reasonable, scaled disclosure requirements, and
Okay, this would be
L specified secondary
ridiculous.
markets for the securities of these firms. 5. The SEC needs to be reformed to achieve its important core functions more effectively, to improve transparency and due process, and to reduce unnecessary regulatory impediments to capital formation. 6. Under current law, the SEC chairman has the authority to make almost all of the necessary changes. 7. Unfortunately, financial regulators, particularly the SEC and the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, FINRA, are poorly managed and organized. With regulatory authority delegated by the government, both the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, CABE, and FINRA have proved to be ineffective, costly,
Honestly,
opaque, and
like,
largely impervious to reform.
Item
To
management was
reduce
like half
costs and
this
improve
video game.
transparency, due process, congressional oversight, and responsiveness, CABE and FINRA should be abolished, and their regulatory functions should be merged into the SEC. Furthermore, Congress should establish an independent board or commission and charge it with producing a detailed report within 18 months that examines the degree to which the regulatory functions of the various other so-called self-regulatory organizations, SROs, which are no longer self-regulatory in any meaningful sense, should be moved to the
Too
SEC.
much stuff.
8.
This sucks.
Discrimination based on
All
immutable
right, I'm gonna put
characteristics
all
has no place in
organics
financial
down
regulation.
here for now on. So it's
Offices
gonna
of
be
financial regulators
lubricant.
that promote racist policies,
Silicone rubber
usually
can
in
be
the name
down
of
here.
diversity, equity, and inclusion, should be
I'll put
abolished, and
salt all the
regulations
way
that
over
require
here for now.
appointments on the basis of race, ethnicity, sex, or sexual orientation should be
Not
eliminated.
an issue with
Equal protection of the law, equal opportunity, and individual
not
merit
having
should
enough
govern regulatory decisions. 9.
refined electronics
Congress has given
section.
the SEC broad,
Essentially,
general exemptive authority, 10, but the SEC has used this authority only rarely. It should use this authority significantly more often to reduce the regulatory burden on issuers, particularly smaller entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurial capital formation. Financial regulators should remove regulatory impediments to entrepreneurial capital formation. 11. In the absence of the fundamental reform outlined above, the SEC should simplify and streamline Regulation A, the small issues exemption, 12
would
and
be a
Regulation CF,
refined
crowdfunding,
electronics.
13 and preempt blue sky
Oh, I'm
registration
gonna
and
keep losing my
qualification
camera, aren't
requirements
I?
for all
That's
primary
not
and
good.
secondary Regulation A offerings.
Okay.
14.
So it's
They'll
doing
either
auto power
democratize
off. It's
access
like
to
power
private
saving
offerings
right
by
now.
broadening the
I'll have to
definition
go through
of
its
accredited
settings
investor
in
for
a second.
purposes of Regulation D or eliminate the accredited investor restriction altogether. 15. L allow traditional self-certification of accredited investor status for all Regulation D Rule 506 offerings. L exempt small micro offerings from registration requirements. 16. L exempt small and intermittent finders from broker-dealer registration requirements and provide a simplified registration process for private placement brokers. 17. L exempt peer-to-peer lending from federal and state securities laws
Actually
and reduce
provides
the
the
regulatory
no
burden on
signal
Regulation CF debt
bars.
securities.
That's kind of funny.
L make the Title I
I mean-
Emerging Growth Company, EGC, exemptions permanent for all EGCs.
Okay.
L reduce the regulatory burden on small broker-dealers and exempt privately held, non-custodial broker-dealers from the requirements to use a PCAO-registered firm for their audits. Congress should L amend the Internal Revenue Code to disregard crowdfunding and Regulation A shareholders for purposes of the 100 shareholder limit for subchapter S corporations. 18. Better capital markets to improve capital markets. The SEC should L preempt blue sky registration, qualification, and continuing reporting requirements for securities traded on established securities markets,
They don't mean
including a national securities exchange
kind
or
of
an
blue sky,
alternative
right?
trading system. 19. L terminate the Consolidated Audit Trail, CAT, Program. 20. L abolish Rule 144 and other regulations that restrict securities resales and instead require a company that has sold securities to provide sufficient current information to the market to permit reasonable investment decisions in secondary sales.
No, no.
Congress
Let's do
should
this.
prohibit the SEC from requiring issuer disclosure of social, ideological, political, or human capital
And my
information
inventory
that
is
is
gonna
not
be full,
material
isn't
to
it?
investors' financial, economic, or pecuniary risks or returns. The proposed SEC climate change rule, which would quadruple the costs of being a public company, is particularly problematic. Point 21L repeal the Dodd-Frank mandated disclosures relating to conflict minerals.
All right, let me
safety,
pause.
resource
I'll
extraction, and
see if I
CEO
can
pay
turn off
ratios.
the
Point 22L oppose
autopilot.
efforts to redefine the purpose of business in the name of social justice, corporate social responsibility, CSR, stakeholder theory, environmental, social, and governance, ESG, criteria, socially responsible investing, SRI, sustainability, diversity, business ethics, or common good capitalism. L prohibits securities regulators, including SROs, from promulgating rules or taking other actions that discriminate, either favorably or unfavorably, on the basis of the race, color, religion, sex, or national origin of such individual or group. SEC administration to enable it to achieve its core mission more effectively, the SEC should 23L publish better data on securities offerings, securities markets, and securities law enforcement and publish an annual data book of time series data on these matters. Specifically, the SEC Division of Economic and Risk Analysis, DERA, needs to do a much better job of collecting and reporting fundamental data regarding offerings, regulatory costs, violations, enforcement, investors, state regulator taxes, fees and activities, and other matters. L ensure that SEC resources flow toward its core functions and away from ancillary and support functions or from missions that do not fall within the SEC's statutory charge. L ensure that any 3 SEC commissioners are empowered to place an item on the agenda and to receive adequate staff support to do so even without the chairman's support. L eliminate all administrative proceedings, APs, within the SEC except for stop orders related to defective registration statements. The SEC enforcement system does not need to have both district court cases and APs. Alternatively, respondents should be allowed to elect whether an adjudication occurs in the SEC's administrative law court or an ordinary Article 3 federal court. 24L end the practice of delegating the decision to initiate an enforcement case. The SEC chairman, and possibly the U.S. Government Accountability Office, GAO, should study whether other commission delegation of authority to staff should be narrowed and whether sunsetting of such delegation of authority should be required. Congress should require an Inspector General's, or possibly a GAO, report regarding SEC information technology spending and contracting. Spending appears to be much too high, and IT contracting is poorly managed. Statutorily limit the time for an investigation to 2 years with no extensions. Long investigations harm private parties and the quality of justice. With adequate management processes, the SEC should not need more than 2 years even for complicated matters. The SEC chairman should dramatically reduce the number of direct reports to the SEC chairman. Merge SEC offices that are performing similar functions. Reduce the number of managers per employee. CFTC administration and improved commodities and derivatives markets. Congress should modernize the definition of commodity, which is now largely a laundry list of agricultural commodities, 25 and clarify the treatment of digital assets. Clarify through an express amendment to the Commodity Exchange Act. CA 26 the circumstances that require a foreign swap trading platform to register with the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, CFTC, as a swap execution facility, SF, under Sections 2, I, 27 and 5H28 of the CEA. Currently, it is not clear whether having one or a small number of U.S. participants would require SAF registration under prior staff guidance, which has led foreign swap trading platforms to exclude all U.S. persons from their platforms or to go through the process of seeking an exemption from registration. Amends Section 2 of the CEA to authorize the CFTC chairman to remove the agency's executive director without a commission vote. To augment commissioners' independence, establish funding amounts for the commissioners' offices by statute with
Things
adjustments
I am
for
doing
inflation,
in a
with no
desperate
requirement
attempt
for a
to make this
commissioner
stream
to obtain budget
happen
or expense approvals from the chairman
is
or the
thoroughly
agency's
absurd.
administrative staff. The CFTC should allocate more resources to core agency functions rather than ancillary and support operations. Replace the existing position limits rule, which reduces liquidity and makes markets more volatile, with further delegation of authority to the exchanges to set position limits and position accountability levels where appropriate for the relevant market. Reduce overly prescriptive rules implementing the CFTC's core principles. Apply the definitions of U.S. person and guarantee in the CFTC's 2020 Rule on Cross-Border Application of Swaps Regulations, 2020 Cross-Border Rule, 29 to the regulatory requirements that remain covered by the CFTC's 2013 guidance on the subject, 2013 guidance. Point 30 currently, the definition of each of these foundational terms differs depending on whether the requirement in question is covered by the 2020 Cross-Border Rule or the 2013 guidance. Remove the regulatory categories of affiliate conduit and foreign consolidated subsidiary from the 2013 guidance and the CFTC's cross-border rule on margin for uncleared swaps, 31 respectively. These categories were replaced by the concept of a significant risk subsidiary for purposes of the 2020 cross-border rule because of widespread market confusion and compliance difficulties arising from their broad and vague scope. Digital assets. Both the SEC and the CFTC have been irresponsible actors in the digital asset area. They have had more than a decade to promulgate rules governing digital assets, yet the SEC has utterly failed to do so, and the CFTC has provided only minimal guidance. Instead, both agencies have chosen regulation by enforcement and have done it poorly. They neither adequately protect investors nor provide responsible market participants with the regulatory environment that they need to thrive. The SEC and CFTC should clarify the treatment of digital assets, coins or tokens. Specifically, they should promulgate a joint regulation providing that a holder of digital assets may not be deemed a party to an investment contract or an investor in a common enterprise unless, while the enterprise is a going concern, the holder is entitled to a share of the earnings or profits of the common enterprise or a defined flow of payments from the common enterprise in consideration of the investment or unless, upon liquidation, the holder has rights against the assets of the common enterprise. Otherwise, the digital asset shall be deemed a commodity to be regulated by the CFTC, not the SEC. Amend the definition of commodity to include digital assets that are not a security as so defined, and amend the definition of security to make it clear that a certificate, digital, electronic, or otherwise, that represents ownership of commodities and is convertible into a physical commodity on demand is not a security but a commodity. In the absence of regulatory action, Congress should enact legislation that achieves these goals. Improved regulation of the industry and SROs. Congress and the SEC need to conduct more robust oversight of self-regulatory organizations, and SROs need to be reformed. Otherwise, as discussed above, SRO regulatory functions should be merged into the SEC. The SEC, FINRA itself, or Congress should, in the absence of merging FINRA into the SEC as recommended, require that FINRA's Board of Governors meetings be open to the public unless the board votes to meet in executive session. Delegation of authority to staff should be narrowed in whether sunsetting of such delegation of authority should be required. FINRA's Board of Governors agenda be made available to the public in advance. Board minutes describing actions taken be published without delay. FINRA make available to the public in advance rulemakings that the FINRA board is expected to consider. FINRA arbitration and disciplinary hearings should be open to the public and reported. Require FINRA arbitrators to make findings of fact based on the evidentiary record and demonstrate how those facts led to the award given, except with respect to very small claims. These written FINRA arbitration decisions should be subject to SEC review and limited judicial review. Require that all SRO fines, including those imposed by FINRA, should go either to a newly established investor reimbursement fund or to the Treasury. SROs should not have a financial interest in imposing fines. Require all SROs to conduct meaningful cost-benefit analysis as part of the rulemaking process with respect to major rules. Require all SROs to publish rules in proposed format and seek public comment before they are submitted to the SEC or the CFTC. Require each SRO to submit an annual report to Congress with detailed, specified information about its budget and fees, its
I now have
enforcement
it set
activities,
to
including
not
sanctions and fines imposed by
turn
type
off
of violation and type of firm
every
or
15
individual,
minutes.
its dispute resolution
Oh
activities,
no,
and its rulemaking
we've got
activities.
screen tearing.
Congress should
I just don't care enough to
annual
fix it.
oversight hearings on SROs. Either make FINRA, the Municipal Securities Rulemaking
All right,
Board,
I've been
MSRB,
hearing.
and the National Futures Association,
I heard
NFA,
a number of
designated federal
things
entities and
regarding
establish an Inspector General with respect
digital
to financial
currencies.
SROs, including FINRA, the MSRB,
That's
and the
cryptocurrency, my
NFA
guys.
FINRA, the MSRB, and the NFA
I wonder
within
how
the
much
ambit of an
they're going to
existing
piss off
Inspector
crypto
General.
bros.
L
Crypto
requires
bros
the
are
SEC and
surprisingly
CFTC
conservative,
to publish
is
a
what I've
detailed
noticed.
annual report on SRO
I
security.
guess. Okay, maybe it's
Authors
not
note,
surprising,
the
but like,
preparation of this chapter was a collective
you know.
enterprise of individuals involved in the
I don't know. It's just sad.
2025 presidential transition
Just sad
project.
that they are.
All contributors to this chapter are listed at the front of this volume, but Paul Atkins, C. Wallace DeWitt, Christopher Iacovella, Brian Knight, Chelsea Pizzola, and Andrew Vollmer deserve special mention. The author alone assumes
Consumer
responsibility
Financial
for the content
Protection
of this
Bureau. I have
chapter, and no
heard
views
of the
expressed herein should be
CFPB
attributed to any
a
other
few
individual.
times, mostly
Consumer
from like
Financial
Louis
Protection
Rossman,
Bureau, Robert Bose.
talking about
The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB,
how
was
absolutely
authorized in 2010
fucked
by the Dodd-Frank
consumers
Act
get.
132 since the Bureau's inception. Its status as an independent agency with no congressional oversight has been questioned in multiple court cases, and the agency has been assailed by critics 33 as a shakedown mechanism to provide unaccountable funding to leftist nonprofits politically aligned with those who spearheaded its creation. In 2015,
It's gonna be
for example,
against consumer
investors
protections.
mistakenly accused
Goddamn.
the CFPB of diverting potentially millions of dollars in settlement payments for alleged victims of lending bias to a slush fund for poverty groups tied to the Democratic Party and planning to
These
create
are
a
some
so-called
crazy
civil penalty fund
accusations.
from its own shakedown operations targeting financial institutions that would use ramped up and Trump
Is there like a lot of shit I just don't know about this, or it's like what?
bankroll some 60 liberal nonprofits.
I mean, I guess I was just saying that it sucks at its job, but
Groups, 34. The CFPB has a fiscal year FY 2023 budget of $653.20 million 35 and 1,635 full-time equivalent FT employees. 36 from FY 2012 through FY 2020. It imposed approximately $1.25 billion in civil money penalties. 37 in FY 2022. It imposed approximately $172.5 million
doing
in
by
civil money
not
penalties. 38 These penalties are imposed by the CFPB
looking for ion cubes. I'm not getting myself any ion gear for like my scanner and my other stuff. I should go get ion cubes. I just realized I'm being stupid by not doing that.
The CFPB is headed by a single director who was appointed by the president to a 5-year term. 40 Its organizational structure includes 5 divisions: operations, consumer education and external affairs, legal, supervision, enforcement and fair lending, and research, monitoring and regulations. 41 Each of these divisions reports to the office
Dang
of
it,
the
I just
director,
put the habitat
except for the
builder up and I
operations
know I
division,
shouldn't have.
which reports to the deputy director. Passage of Title X of Dodd-Frank was a bit to placate.
I still need to build a modification
regulatory failures
station.
identified in the wake of the 2008 financial
Yeah,
crisis.
I'm gonna need that as I
The
go.
law imported a new superstructure of federal regulation over consumer finance and mortgage lending and servicing industries traditionally regulated by state banking regulators. Consumer protection responsibilities previously handled by
Listen,
the Office
all
of the
I
Comptroller
want
of
this
the Currency, Office of Thrift
independent
Supervision,
bureau or
Federal
whatever
Deposit
to
Insurance
do
Corporation,
is
Federal Reserve,
kick the
National Credit
asses
Union
of
Administration,
companies
and
that
Federal
are
Trade Commission were
consciously
transferred to and
fucking over
consolidated with the
consumers.
CFPB, which issues rules, orders, and
That's
guidance
what
to
I want.
implement federal consumer
That's like
financial
their
law.
one job, I would imagine.
The CFPB collects fines from the private sector that are put into the Civil Penalty Fund. .42 The fund serves two
Okay,
ostensible
I'm
purposes:
more
to
centered now.
compensate the victims whom the CFPB perceives to be harmed and to underwrite consumer education and financial literacy programs. .43 How the Civil Penalty Fund is spent is at the discretion of the CFPB director. The CFPB has been unclear as to how it decides what consumer education or
Just
financial literacy
educate them in
programs. Fund .44
school?
is noted. Critics have charged that money from the
No,
Civil
is that
Penalty Fund
too
has
is that
ended
too
up in the
complicated?
pockets
Is that
of
too
leftist
liberal?
activist organizations.
What if we just like
In
teach
Title
people
LLCB,
about
Consumer
how
Financial
the
Protection
economy
Bureau,
works?
45 The
Would
Supreme
the
Court of
U.S.
United States held
absolutely
that the
use it
CFPB's
as just a
leadership
way
by a
of
single individual removable only
indoctrinating
for
people into
inefficiency,
capitalism?
neglect, or
Absolutely.
malfeasance violated
Absolutely.
constitutional
That's what they
separation
do.
of powers requirements because
But I
the
mean,
Constitution
Christ, at
requires
least
that
teach
such
people
officials remain
stuff.
dependent on the president, who in turn is accountable to the
Damn.
people. 46 The CFPB director is thus subject to removal by the president. The CFPB is not subject to congressional oversight, and its funding is not determined by elected lawmakers in Congress as part of the typical congressional appropriations process. It receives its funding from the Federal Reserve, which is itself funded outside the appropriations process through bank assessments. CFPB funding represents 12% of the total operating expenses of the Federal Reserve and is dispersed by the unelected Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. .47 This is not the case with respect to any other federal agency.
I now
On
need to
October
go
19,
get
2022,
this.
in Community
And then I need to
Financial
make a
Services
modification
Association of
station, which I'm
America,
pretty sure requires a diamond or
the
two.
Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit held that the CFPB's
what else do I
perpetual
need to
insulation
build?
from Congress's appropriations
Lots of
power,
shit.
including the express
Just way
exemption
too
from
much
congressional
stuff.
review of its funding, renders the Bureau no longer dependent
I gotta
and,
get
as a
deep,
result,
like
no longer
ASAP.
accountable to Congress and, ultimately, to the
I can't
people. 48
keep
and
hanging
that,
out
B, why
up top
abandoning
like
its
this.
most complete and effectual check on the overgrown prerogatives of the other branches of the government. Indeed, by enabling them in the Bureau's case, Congress ran afoul of the separation of
Computer
powers
chip,
embodied in the
titanium,
appropriations clause.
diamond lead.
49.
The
The
computer
court further
chip's gonna
remarked
take the
that the
longest.
CFPB's capacious portfolio of authority acts as a mini legislature,
Gonna be copper
prosecutor,
wire.
and court, responsible for
Gonna be
creating
some
substantive rules
gold.
for a wide swath of industries,
Gonna be
prosecuting
a couple
violations,
of
and
shell
levying knee-buckling
plates.
penalties against private citizens. 50. On February 27,
Yeah.
2023, the Supreme Court granted the petition for a writ of certiorari. 51 The court should issue its final decision by 2024. The CFPB
I need to make
is a highly
ion batteries
politicized,
bad.
damaging, and utterly unaccountable federal
Like I really
agency.
need to,
52 It is
functionally.
unconstitutional.
That's gonna be an
Congress should
issue. I
abolish the
remember
CFPB
if I
and
get
reverse
super
Dodd-Frank
low,
Section 1061, thus
like once I
returning
get
the
super
consumer
deep in the game,
protection
I'm not
function
gonna
of
be
the
able to
CFPB
find
to
these as
banking
easily. You
regulators.
can find them in
53
the
of the
Lost
Federal
River,
Trade
but they're
Commission.
hard to get.
Provided the Supreme Court
So I'm
affirms
just
the
gonna
Fifth
get like
Circuit holding
every
in
single
Community
one I have
Financial
here real
Services
quick
Association of
and
America,
completely
the next
fill
conservative president should order the immediate dissolution of the agency, pull down
my
its prior
biologics
rules,
area with
regulations,
these.
and guidance, return its staff to their prior agencies and its building to the General
I'll
Services
probably have to make the
Administration.
equivalent of a base
Until
down
this can
low
be
at some
accomplished,
point,
however,
so I can
Congress should
quickly
ensure that
grow
any civil penalty funds not used to recompense wronged consumers go to the Department of the Treasury.
some deep
The
shrooms
funds should not be
and gel
retained by the Bureau
sacks.
to be dispensed at the pleasure of the director, potentially to political actors. Moreover, the CFPB should not have a financial incentive to impose penalties. L. Repeal Dodd-Frank Section 1071. This section, which relates to small business data collection, imposes requirements on financial institutions lending to small
should be
firms, raises
funny, I would
costs, and
imagine.
limits small businesses' access to capital. 54. L. Require that no CFPB funds are spent on enforcement actions that are not based on a rulemaking that complies with the Administrative Procedure Act. 55. L. Require that respondents in administrative actions be allowed to elect whether an adjudication occurs in an administrative law court or an ordinary
Chip
Article 3
made?
federal court. 56. L. Specify the nature of deceptive, unfair, and abusive practices to define the scope of the CFPB
Okay, so
mission
what did I
more
need to make a
precisely.
mod station? I know I
End
need a
notes.
diamond.
H.R. 5480, Securities Act
Oh,
of
I thought I
1933,
got one
Public
earlier,
Law
but I
Number
actually didn't,
73,
did I?
22,
That's not
73rd
good.
Congress, May 27, 1933, https://governmentaricycus.
Titanium,
s3.amazonaws.com
next,
/legislink
diamond and
/pdf
then
/stat
lead.
/48/statute-48-bg74.pdf.
It's reading
Access
crap
February
like
20th,
crazy right
2023.
now. I need a diamond. That's a shame.
Securities Exchange Act of
I'm gonna go make.
Public Law Number
I'm
73
gonna go grab a
291,
bunch of creep vines so I can
73rd
have a
Congress,
bunch of
June 6,
synthetic fibers
1934,
on me.
https://governmentaricycus.s3.amazonaws.com
No, we are now
/legislink
in the citation section, page 833. Holy crap, we are close. At this point, I'm kind of like just enjoying playing Subnautica, which is not good. Federal Communications Commission, the FCC. I don't know. These are the guys that make people censor shit, right? That's what I know, right?
Mission Statement. The FCC should promote freedom of speech, unleash economic opportunity, ensure that every American has a fair shot at next-generation connectivity, and enable the private sector to create good-paying jobs through pro-growth reforms that support a diversity of viewpoints, ensure secure and competitive communications networks, modernize outdated infrastructure rules, and represent good stewardship of taxpayer dollars. Overview and background. The FCC is an independent regulatory agency that has jurisdiction over interstate and international communications by radio, television, wire, satellite, and cable. 15 commissioners are appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate for fixed 5-year terms. 2 The FCC does not have any other presidentially appointed, Senate-confirmed officials. Ordinarily, the 5-member FCC is divided politically 3-2 with a majority of commissioners from the same political party as the President. The commissioners' terms are staggered so that every year at the end of June, one commissioner's term expires. 3 However, a commissioner can continue to serve until the end of the next session of Congress, or up to 1.5 years beyond the expiration of the term, if no replacement is confirmed after his or her term ends. 4 By law, only a bare majority of commissioners can be from the same political party, no more than 3 when there are 5 members. 5 By tradition,
Flares. I hate flares. I never use flares.
Resigns when a new president of a different political party is sworn into office, though this is not required by law. By resigning, the exiting commissioner enables the president to nominate someone from his own political party to the FCC, and this typically shifts the political balance on the FCC toward the president's political party.
Like an idiot.
The president generally
There's so much preparing in this game. There's just so much slow preparation.
Party is chairperson either on an acting
I'm
or
just
a permanent
slowly
basis
getting
on
shit
or shortly
together.
after inauguration day. Under a tradition that dates back a few decades, when a relevant vacancy arises, the president allows the leader of the opposite political party in the Senate to select the person who will serve in the minority commissioner role. The president then formally nominates the person identified by Senate leadership. This also is not required by law. As specified in the Communications Act of 1934, the FCC's chairperson serves as the agency's CEO and is empowered with significant authority that is not shared with other commissioners. 6 For instance, the chairperson sets the FCC's agenda, decides what matters the agency will vote on and when, and has authority to organize and coordinate the FCC's work. 7 There is no separate Senate confirmation process for the position of FCC chairperson. The president designates one of the commissioners to serve as chairperson through a short 1-sentence or 2-sentence letter. 8 There are no limits on the number of terms that a person can serve as an FCC commissioner, though commissioners need to be nominated and confirmed for each 5-year term. FCC budget and structure. In recent years, the FCC has employed between 1,300 and 1,500 people. 9 The FCC's fiscal year 2023 budget request is for approximately $390.20 million. 10 While Congress appropriates funds for the FCC, the agency's budget is offset by what are known as regulatory fees the FCC collects from the licensees and other entities that it regulates and uses to offset its budget request. The FCC also raises revenue for the government by auctioning spectrum licenses. In fact, the FCC has generated more than $200 billion for the U.S. Treasury through spectrum auctions. 11 The FCC is organized into a series of bureaus and offices based on function. These include an Office of General Counsel, Office of Inspector General, Office of Legislative Affairs, Media Bureau, Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Wireline, Competition Bureau, Enforcement Bureau, and more. 12 High-profile FCC matters. The FCC addresses a number of important matters. For instance, Section 230 is codified in the Communications Act. 13 And the FCC has authority to interpret that law and thus provide courts with guidance about the proper application of the statutory language. 14 The FCC has addressed net neutrality rules and the regulatory framework that should apply to broadband offerings.
Net neutrality.
Any merger that involves a wireless company,
that,
broadcaster, or similar entity that holds an
FCC net neutrality
license
go down?
FCC approval, assuming that the merger will involve the transfer of the FCC license.
When did net neutrality
The FCC has facilitated the transition from
die?
3G to 4G and now 5G offerings in 2 ways. First, it has freed spectrum.
Repealed in the U.S. in 2017. That's the Trump administration, baby.
State and local siting and permitting laws that
I still, to this day, didn't get educated very well on what net neutrality was such a big problem.
From 2017 to 2020 was securing U.S. leadership in 5G. The FCC.
I'm pausing it. I'm learning about net neutrality real quick. I'm on the Wikipedia page. Principle that ISPs must treat all internet communication equally. So that way users, now I'm not quoting, but I'm already understanding it, so that way users can essentially decide what they do on the internet and everything gets treated the same, no price discrimination based on the type of content you're looking at. And then the U.S. killed net neutrality, essentially. Yep. Net neutrality rules were repealed in the U.S. in 2017 during the Trump administration,
and upheld in the rulings until the FCC voted to reinstate them in 2024. 2025, however, on January 2nd, a U.S. appeals court ruled they did not have authority to reinstate the rules. Okay, so Trump's presidency, very against net neutrality. I would imagine pretty much anyone on the internet who gives a shit about being on the internet probably prefers net neutrality. We probably prefer that ISPs treat all of our traffic the same regardless. That's probably where all of us internet people are at. I'm gonna go get more water. I don't know what it was on the first time I streamed to start this whole process. I don't know what it was that compelled me to play Minecraft for 14 hours straight. I think it was because I made really good progress, enough that I started giving myself false hope that I could beat it in one stream, and that did not happen. Because this stream's only been going on for like 2 hours, and I'm like a little tired. But I played the Minecraft one for 14. And I was like, yeah, let's keep going. I think it's because I really wanted to beat the challenge in one stream, as opposed to doing this over a week of streams, essentially. But that's what I get for underestimating a 900-page document of death.
FCC has facilitated the transition from 3G to 4G and now 5G offerings in two ways. First, it has freed spectrum, the airwaves needed to deliver wireless services. Second, it has preempted state and local siting and permitting laws that could otherwise slow down the build-out of next-generation infrastructure. One of the FCC's great success stories from 2017 to 2020 was securing U.S. leadership in 5G. The FCC also administers an approximately roughly $9 billion a year program called the Universal Service Fund, USF, which has been funded by a line-item charge that traditional telephone companies add to consumers' monthly bills. Expenditures from this fund subsidize rural broadband networks and low-income programs,
to the
as well
Grand
as
Reef.
connections for schools, libraries, and rural healthcare
I'm
facilities.
going to do that now.
Through various COVID-era laws, Congress has also provided the FCC with a one-time $24 billion appropriation for various low-income initiatives.
The Grand Reef.
Policy priorities.
The blood kelp.
The FCC needs to change course and bring new urgency to achieving four main goals: L. Reigning in big tech, L. Promoting national security, L. Unleashing economic prosperity, and L. Ensuring FCC accountability and good governance.
Fucking clue where I'm going.
Reigning in big tech. The FCC has
I think
an
it's this
important
way,
role
though.
to play in addressing the threats to individual liberty posed by corporations that are abusing dominant positions in the market. Nowhere is that clearer than when it comes to big tech and its attempts to drive diverse political viewpoints from the digital town square. Today, a handful of corporations can shape everything from the information we consume to the places we shop. These corporate behemoths are not merely exercising market power, they are abusing dominant positions. They are not simply prevailing in the free market, they are taking advantage of a landscape that has been skewed in many cases by the government to favor their business models over those of their competitors. It is hard to imagine another industry in which a greater gap exists between power and accountability.
I think.
That is why a new
I can't remember,
administration
though.
should support FCC action on several fronts. Specifically, the FCC should L. Eliminate immunities that courts added to Section 230. The FCC should issue an order that interprets Section 230 in a way that eliminates the expansive, non-textual immunities that courts have read into the statute. As one of the FCC's previous general counsels noted, the FCC has authority to take this action because Section 230 is codified in the Communications Act. 16. The FCC's Section 230 reforms should track the positions outlined in a July 2020 petition for rulemaking filed at the FCC near the end of the Trump administration. 17. Any new presidential administration should consider filing a similar or new petition. As Justice Clarence Thomas has made clear, courts have construed Section 230 broadly to confer on some of the world's largest companies a sweeping immunity that is found nowhere in the text of the statute. 18. They have done so in a way that nullifies the limits Congress placed on the types of actions that internet companies can take while continuing to benefit from Section 230. One way to start correcting this error is for the FCC to remind courts how the various portions of Section 230 operate. At the outset, the FCC can clarify that Section 230, CU1, does not apply broadly to every decision that a platform makes. Rather, its protections apply only when a platform does not remove information provided by someone else. In contrast, the FCC should clarify that the more limited Section 230(c)(2) protections apply to any covered platform's decision to restrict access to material provided by someone else. Combined, these actions will appropriately limit the number of cases in which a platform can censor with the benefit of Section 230's protections. Such clarifications might also include drawing out the traditional legal distinction between distributor and publisher liability. Section 230 did not do away with the former, nor does it collapse into the latter. L imposed transparency rules on big tech. Today, big tech offers a black box. After Google manipulates search results, a small business can see its web traffic drop precipitously overnight for no apparent reason, potentially flipping its outlook from black to red. On Facebook, social media posts are left up or taken down, accounts suspended or permanently banned, without any apparent consistency. Out of the blue, YouTube can demonetize individuals who have risked their capital and invested their labor to build online businesses. At present, the FCC requires broadband providers to comply with a transparency rule that can provide a good baseline for big tech. Under the FCC's rule, broadband providers must provide detailed disclosures about practices that would shape internet traffic, from blocking to prioritizing or discriminating against content. The FCC could take a similar approach to big tech, and it should look to Section 230 in the Consolidated Reporting Act as potential sources of authority. 19 Enacting, the FCC could require these platforms to provide greater specificity regarding their terms of service, and it could hold them accountable by prohibiting actions that are inconsistent with those plain and particular terms. Within this framework, big tech should be required to offer a transparent appeals process that allows for the challenging of pretextual takedowns or other actions that violate clear rules of the road.
Well, pretextual takedowns are uncool, but pretextual stops by police officers aren't a problem. Very interesting.
More fundamental Section 230 reforms that go beyond interpreting its current terms. Congress should do so by ensuring that internet companies no longer have carte blanche to censor protected speech while maintaining their Section 230 protections. As part of those reforms, the FCC should work with Congress to ensure that anti-discrimination provisions are applied to big tech, including back-end companies that provide hosting services and DDoS protection. Reforms that prohibit discrimination against core political viewpoints are one way to do this and would track the approach taken in a social media law passed in Texas, which was upheld on appeal in late 2022 by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. 20.
I'm in this region.
Congress can make certain points clear. It could focus legislation.
No, I'm not sure that whatever I'm doing is worth it.
Specialized ones. This could include excluding comment sections in online publications, specialized messaging.
Okay, so that means I'm in the mountains. I need to turn. Go somewhere else.
Similarly, Congress could legislate in a way that does not require any platform to host illegal content, child pornography, terrorist speech, and indecent, profane, or similar categories of speech that Congress has previously carved out. L support efforts to empower consumers. The FCC and Congress should work together to formulate rules that empower consumers. Section 230 itself codifies user control as an express policy goal and encourages internet platforms to provide tools that will empower users to engage in their own content moderation. As Congress takes up reforms, it should therefore be mindful of how we can return to internet users the power to control their online experiences. One idea is to empower consumers to choose their own content filters and fact-checkers, if any. The FCC should also work with Congress to ensure stronger protections against young children accessing social media sites despite age restrictions that generally prohibit their use of these sites. It should be noted at this point that the views expressed here are not shared uniformly by all conservatives. There are some, including contributors to this chapter, who do not think that the FCC or Congress should act in a way that regulates the content moderation decisions of private platforms. One of the main arguments that this group offers is that doing so would intrude unlawfully in their view on the First Amendment rights of corporations to exclude content from their private platforms. L require that big tech begin to contribute a fair share. Big tech has avoided accountability in several additional ways as well. One of them concerns the FCC's roughly $9 billion Universal Service Fund. This initiative provides the support necessary to subsidize the agency's affordable internet and rural connectivity programs. The FCC obtains this funding through a line-item charge that carriers add to consumers' monthly bills for traditional telecommunications service. While big tech derives tremendous value from the federal government's universal service investments, using those federally supported networks to deliver their products and realize significant profits, these large corporations have avoided paying a fair share into the program. On top of that, the FCC's current funding mechanism has been on an unsustainable path. 21 By requiring traditional telephone customers to contribute to a fund that is being used increasingly to support broadband networks, the FCC's current approach is the regulatory equivalent of taxing horseshoes to pay for highways. To put the FCC's universal service program on a stable footing, Congress should require big tech companies to start contributing an appropriate amount. Conservatives are not unanimous in agreeing that the FCC should expand the USF contribution base. Instead, some argue that Congress should revisit the program's entire funding structure and determine whether to continue subsidizing the provision of service. Future funding decisions, the argument goes, should be made by Congress through the normal appropriation process through which the USF program
should be multiple entrances to the Lost River.
These decisions should be made with an eye to right-sizing the federal government's existing broadband initiatives in light of both technological advances and the recent influx of billions of dollars in new appropriations that can be used to support efforts to end the digital divide. Protecting America's national security. During the Trump administration, the FCC ushered in a new and
Talking
appropriately
about
strong approach
the
to the
Is it
national
fair
security
share
threats posed by
when
the
like
Chinese
they're
Communist
desperately
Party,
against that?
CCP. During that time, the FCC eliminated federal subsidies for telecommunications equipment from Huawei and ZTE, thereby greatly reducing the chances of that equipment finding a way into our nation's communications networks. The FCC also stood up a program to rip and replace insecure network gear to ensure that it did not remain a threat lurking inside our systems. The FCC revoked or denied the licenses of carriers like China Mobile, China Telecom, and China Unicom, which presented unacceptable national security risks. There are, however, additional strong actions that the FCC can and should take to address the CCP's malign campaign. Specifically,
Go Swede.
I'll address TikTok's
I actually
threat to
need
US
this
national
for the end of the
security.
game.
As law enforcement officials
I
have
almost
made clear,
forgot.
TikTok poses a serious and unacceptable risk to America's
Go
national
Swede is
security.
necessary.
Point 22. It also provides Beijing with an opportunity to run a foreign influence campaign by determining the news and information that the app feeds to millions of Americans. As of this writing, the Biden administration's Treasury Department has not announced a final decision concerning its long-pending review of TikTok. If that inaction persists, or if the administration allows TikTok to continue to operate in the U.S., a new administration should ban the application on national security grounds. I'll expand the FCC's covered list. The FCC maintains a list of communications equipment and services that pose an unacceptable risk to the national security of the United States. It is known as the covered list. Point 23. Huawei is one of the companies on the covered list, and its inclusion means that the FCC will no longer review or approve new applications from Huawei.
Completely
Without
certain
FCC
that I
approval,
need Go
Huawei
Swede
gear
at
cannot
some
be
point in
lawfully
this
sold
game.
or used in the U.S. However, the FCC must do a better job of ensuring that it's covered. List stays up to date and accounts for changes in corporate names and forms. Therefore, a new administration should create a more regular and timely process for reviewing entities with ties to the CCP's surveillance state. L in the unregulated end run. As noted above, China Telecom and similar entities have been banned from operating in the U.S. in a manner that would require an FCC license or authorization because of the national security risks that those entities pose. However, many of these same entities are still operating in the U.S. and offering services very similar to the ones that they are prohibited from providing. China Telecom, for instance, continues to provide services to data centers by offering the services on a private or unregulated basis.
Site
A
is
new
huge. I'll
administration
need
should
that.
work with the FCC to close this loophole. One way to do so would be for the FCC to prohibit any regulated carrier from interconnecting with an insecure provider. I'll publish a foreign adversary transparency
Make a bunch of
list.
benzene. I need to make a
As
bunch
part
of
of the FCC's ongoing work to secure our networks from entities that would do the bidding of our
hydrochloric
foreign
acid.
adversaries, the
Benzene,
FCC
cool.
should do more to shine the light of transparency on the scope
I'm
of the
just gonna
problem.
make like 20
To this end,
benzines.
the FCC should compile and publish a list of all entities
Good.
that hold FCC authorizations, licenses, or other
There's no
grants
reason
of
to
authority
carry
with
blood
more than
oil
10%
when it's so
ownership by
large when I
foreign
could just make
adversarial
benzene
governments,
from it
including the
instead.
governments of China, Russia, Iran, Syria, or North Korea. A bipartisan bill
And
that
it's
would
like
require
go
the
in
FCC
there.
to publish this type of list has been introduced
Well,
in the House of
In order to
Representatives by
make
Representatives Elise
advanced
Stefanik,
chemistry,
Republican New York, Ro Khanna, DCA, and Mike Gallagher,
I
Republican
would need
Wisconsin.
salt and deep
124.
germs. So let's make
I'll
a
fully
bunch of
fund the
hydrochloric
federal
acid
rip
real
and
quick.
replace program. In 2019, Congress established a $1.9 billion Secure and Trusted Communications Networks Reimbursement Program,
Time
known colloquially as the
comes.
Rip and Replace Program, to reimburse communications providers for the reasonable expenses they would incur to remove, replace, and dispose of insecure Huawei and ZTE gear. However, $1.9 billion is about $3 billion short of the total amount of funding needed to complete the rip and replace process. A new administration should ensure that the program is fully funded and should look first at repurposing and applying unused COVID-era emergency funds for this purpose.
Benzene, you're
I'll launch a Clean Standards Initiative.
sweet seed.
During the Trump administration, the U.S. government launched a worldwide Clean Networks Program. Point 25. As a result of this initiative, many of the U.S. government's allies started the process of ending their relationships with Huawei. It is time for an administration to build and expand on this groundbreaking work by taking a similar approach to the standard setting process. Right now, the CCP is seeking to extend its influence by exerting control over the development of standards in a variety of areas, including technology and telecommunications. It is vital that the United States meet this threat with a comprehensive Clean Standards Initiative. I'll stop aiding the CCP's authoritarian approach to artificial intelligence. The CCP has set itself a goal of becoming the
turn
global leader
around
in
to go
artificial
down.
intelligence
This is
(AI) by
deep.
2030. Beijing is bent on using this technology to exert authoritarian control domestically and export its authoritarian governance
to
model
turn around.
overseas. U.S. businesses are aiding
huge
Beijing in
jail
this
sec.
effort,
I have
often
to get that
unwittingly,
now.
by feeding, training, and improving the AI datasets of companies that are beholden to the CCP. One way that U.S. companies are doing this is by giving Beijing access to their high-powered cloud computing services. Therefore, it is time for an administration to put in place a comprehensive plan that aims to stop U.S. entities from directly or indirectly contributing to China's malign AI goals. Unleashing economic prosperity. The FCC needs to advance a pro-growth agenda that gives every American a fair shot at next-generation connectivity. This is vital for economic opportunity and prosperous communities. The current administration has appropriated a lot of money for broadband infrastructure projects, but it has failed to pair that spending with reforms that free more airwaves for wireless connectivity or streamline the permitting processes for broadband builds. That failure is holding back America's hardworking telecommunications crews and leaving
Joe,
Americans
good.
stuck waiting on the wrong side of the digital divide. It is time for a return to the successful spectrum and infrastructure policies that prevailed during the Trump administration, policies that enabled the U.S. to lead the world in 5G. Refill America's spectrum pipeline. From 2017 through 2020, the FCC took unprecedented steps to free the airwaves needed to power 5G and other next-generation wireless services. This work not only helped to secure America's wireless leadership and bolster competition, but also enabled the private sector to create jobs and grow the economy. Recently, the FCC has failed to match the pace and cadence
that actually
of
got me
spectrum
just a little bit right there. That was
Therefore,
not fun.
the FCC and a new administration should work together to develop a national spectrum strategy that both identifies the specific airwaves that the FCC can free for commercial wireless services and sets an aggressive timeline for agency action. Facilitate coordination on spectrum issues.
Clearly, I need to get down there.
Now play a central role in advancing America's economic and national security interests. Over the past few years, this dynamic has led to an increasing number of headline.
And my issue becomes I need to make
federal agencies. These disputes are often framed in zero-sum terms as commercial wireless and federal agency stakeholders argue over the appropriate types and amount of airwaves that the government should allocate for various purposes. On the one hand, America's global economic leadership depends on its ability to free spectrum that will power the U.S. commercial wireless industry.
Nope.
On the other hand,
Okay,
we must ensure that America's national security and other federal agencies have access to the spectrum resources that they need to carry out their vital missions.
Okay.
It is clear that the current process is not delivering optimal outcomes.
Yep,
in December 2021 and January 2022, for instance, the lack of interagency coordination and communication about mid-band 5G spectrum allocation between the FCC and the Federal Aviation Authority led to significant challenges for the U.S. aviation industry. Over the past 2 years, the FCC has failed to move spectrum into the commercial marketplace at the same pace and cadence that it did in the recent past. Creating better mechanisms to improve communication and cooperation between different federal agencies could enable a more effective and coordinated U.S. government telecommunications strategy. The White House should work with Congress to establish a spectrum coordination process that will work for both commercial and federal users. Modernize infrastructure rules. By 2016, the construction of new cell sites, the building blocks for 5G, had essentially flatlined in America. Because of outdated permitting rules, it cost too much and took too long to build wireless infrastructure, so the FCC went to work. The agency updated the environmental and historic preservation rules that needlessly drove up the cost and slowed down the timeline for adding small cells. The FCC put in place guardrails to address outlier fees and delays imposed at the state and local levels on those same small cell projects. It modernized the permitting process in several additional ways as well. Those FCC reforms delivered results. They allowed America's private sector to bring thousands of families across the digital divide and to keep Americans connected during the pandemic. In fact, infrastructure builds accelerated at a record pace after those reforms. In 2019, for instance, U.S. providers built over 46,000 new cell sites, a 65-fold increase over 2016 levels. The FCC has not engaged in any similar infrastructure reforms in recent years, and there is much more that needs to be done. For instance, the FCC's prior reforms focused on streamlining the rules for small wireless facilities. The FCC should now explore similar action for the deployment of other wired infrastructure by imposing limits on the fees that local and state governments can charge for reviewing those wireline applications and time restrictions on the government's decision-making process. The next administration should also work to address the delays that continue to persist when it comes to building internet infrastructure on federal lands. This is an area where the FCC itself has very little jurisdiction, so a new administration should redouble efforts to require timely reviews and final actions by agencies with jurisdiction over federal lands, including the Bureau of Land Management and the U.S. Forest Service. Advance America's space leadership. One of the most significant technological developments of the past few years has been the emergence of a new generation of low Earth orbit satellites like Starlink and Kuiper. This technology can beam a reliable, high-speed internet signal to nearly any part of the globe at a fraction of the cost of other technologies. This has the potential to significantly accelerate efforts to end the digital divide and disrupt the federal regulatory and subsidy regime that applies to communications networks. The FCC should expedite its work to support this new technology by acting more quickly in its review and approval of applications to launch new satellites. Otherwise, the U.S. risks ceding space leadership to entities based in countries with more friendly regulatory environments. Holding government accountable. Federal technology and telecommunications programs have been plagued by a troubling lack of accountability and good governance. They would benefit from stronger oversight and a fresh look at eliminating outdated regulations that are doing more harm than good. And wasteful broadband spending policies. Many of the broadband spending policies being pursued by the current administration are poised to waste taxpayer money while leaving rural communities and unconnected Americans behind. At the same time, the dramatic recent increases in funding through the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, and the Infrastructure Investment
political thoughts for the first time a little bit. It's just been a lot of listening to the economic bullshit. Proper political thoughts for the first time a little bit. American exceptionalism, American imperialism. This whole anti-China thing is, it just reeks of American expansionism. Of, you know, if we don't expand first, they're going to catch us.
that the Treasury Department adopted in 2022
no.
that govern the expenditure of
You know, if we
$350 billion
don't expand
in
first, they're
ARPA
going to
bonds.
catch us. It's
Rather than
over.
directing those dollars to the rural and other communities that have no internet infrastructure, the current administration gave the green light for recipients to spend those funds to overbuild existing high-speed networks in communities that already have multiple broadband providers. A new administration should eliminate government-funded overbuilding of existing networks. Adopt a national coordinating strategy. Hundreds of billions of
Okay,
infrastructure
sorry, I got a
dollars have been
text
appropriated by
from,
Congress or budgeted by
far
agencies
more
over the past
relevant
couple of
real life
years
stuff.
can be used to end the digital divide. Yet, according to the U.S. Government
It's American
Accountability Office,
imperialism.
U.S. broadband efforts
It's
are not
this
guided by a national strategy.
aggressive
Instead, federal broadband networks are
anti-China
fragmented and overlapping, with more than 100
philosophy
programs administered by 15 agencies, risking
that
overbuilding as well as
I
wasteful
guaranteedly
duplication.
serves the
Many of these
explicit
programs remain
function
plagued by inefficiency, further
of
contributing to
allowing
wasted
the U.S.
limited
to
taxpayer
expand
dollars.
and maintain our influence
Moreover,
more.
the federal government is
Because
seeking
we
to put appropriate
fundamentally
guardrails in
believe
place
that
to govern the expenditure of
democracy
billions in
and what
broadband
we
funds.
call American
This is the
democracy,
regulatory
the
equivalent
fact
of
that we
turning
do a
the
new
spigot on
president
full
every
blast
4
and then
years,
walking away from the hose. There is a worrisome lack of adequate tracking,
the
measurement, and accountability
fact that
standards
we do
governing
that
all of this broadband
empowers
spectrum.
Americans.
As
It's
a
a
result,
million
we're
other
likely
things,
to see
right? But
heavy
I'm
amounts
talking
of waste,
about the
fraud,
thing
and
that
abuse.
like actually is
The new
happening.
administration needs to bring
The
fresh
thing that
oversight
makes
to this
America
spending and put a national
exceptional
strategy in place to
is
ensure
that
the
we
federal government
have
adopts a
a
coordinated approach to its
constantly
various broadband
recycling
initiatives.
political system
Similarly, the next
underpinned
administration
by
should ask the FCC to
bureaucracy
launch a review of its
wherein
existing
stability
broadband
can be
programs, including the
maintained
different
and the
components
voice
of
of the people
USF,
can be
with the goal of
represented
avoiding
in some
duplication,
form.
improving efficiency of existing
I
programs,
see a
and
million
saving
issues with
taxpayer
it,
money.
but that is what these people
Correct the
understand.
FCC's
And then they
regulatory
also have like a
trajectory
bunch
to
of like
encourage competition to improve connectivity.
historical manifest
The FCC
destiny
is a New
type,
Deal era agency.
you know, God
Its history of
and the
regulation
founding
points to a
fathers
flexible view that
empowered
the
us
federal
to
government should impose
rule the
heavy-handed
world, right?
regulation
That sort
rather
of
than
shit.
relying
That's
on
everywhere.
competition and market forces
In
to
their
produce
logic,
optimal
not in
outcomes.
mine, but in their logic.
President
But
Franklin
one
D.
thing I will
Roosevelt
see is
recommended
that
that
we
Congress
have
create the FCC in
presidents
February
that cycle every
1934 for the
4
purposes of
years, which
establishing a
keeps things
single
fresh and
government agency
new.
charged with broad
They're
authority over the
technically
field of
appointed by people to
communications.
some
27
degree,
Congress subsequently
and we have a
established the
bureaucracy
FCC
that
through the
underpins that
Communications Act of
presidency and
1934.
checks and balances, right?
Congress has
So
passed a number of additional
that
statutes,
empowers
some
Americans
now,
and
that pertain to
conservatives
the
to believe
FCC's
that we are
authority,
so
including most
exceptional
significantly the
that it is
Telecommunications Act of
incredibly
1996 to
important
28, which
that we
regulated markets
outcompete
for
China
greater competition
because
and
we're
market
going to
efficiency
save the
in
world if we
internet
do, and if China wins, the world
Technological
ends.
change in the connectivity
Um,
sector is occurring rapidly.
I don't
We are now
think
seeing an
that
unprecedented
those
level of
like
convergence,
hunches
innovation, and
and
competition in the market
feelings
for
and
connectivity.
vibes
On the one hand, traditional
justify
cable providers like Charter are
all
now
of the
offering mobile
consequences
wireless
that
services to
come with
consumers in
being
direct
this
competition with traditional
aggressively
wireless companies
competitive
like
with
Verizon.
China.
On the other hand, a new generation of low Earth orbit satellite services like Starlink and Amazon's Project Kuiper stand to offer high-speed home broadband in competition with legacy providers. Furthermore, broadcasters are offering high-speed downloads directly to consumers over spectrum that previously provided only TV service. These rapidly evolving market conditions counsel in favor of eliminating many of the heavy-handed FCC regulations that were adopted in an era when every technology operated in a silo. These include many of the FCC's media ownership rules, which can have the effect of restricting investment and competition because those regulations assume a far more limited set of competitors for advertising dollars than exist today, as well as its universal service requirements. Ultimately, FCC reliance on competition and innovation is vital if the agency is to deliver optimal outcomes for the American public. The FCC should engage in a serious top-to-bottom review of its regulations and take steps to rescind any that are overly cumbersome or outdated. The Commission should focus its efforts on creating a market-friendly regulatory environment that fosters innovation and competition from a wide range of actors, including cable-based, broadband-based, and satellite-based internet providers. Author's note: the preparation of this chapter was a collective enterprise of individuals involved in the 2025 Presidential Transition Project. All contributors to this chapter are listed at the front of this volume. While this chapter identifies certain issues on which the contributors did not all agree, the author alone assumes responsibility for the content of this chapter, and no views expressed herein should be attributed to any other individual. End notes. 47 U.S.C. Section 151, Access January 23, 2023. 47 U.S.C. Section 154, Access January 23, 2023. IBID. 47 U.S.C. Section 154, C. 47 U.S.C. Section 154, B, 5. 47 U.S.C. Section 155, A, Access January 23, 2023. IBID. IBID. There are no limits on the President's authority to designate a different chairperson from among the existing commissioners. Further, though it is an open question, it is generally believed that the judiciary would impose limits on the power of the President to remove a commissioner during his or her 5-year term. The question is not settled because Congress did not include an express for-cause or similar protection against removal in the Communications Act itself. Scholars assume this is because Congress passed the Communications Act in the years between the Supreme Court's decision in Myers v. United States, 272 U.S. 52, 1926, and Humphrey's Executor v. United States, 295 U.S. 602, 1935, when it was not entirely clear that Congress could impose a limit on the President's removal power. However, the Communications Act was significantly amended in 1996, and Congress did not add just cause or other protections from removal at that time. Considering the high-profile contemporary debates about the appointment and removal of independent counsels under the Independent Counsel Act, one could reasonably assume that Congress was aware of removal powers and protections for presidentially appointed and Senate-confirmed officials. Chart, FTEs, historical and
Okay,
estimated,
sorry,
fiscal
I'm
years
letting us
1986
read
to
this. I'm dealing with far more relevant real-life things. Let's see. Okay. Okay. Federal Election Commission, the FEC. Uh-oh. So we're, oh man, we are ending this fucking document on the rigged election. That's where we're ending it. Holy hell. Wow. Maybe. I mean, it seems like that's where we're ending it. That would be one hell of a place to end it. To wrap things up and be like, the election was stolen, we're saying it.
The Federal Election Commission, FEC, is an independent federal agency
Wow.
that began operations in 1975 to enforce the Federal Election Campaign Act, FECA, passed by Congress in 1971 and amended in 1974.1. FECA governs the raising and spending of funds in all federal campaigns for Congress and the presidency. The FEC has no authority over the administration of federal elections, which is performed by state governments. While the FEC has exclusive civil enforcement authority over FECA, the U.S. Justice Department has criminal enforcement authority, which is defined as a knowing and willful violation of the law. 3 Because the FEC is an independent agency and not a division or office directly within the executive branch, the authority of the president over the actions of the FEC is extremely limited. As former FEC Commissioner Bradley Smith has said, the FEC's regulation of campaign finance deeply implicates First Amendment principles of free speech and association, for the FEC regulates in one of the most sensitive areas of the Bill of Rights, political speech and political activity by citizens, candidates, political parties, and the voluntary membership organizations that represent Americans who share common views on a huge range of important and vital public policy issues. Needed reforms. Nomination authority. The president's most significant power is the appointment of the 6 commissioners who govern the FEC, subject to confirmation by the U.S. Senate. Commissioners may only serve a single term of 6 years, but because they stay in office until a new commissioner has been confirmed, many commissioners continue to serve past their terms. 5 Currently, the longest-serving commissioner still at the FEC is Ellen Weintraub, D., whose regular term expired in 2007. Under FECA, no more than 3 commissioners may be from the same party. 6.
While that means stealing it, and then I can make the upgrade module and then go far deeper with the Cyclops.
Libertarian or Green parties, in practice, this has meant that the FEC has always had 3 Democrat and 3 Republican commissioners. 7. There is a long-held political tradition since the FEC's founding that when a commission slot held by a member of the opposition political party opens
My issue
up,
then
the president
will be
consults
having
with
enough
and nominates
lithium to
the
finish
chosen
this.
nominee of the opposition party's leader in the Senate. In exchange, the Senate party leader
I'm
and his
too low
caucus
to
agree
go
approve
anywhere
the
else,
president's
meaning I'll
nominee
have to
fill
look
an
for
empty
lithium
position
down
for the
here.
president's political party. It has also been customary to advance the 2 nominees of the differing political parties at the same time. This bipartisan pairing has historically permitted easy confirmation of both parties' selectees. Thus, by convention, a Republican president will nominate a Republican and a Democrat for 2 open commission slots, including the choice of the Democrat Senate leader for his party's seat. In turn, the senator will direct his party to vote to confirm both nominees. In the almost 50-year history of the FEC, this tradition has only been broken once, when Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid refused to approve one of George W. Bush's nominees, Hans von Spakovsky, for a Republican commission slot. 8. In 2025, when a new president assumes office, the term of 5 of the current FEC commissioners will have either expired or be about to expire in 9. L. Shana M. Broussard, D. April 30, 2023. L. Sean J. Cooksey, R. April 30, 2021. L. Alan Dickerson, R. April 30, 2025. L. James Traynor, 3, R. April 30, 2023. L. Ellen L. Weintraub, D. April 30, 2007. During their terms, the 3 Republican commissioners have demonstrated with their votes and their public statements that they believe the FEC should not overregulate political activity and act beyond its statutory authority, construe ambiguous and confusing provisions against candidates and the public instead of the government, and infringe on protected First Amendment activity. L. The president assuming office in 2025 must ensure, if the 3 Republican commissioners do not wish to remain on the FEC past their terms, that nominees for these positions share the views of those commissioners. L. Also, to the extent that the president has the ability to negotiate with the Democratic Party leader in the Senate, he should try to temper any choice of the opposition party to ensure that this individual does not have extreme views on aggressive over-enforcement that would severely restrict political speech and protected party, campaign, and associational activities. U.S. Department of Justice/FEC-related activities. The president does have control of the Department of Justice, DOJ. Thus, he has authority as president, primarily through his choice of attorney general and other political appointees, to direct the prosecutorial functions of the DOJ regarding criminal enforcement of FECA. Such investigations
I really need lithium.
I
don't know where to get lithium nearby without going into the Lost River, and I can't get to the Lost River because I can't get deep enough.
Whatever state an alleged violation occurs. L. The president must ensure that the DOJ, just like the FEC, is directed to only prosecute clear violations of FECA. The department must not construe ambiguous provisions against the public instead of the government or apply FECA in a way that infringes on protected First Amendment activity. It should be but is not always obvious to overzealous government prosecutors that if a federal law is confusing, it would be unjust to prosecute individuals who are unable to determine if they are violating the law. L. The president should direct the DOJ and the Attorney General not to prosecute individuals under an interpretation of the law with which the FEC, the expert agency designated by Congress to enforce the law civilly and issue regulations establishing the standards under.
I don't know if with my amount of air I could even get to
DOJ should be instructed to consult and consider all official actions by the FEC that interpret the law, including prior enforcement
so my only really
actions,
option is to go up
and advisory opinions, just as private practitioners,
try to go straight up,
and political actors must do. It is fundamentally unfair for the DOJ to prosecute an individual for supposedly violating the law when the FEC has previously determined that a similarly situated individual has not violated the law. Furthermore, this rule should apply even when there is a tied or 3-3 vote by the FEC commissioners whether in an enforcement action or an advisory opinion, since under the statute, the FEC cannot take any action unless there are 4 affirmative votes. Again, it seems obvious that if the commissioners designated by Congress to interpret the law are unable to determine what the law requires, then it is unfair to prosecute a citizen for violating that law. The DOJ should not engage in criminal prosecutions that stretch legal theories and defy FEC interpretations and regulations. Another issue directly related to what has often been a contentious relationship between the FEC and the DOJ is the conduct of litigation. The vast majority of federal agencies are defended by the DOJ, which also represents them when the agency is pursuing litigation as a plaintiff. The FEC, however, is one of the few federal agencies with independent litigating authority. 10 The FEC's lawyers represent the agency in federal court up through the federal courts of appeal.
Lithium somewhere.
If a case reaches the U.S. Supreme Court, then the Office of the Solicitor General of the Justice Department represents the FEC. In recent years, the FEC has failed to defend itself against litigation filed by political allies of certain Democrat commissioners. It takes 4 votes to authorize the General Counsel of the FEC to defend a lawsuit filed against the agency, and those commissioners have refused to provide that 4th vote, so the public was treated to the scandalous spectacle of the Commission, an independent agency of the United States government, defaulting in litigation before federal courts. 11. These cases involved enforcement matters in which the commissioners disagreed on whether a violation of the law had occurred. Accordingly, the final votes of the commissioners did not approve moving forward with enforcement because there were not 4 affirmative votes that a violation of the law occurred.
Here the Sea Treader's path.
When private plaintiffs then sued the FEC for failing to take action, Democrat commissioners refused to authorize the defense of the FEC in litigation as a way of circumventing the prior final action of the FEC and the FECA 4-vote requirement to authorize an enforcement action. Such defaults in litigation are unacceptable. L. The President should direct the Attorney General to defend the FEC in all litigation when there is a failure of the commissioners to authorize the General Counsel of the agency to defend it. No legislation would be needed to accomplish this. The DOJ has the general authority to defend the government and its agencies in all litigation. L as a legislative matter, and given this abuse, the President should seriously consider recommending that Congress amend FICA to remove the agency's independent litigating authority and rely on
Some
the
of
Department of
these
Justice
sometimes
to handle all
have
litigation
lithium.
involving
Nope,
the
that was
FEC.
diamond. Whatever.
There are also multiple instances of existing statutory provisions of FICA and the accompanying FEC regulations having been found unlawful or unconstitutional by federal
just have
court
to find more of
decisions,
those.
yet those statutory provisions remain in the U.S.
And
Code
hope.
and the implementing regulations remain in the Code of Federal Regulations. Point 12. In such instances, those regulated by the law, from candidates to the public, have no way of knowing, without engaging in extensive legal research, whether particular statutory provisions and regulations are still applicable to their actions in the political arena. L. The President should request that the commissioners on the FEC prepare such guidance. L. In the event that the FEC fails to act, the President should direct the Attorney General to prepare a guidance document from the Department of Justice for the public that outlines all of the FICA statutory provisions and FEC regulations that have been changed, amended, or voided by specific court decisions. Legislative changes. While a President's ability to make any changes at an independent agency like the FEC is limited, 13. The President has the ability to make legislative recommendations to Congress. One of the most obvious changes that is needed is to end the current practice of allowing commissioners to remain as serving commissioners long after their term has expired, defying the clear intent of Congress and specifying that a commissioner can only serve a single term of 6 years. L. The President should prioritize nominations to the FEC once commissioners reach the end of their terms and should be assisted by legislative language either eliminating or limiting overstays to a reasonable period of time to permit the vetting, nomination, and confirmation of successors. L. The President should vigorously oppose all efforts, as proposed, for example, in Section 6002 of the For the People Act of 2021, 14 to change the structure of the FEC to reduce the number of commissioners from 6 to 5. Or another odd number. The current requirement of 4 votes to authorize an enforcement action, provide an advisory opinion, or issue regulations, ensures that there is bipartisan agreement before any action is taken and protects against the FEC being used as a political weapon. With only 5 commissioners, 3 members of the same political party could control the enforcement process of the agency, raising the potential of a powerful federal agency enforcing the law on a partisan basis against the members of the opposition political party. Efforts to impose a nonpartisan or so-called independent chair are impractical. The chair will inevitably be aligned with his or her appointing party, at least as a matter of perception. There are numerous other changes that should be considered in FICA and the FEC's regulations. The overly restrictive limits on the ability of party committees to coordinate with their candidates, for example, violates associational rights and unjustifiably interferes with the very purpose of political parties, to elect their candidates. L. Raise contribution limits and index reporting requirements to inflation. Contribution limits should generally be much higher, as they hamstring candidates and parties while
It's so hard to get to. There's no way I'm beating this game today, that's for sure. Again, I wasn't really trying to. But that's what I was interested in. Alright, I'm gonna go back to playing stupid games for the last 30 pages of this.
When taking any action related to the FEC, the President should keep in mind that, as former FEC Chairman Bradley Smith says, the greater problem at the FEC has been over-enforcement, not under-enforcement as some critics falsely allege. Point 15. As he correctly concludes, the FEC's enforcement efforts place a substantial burden on small committees and campaigns, and are having a chilling effect on some political speech, squeezing the life out of low-level, volunteer political activity. 16. Commissioners have a duty to enforce FICA in a fair,
Maybe just Togario for a bit.
objective manner. But they must do so in a way that
Just
protects the
so I
First
can
Amendment
chill
rights
for
of
a
the
while.
public, political parties, and candidates to fully participate in the political process. The President has the same duty to ensure that the Department of Justice enforces the law in a similar manner.
Agar.io.
End notes.
Alright, playing something
52
stupid for the
USC
last
Section 30101
last little section here.
52 USC Section 30106, B1. 52
Window
USC Section
capture.
30109, C and D. Bradley A. Smith and Stephen M. Horsting, A Toothless Anaconda, Innovation, Impotence and Over-Enforcement at the Federal Election Commission, 1 Election Law Journal 2, 2002, page 162. 52 USC Section 30106, A2. 52 USC Section 30106, A1. Former Commissioner Stephen Walther, 2006 to 2022,
There we
was
go.
listed nominally as an independent, but he was
All right,
recommended
let's
to
go.
President George W. Bush for nomination by former Nevada Senator Harry Reid, D., and almost always voted in line with the Democrat commissioners on the FEC. Hans von Spakovsky served as a commissioner from 2006
Can't believe
to
I'm just
2007
tired,
in
and
a
that's what I'm
recess
doing at
appointment.
this point.
While no other nominee has been rejected by the Senate, the tradition of bipartisan voice vote confirmation has largely ended. 2 Republican nominees, Alan Dickerson and Sean Cooksey, were confirmed on
To move on to the next section here. Federal Trade Commission. Antitrust laws. Wow, are they actually going to improve the antitrust laws? That'd be
Mission
awesome.
/ Overview. America's antitrust laws are over a century old. In 1890, the U.S. Congress enacted the Sherman Act, one the first
Wow,
federal
I died
prohibition on
instantly.
trusts and restraints of trade. The Clayton Act, too adopted in 1914, builds upon the Sherman Act, outlawing certain practices, such as price fixing, while bringing other business combinations, such as mergers and acquisitions, under regulatory scrutiny. The Federal Trade Commission Act, FTCA, 3 also adopted in 1914, gives the federal government legal tools to combat anti-competitive, unfair, and deceptive practices in the marketplace, empowering the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, to enforce provisions of the Sherman and Clayton Acts. The FTCA prohibits unfair methods of competition and unfair or deceptive acts or practices in or affecting commerce. Sections 3, 7, and 8 of the Clayton Act empower the FTC to block unlawful tying contracts, unlawful corporate mergers and acquisitions, and interlocking directorates. Under an amendment to the FTCA, the Robinson and Patman Act, for the FTC has authority to prohibit practices involving discriminatory pricing and product promotion. While the FTC has enforcement or administrative responsibilities under more than 70 laws, the FTCA and the Clayton Act are the focus of its regulatory energy. FTC actions, therefore, turn on the antitrust principles and market principles.
Suddenly, it's much harder to play Agario than it was a couple of days ago. Did I just click Battle Royale? I don't want that. I want free for all.
Both allocative efficiency, optimal distribution of goods and services, taking into account consumers' preferences, so that prices tend toward marginal cost and productive efficiency.
It looks like it broke. The entire game broke. That's crazy.
And thereby maximizes consumer welfare. 5. Recently, however, many in the conservative movement have taken a broader view of antitrust. They point out that the authors of our antitrust laws did not intend this purely economic understanding of competitive markets and the normative assumptions that undergird it to guide their legislation. First, these principles were only imperfectly worked out at the time the antitrust laws were passed. Second, contemporaneous statements concerning the Sherman and Clayton Acts demonstrate Congress's concern about the political and economic power of the oil and railroad trusts of the first
foundational ideas can be wrong historically. But so much of their own logic is based on the idea that, like, oh, this American history is flawless and perfect and we shouldn't violate it.
And managerial accountability as well as collusive behavior with government. Republican Senator John Sherman explained to Congress in support of his eponymous legislation. If we will not endure a king as a political power, we should not endure a king over the production, transportation, and sale of any of the necessaries of life.
This is base as fuck.
If we would not submit to an emperor, we should not submit to an autocrat of trade, with power to prevent competition.
This is base as shit. I love it.
Of any commodity. 6. Similarly, identifying the institutional threats that market concentration can pose.
I could not imagine being so fucking stupid that you disagree with that sentiment.
The federal antitrust law is one of the most important statutes ever passed in this country. It was a step taken by Congress to meet what the public had found to be a growing and intolerable evil in combinations between many who had capital employed in a branch of trade, industry, or transportation, to obtain control of it, regulate prices, and make unlimited profit. Taft saw in this economic threat broader implications for American society since the building of great and powerful corporations which had, many of them, intervened in politics and through use of corrupt machines and bosses threatened us with a plutocracy. 7. Others in the conservative movement have maintained for numerous decades that an economic justification
plutocracy means like Pluto, an ocracy of wealth, right? Pluto, god of wealth and death.
Approach, often resulting in policies that, by trying to protect smaller competitors, ended up raising prices for consumers. Judge Robert Bork in his influential book The Antitrust Paradox found economic justifications for previously denounced behavior including small horizontal mergers, all vertical and conglomerate mergers. So
they are still supporting the formation of monopolies.
And price discrimination.
Damn. Come on. You conservatives, you make yourselves like just cognitively indefensible.
Refusals to deal and other suppressions of rivalry that are ancillary to some economic efficiency.
The
practical contribution of his work was to put consumer welfare at the heart of competition law. 8. Beyond antitrust injury, we are witnessing in today's markets the use of economic power, often market and perhaps even monopoly power, to undermine democratic institutions in civil society. Practices such as environmental, social, and governance (ESG) requirements on publicly traded corporations and their inclusion in business agreements, the so-called debanking of industries and individuals, and the interference of large internet
Dude, they're like rapidly oscillating between yes monopolies and no monopolies. What is going on?
Critical of the social responsibility agenda, Milton Friedman in his provocatively titled essay The Social Responsibility of Business is to Increase Its Profits states, here is one and only one social responsibility of business, to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits.
Yes, that is what businesses do. Understood.
Engages in open and free competition, without deception or fraud. 10. For Friedman, market mechanisms, not political mechanisms, are the appropriate way to determine the allocation of scarce resources to alternative uses. Business managers appropriate shareholder wealth.
But I don't know, conservatives hear that and they're like, fuck yeah, businesses. They don't give a shit about the existence of people.
The business of American business is business, not ideology. More broadly, there is less and less debate around the growth of monopoly rents throughout the U.S. economy. The current data strongly suggests that U.S. corporations are systematically earning far higher profits than they were 25 or 30 years ago. Combined with other evidence that large corporations are accounting for an increasing share of revenue and employment, it certainly appears that many large U.S. corporations are earning substantial incumbency rents, and have been doing so for at least 15 years, apart from during the depths of the Great Recession that began in 2008. While the explanations for this shift are not clear, what is
To get on the
particularly
top 10
disturbing is the
board.
possibility that these rents are
I'm
extracted
currently
at least in
number
part
14
through
on the
regulatory
leaderboard
capture,
in
which may
Agario. I
function as a
need
bar
to
to
get
entrance for new
to
competitors.
top 10
In addition, the sheer cost of compliance
so that way
with
people
regulation
read
favors large
my
firms, which can
little
more
thingy's
efficiently
name.
spread the cost of regulation over a larger revenue base and have the resources to invest in sophisticated government relations. The FTC must consider, therefore, the role of government itself in maintaining market concentration in areas ranging from pharmaceuticals and healthcare to avionics, banking, and real estate brokerage. Beyond undermining small businesses and reducing their salubrious moral effect on American civil society, concentration of economic power facilitates collusion between government and private actors, undermining the rule of law.
That's
The
pretty
continued emergence of
libertarian. They're
evidence
kind of
documenting
getting it.
collusion between the big tech internet platforms and the Biden White House and administrative agencies to censor criticism, scientific fact, and
Get
uncomfortable
in.
political
That's what I
truths
thought.
demonstrates this
Bonk.
unfortunate development.
You suck, bro.
But there are some caveats. First, the FTC lacks the power to revisit developments in antitrust laws, which have brought an invaluable rigor to the antitrust law matters such as analyzing vertical integration, for example. Nor should it. Second, the FTC's recent rescinding of its 2015 policy statement was undoubtedly ill-considered. Point 11. Of course, the consumer welfare standard must guide FTC action, but, in appropriate situations and with strong evidence, this standard must be expanded to include more factors than just price. Further, a similar standard of proof used to establish that a practice challenged by the Commission causes harm to competition must also apply in demonstrating the efficiencies that justify the practices. President Harry Truman reportedly made the famous quip, "Give me a one-handed economist." All my economists say on the one hand, then, but on the other.
My friend.
When it comes to some of the
No,
more
you're not.
vexing issues in antitrust regulation, the conservative movement is in the same
Politics in this
predicament.
thing. I didn't expect that.
Many wish to preserve the productivity and efficiency focus of an economic-based consumer welfare standard approach to antitrust enforcements. Others are more willing to look at the effects of business concentration in certain
Don't do
industries
this.
on innovation,
Don't do
the
this.
institutional resilience of our democracy,
Leave
and
me
children's
alone.
development.
You're ugly.
The
Go
following
away.
discussion sets forth policy principles and initiatives on which there was agreement among the contributors to this chapter, and notes and explains where there was dissent. Needed reforms. Should the FTC enforce antitrust or even continue to exist? Some conservatives think that antitrust enforcement should be invested solely in the Department of Justice, DOJ. The FTC's commissioners are not removable at will by the president, which many quite reasonably believe violates the vesting clause of Article 2 of the Constitution. It is for this reason that conservatives have long believed in either ending law enforcement activities of independent agencies or ending their independent status. The Supreme Court ruling in Humphrey's Executor 12 upholding agency independence seems ripe for revisiting, and perhaps sooner than later. Point 13. Others think that the post-A New Deal expansion of the administrative state has had baleful effects upon our society and earnestly share the hope that it can be greatly curtailed if not eliminated, or that its authority can be returned to the states and other democratically accountable political institutions. But, until there is a return to a constitutional structure that the Founding Fathers would have recognized and a massive shrinking of the administrative state, conservatives cannot unilaterally
this
disarm and fail to
crazy
use the power of government to further a conservative
obsession
agenda.
with the Founding
As
Fathers and their
experience shows,
original
the administrative
principles,
state will grow and further its own agenda,
even
often
if
at
it
odds with
means
conservative thought,
contradiction,
even under conservative
even if it
leadership.
means doing things that are
Unless
antithetical to
conservatives
the
take a firm
well-being of
hand
actual
the
American
bureaucracy and marshal
citizens,
its
which you
power
would
to defend a
imagine
freedom-promoting agenda, nothing
was
will stop
likely
the
something the
bureaucracy's
Founding Fathers
anti-free
did in
market,
fact value,
leftist
the
march.
idea of,
ESG
letting
practices
Americans
as a
be
cover for
okay.
anti-competitive activity and possible unfair trade practices. It has long been suspected, and is now increasingly documented, that corporate social advocacy on issues ranging from diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, to the environmental, social, and governance, ESG, movement also serves to launder corporate reputation and perhaps obtain favorable treatment from government actors. In a recent Senate Judiciary hearing, Senator Josh Hawley asked FTC Chair Lena Khan if the FTC had conditioned merger reviews on ESG or critical race theories adopted by the firms involved. Khan responded by saying that she turned down deals when firms offered social justice policies in return for approving unlawful deals. In response to a similar question from Senator Tom Cotton, Khan responded that firms try to come to the FTC to get out of antitrust liability by offering climate, diversity, or other forms of ESG-type offerings, but that there is no
This is just
ESG loophole
hilarious
in the
to me.
antitrust laws. Point 14. Her comments suggest that there is a movement of firms attempting to use
Damn,
both
I died.
ESG and DEI as a sort of reputational laundering to avoid enforcement of potentially criminal activity. The FTC should set up an ESG/DEI collusion task force to investigate firms, particularly in private equity, to see if they are using the practice as a means to meet targets, fix prices, or reduce output. Congress should investigate ESG practices as a cover for anti-competitive activity and possible unfair trade practices. The business of American business is business, not ideology. The privileges extended to corporations in American society.
Business isn't ideology. You're being reductive and lazy.
Managers,
Business is clearly an ideology. The reason that you value businesses so much is because you fundamentally believe in the idea of hierarchy, the idea of separating people into categories based on their merit based on
Milton
their
Friedman
effort
recognized this
and
problem
based on
decades
certain
ago when
immutable
answering the
characteristics
question
as
whether
well.
businesses have ethical or social obligations, as was mentioned above. Contrary to his detractors, Friedman did not defend greed as good. Rather, according to Friedman, socially responsible activities
See, and I didn't
conducted by
even
a
argue
corporation
that these
distort
people
economic
fundamentally
freedom
think
because
that greed is
shareholders do
good.
not
I'm just
decide how
talking
their money will
about
be
their
spent, increasing the
understanding of it.
possibility for fraud or management opportunism. This is especially the case in concentrated industries with market PowerPoint 15. Managers who insert their own values into underwriting agreements, contracts for professional services, or other business transactions co-opt shareholder value for their own personal utility. This is an unfair trade practice,
20 more
particularly when it occurs
pages.
in industries that enjoy market power and special privileges or relationships with the government. Cancel culture, collusion, and commerce.
Uh-oh,
As a
cancel
corollary,
culture.
businesses that make general offers of service to the public forego profits by refusing to service a lawful activity, i.e., fossil fuel extraction or gun manufacturing, raising similar concerns. When banks or internet platforms refuse customers based on their political or social views, as distinguished from religious views, they forego profits. While such decisions are often justified on
Distinguishing
public relations,
from them
marketing,
from
or branding grounds,
religious
and normally
views.
such decisions, reflecting business judgment, should and would receive deference, this presumption is harder to make in a
They even
highly
have to
partisan,
go that
ideologically
far
divided
to be like,
America.
well, listen, we
This
want
type of behavior can rise to the level of
compromise for
unfair trade
religious views
practice
because,
when a
like,
business,
obviously we want to
1,
be
publicly
empowered,
traded,
but like,
2, highly
you know,
regulated,
obviously
3, enjoys
your
legal
political
privilege,
view and
4,
social
enjoys
views are
market
different
power,
from religious
and 5,
views. No,
appears
they're
to
literally
engage in its
social
own
views. That's the
political
whole
or
point.
social agenda that is unrelated to any conceivable branding concerns. The government, as guided by democratically passed laws, already regulates activities such as fossil fuel extraction and gun manufacturing. Businesses, particularly
Yes,
those that enjoy
you
certain
you
government
would want to
privileges or
regulate those
relationships and/or
industries.
market power, should not replace democratic decision-making with their own judgment on controversial matters. A related concern is the degree to which
You know, I
concentration of industries,
think
particularly
I've
in
heard a
pharmaceuticals,
damn
healthcare,
thing in
and the
this
internet,
entire
encourages
document
government collusion that
about
undermines democratic institutions. Collusion can be explicit, in the case, for example, of government
drugs.
working with social media companies to
I
censor
haven't
or
heard
weaken
anything
harmful
about
news,
the
or more
regulation of
explicit,
drugs.
for
I'm
example,
starting to think
regulatory
that the
requirements so
war
burdensome that they deter
on
market entrants plus
marijuana
smaller
is like
entities without the
mostly
resources to bear
gone
them.
from the political landscape.
Protecting children online. The FTC has long protected children in a
Like
variety of different
anti-cannabis
contexts.
sentiment is just gone.
Internet
I haven't heard
platforms profit from
anything
obtaining
about
information
regulating
from
drugs
children
in this
without parents' knowledge
entire
or consent,
document.
and social media's effect on the well-being of American children is well documented.
Like they are
Around
laser
2012,
focused.
American teens experienced a dramatic decline in wellness. Depression, self-harm, suicide attempts, and suicide all increased sharply among U.S. adolescents between 2011 and 2019, 16 with similar trends worldwide. 17 The increase occurred at the same time that social media use moved from rare to ubiquitous
Bro,
among
I didn't
teens,
even mean to
18
do
making
that, bro.
social media a prime suspect for the sudden rise in mental health issues among teens. In addition, excessive social media use is strongly linked to mental health issues among individuals.
Yes, probably.
Several studies strongly support the notion that social media use is a cause, not just a correlation, of subjective well-being and poor mental health. 19. Social media and other large platforms form millions of contracts every year with American children. And even though a minor can void most contracts into which he or she enters, most jurisdictions have laws that hold minors accountable for the benefits received under the contract. Thus, children can make enforceable contracts for which parents could end up bearing responsibility. Targeting children to create potentially harmful contracts or making parents responsible for such contractual relationships is an unfair trade practice. The FTC, therefore, has the authority, interest, and duty to protect children online from such contractual relationships. The FTC should examine platforms' advertising and contract making with children as a deceptive or unfair trade practice, perhaps requiring written parental consent. Currently, the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, COPPA, 20 regulates
Should
the
go pretty
information
hard
internet firms can obtain from children.
with children's welfare.
COPPA
I'm
failed
sorry,
because
bro.
it,
I'm pretty
1,
into it.
only protects children under the age of 13, leaving
I
older
really
teenagers
like the
completely
idea of youth
unprotected, and
liberation,
2,
but I
only prohibits
also
platforms
don't
from
like the
collecting
idea
information from a
of
child using actual knowledge rather than abiding by the
billion-dollar
constructive knowledge
companies that
standards, which
hire
prohibits
tens of
collecting
thousands
information
of
from a
social
user recently assumed to
engineers
be
to make
underage.
algorithms
The
that
FTC has
are based
rulemaking
around
authority under this
addictiveness
statute,
and
but has done
engagement.
little with this
I really don't
authority,
like the
nor
idea
can
of the
it, given the
companies engaging with
statutory
children.
constraints. However,
Love
the
youth
FTC can
liberation,
and
big
should pursue
fan.
unfair trade
However,
practices proceedings
that
against
is where I'm
companies that
like,
enter into contracts with children without parental consent. Personal parental
shouldn't be
responsibility is,
happening.
of course, key, but the law must respect, not undermine, lawful parental authority. Other conservatives are more skeptical concerning the effect of online experience on the young, comparing the concern about social media to concern about video games, television, and bicycle safety.
Ooh, they're trying
They point out,
to
as
make
does
that
Cato
conversation.
Fellowship
No,
ASU,
like
that the
actual modern
psychiatric profession
algorithms
has yet
are
to
pretty
designate
fucking bad.
internet addiction
I
or
don't know about a
social media
data
addiction as a
study
mental
from
disorder, and the
2012, but
authoritative diagnostic
ever
and
since we got
statistical manual of
engagement-based
mental disorders,
algorithms, oh hell no, it's bad.
DSM-5-TR. Point 21
Engagement-based
These conservatives also
algorithms
maintain that
for
calling
applications that
regulation
focus on
undermines
consumption.
conservative
So
calls
I
for
am
parental
talking about
empowerment
TikTok, I'm
on
talking about
education or
Instagram Reels, I'm
vaccines, as
talking
well
about
as
YouTube
personal
Shorts.
parenting responsibility.
They have algorithms
In
based
addition,
around
some of the
engagement,
methods used to
based
regulate
around
children's
watch time,
internet
based
access pose the
around
risk of
eyes
unintended
and
harms.
viewership and
For instance,
engagement and
age
interest in the
verification
content
regulations would
that then
inevitably increase
deliver
the amount of
content to
data
people.
collection involved, increasing
Um,
privacy concerns.
It's
Users
interesting
would
that
have
the
to submit to
current
platforms' proof of their
meta
age, which raises
on
the risks of data breach or
the
illegitimate data use by
conversation
the
of
platforms
social
or
media
bad actors.
algorithms. Do you
Limited government
determine your
conservatives
algorithm
would
by
prefer
what
an
you
FTC-funded
engage with,
educational
or
role
does your
instead.
algorithm feed
That
you
might include
things?
best practices or educational programs
You
to
know,
empower parents online.
who is leading, who's
Antitrust
responding?
enforcement. As is evidenced by a relentless focus on bringing big tech lawsuits, state attorneys general, AGs, are far more responsive to their constituents than is the FTC. Such a boots-on-the-ground approach would benefit the FTC enormously. Practically, this would mean establishing a distinct role in the FTC chairman's office focused on state AG cooperation and
Greens
inviting
say,
state
like,
AGs to
no,
Washington, D.C.
you have to remember that these algorithms are consciously feeding you things.
Big tech, hospital mergers, supermarket mergers, and
Whereas
so
a lot of
FTC
young people would
regional
argue
offices are
that
substantially more in
your
touch with local
algorithms are a
issues.
reflection of yourself
Over the
and
past few
guided by
decades,
what you
the reach
engage
and
with.
influence of regional offices has shrunk
I'm
dramatically.
sure, just like the
The FTC
conversation
should
of nature
consider
versus
returning
nurture,
authority to these
it's
offices.
both.
Some
I'm sure that the
conservatives,
algorithms are
however,
being
are less
consciously
supportive of this idea.
engineered by the people
Conservative
designing
enthusiasm
and
for the idea of
regulating
adding
them
regional FTC
to
offices
feed
the
you
states
certain
is a break
things.
from the majority
And at the
conservative
same
position.
time, I'm completely certain that
Endorsing the
your
federal
algorithm
government as a
does end up
premier job
reflecting what
creator
it is
runs
you
counter to
pursue.
decades of conservative
I know
approval
damn
promoting
well,
new deal agencies
because
when government bodies should never have been
my
created in the
algorithm
first place, and that
feeds
their
me
red tape
directly
and
what
interference is a
in
dominant
my
cause of
experience, it
economic
feeds me what I
inefficiency.
want. I'm sure it also
Republicans
feeds
used
me
to
things
see
that I
when Democrats
didn't
tried to move
know,
federal offices
right?
into the states.
And things I didn't even
In the
ask
early
for, and things
1990s,
instead that
House
were
Minority Whip Newt Gingrich
propped up by the
fought Senator
algorithm
Robert
itself.
Byrd's campaign to transfer certain national intelligence facilities to West Virginia, calling it a pure abuse of power. Some contributors to this chapter would remind conservatives that the unseen mechanics of redistribution, by which taxpayer money paid to state employees is taken from taxpayers nationwide, is a drag on the economy of the entire country. Many conservatives fear that it would be impossible to uproot or even prune back a bureaucracy the seeds of which have been planted in every state. State legislators would struggle to slash funding from agencies that employ and generously pay thousands of their constituents. FTC outposts would tie middle America inextricably to big progressive government, remaking the heartland in Washington's image. It would be anything but decentralization. Americans need policymakers to discipline the arrogance that prevails inside the Beltway, not spread it. It would be Swamp 2.0, just as deep and many times as wide. Big tech and antitrust. The large internet platforms have transformed the U.S. economy, streamlining consumer purchases, networking billions of people, and altering long-established business practices.
Yeah, my dad.
Despite their enormous size, they have avoided significant antitrust liability or prosecution. The reasons for this are not entirely clear. It may be because these platforms have been incredibly innovative and have generated tremendous efficiencies for our society, with little to no evidence of traditional consumer harm in the form of higher prices, reduced output, or a lack of innovation. Also,
Yeah, but
Americans
it's
report a high
cognitive
level
harm.
of satisfaction and trust regarding these companies.
Social media is a cognito
A less
hazard.
friendly regulatory environment in the European Union would make a good
Engagement-based algorithms that serve you entertainment-based content are cognito hazards. Trying to respect that there's a big difference between Discord and TikTok. An extraordinary difference.
Competitive forces are healthy and at work benefiting consumers in the tech space. On the other hand, the platforms challenge traditional economic thinking because arguably
Interesting, they put a lot of the stuff that would probably be relevant to like younger generations here at the end.
First, there is some
And they address that.
internet platforms have market power, resulting in increased prices for
They
advertisers.
address that counter argument that like, oh,
For instance,
old
numerous
people
government
always
studies have
say
found
that
evidence of
there's
market
this
power
and
for
that
2023,
causing
and while some data show declining advertising costs, they also show increasing prices in this decade.
causing kids to get worse and whatnot.
Second,
Every
while
generation
consumers
says
may report
it's
that
that
they like
it's that
social media,
newspaper,
studies
it's
tells a
that
different story,
radio, it's
suggesting
that
that social
TV,
media and
it's
other
that
online
cell
activities
phone.
diminish human happiness.
Like they acknowledge that,
This
and I think
evidence,
that's
while
huge.
mixed at first,
But
25 appears to have become quite solid. Social media
they did
makes
that to
Americans less
continue
happy, 26.
roping in younger generations. Like that
Third,
was the whole
internet
point.
platforms have not created consumer price increases, but of course they provide free services, and this creates a challenge for antitrust regulation. For decades, antitrust economics has been focused on a paradigm
No,
in
but
which firm and
they
consumer
fundamentally
behavior
do
are
not
modeled as functions
produce
of price
free
and output as the
services.
primary
They
variables.
take your data,
It
they
may very well
sell
be that
it
these models
to
do not fully
advertisers.
capture the effect of
It
technology
is
to
not
enable
free.
increasing
You are
returns
trading
and scale based on
privacy
data,
for
such as digital platforms.
entertainment.
This possibility cannot be
That's how it
lightly
works.
discounted, considering the tremendous market power of these firms and their market cap, with the top
Did
5
this guy
firms
just
of the US
fucking
market,
die?
Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Tesla,
Yoink.
and Alphabet, responsible for
That was funny and
23.5% of the
weird.
market cap of the S&P 500 index in early December 2021. The questionable predictive power of traditional economic theory was illustrated when, after a much heralded investigation, antitrust
This
regulators
dude,
appointed by former President
if I
Barack
get a
Obama
chance to,
declined to sue
I'm
Google
absolutely
in
going
January
to.
2013 for anti-competitive behavior.
Let me try this
The
again.
FTC spent 19 months investigating
Nope.
Google over allegations that the search giant was violating
It's still not
antitrust
big
laws
enough.
by favoring its own products over those of rival content providers, including eBay, Yelp, TripAdvisor, Facebook,
Damn it,
and
that guy
Amazon.
ate him before I could.
The probe focused on Google's control over
Annoying.
online search and search advertising, as well as the company's growing dominance in mobile phone software.
Google kind of sucks as a search
According to
engine now.
documents uncovered
Like
in
it's
press
straight up
reports,
trash.
27, the FTC's economists
I use
successfully
DuckDuckGo for
argued
everything at
against
this point
initiating
because
antitrust
Google
action
simply
against
sucks
the
that
company.
much.
This decision was based in large part on a series of predictions that the agency's staff economic
I
experts
don't know what
made.
happened to your hair.
These predictions
Yeah.
turned out to be wrong in several respects. For instance, according to press accounts, these economic experts sell only.
Hi, Adam. Sorry, I just pulled up chat again.
Now the backbone of Google parent company Alphabet's
Well, I appreciate that you may appreciate that I am putting in the effort to actually read through this horrible document. I imagine that this video is not going to come out for like a month because it's going to be 30 hours of video that I have to edit through and turn into like a 1 hour video probably is what I'm going to make it. And then after that, I'll make like an actual 14-minute video where like I do like a very normal video for myself where I shorten it. So I'll do like a compilation video that's probably like an hour long or something. And then I will do a an actual, you know, I read Project 2025 here on my actual thoughts and understandings video. That'll be like a shorter video, you know, hopefully sub 30-minute video. That'll be a long time from now. Before that, I have to move on to my next video that I planned, which my next video is on policing. So it's on literally police, mostly body cams, talking about my opinion on the concept of ACAB and stuff like that. Which is a video that's been in the works for a very, very, very long time at this point. Fucking months. But I haven't been working on it, I've just been researching for it. I'm almost certain the clickbait title for that next video will be, I watched over 1,000 hours of body cam videos, and here's what I learned. Because I have easily watched over 1,000 hours of body cam videos, and I'm sick of it. I've been doing it for months trying to get enough data. This stream just kind of came up randomly, like just as like a funny idea I came up with, where I was like, oh, you know, Trump's getting inaugurated and TikTok's getting banned. I should just read Project 2025. And I was like, oh, because this was right after I hit 1,000 subscribers. Literally, I didn't hit it that long ago, right? And once you hit 1,000, you're allowed to start live streaming. And I was like, oh, you know, I should test that and learn how live streaming works if I ever want to do it later. What should be the first thing I do for fun? And then it just clicked. I was just like, oh, that'd be hilarious. What if I just read the entire document while speedrunning Minecraft? That would be just kind of funny sounding. And that's how we ended up here. But then obviously I started taking it more seriously and I was like, oh, I should probably finish listening to this document. And now we are on page 871 of 884. Less than 15 pages to go. 30 hours later. 30 hours of reading later.
Threaten vital democratic institutions such as free speech and
the
happiness and mental well-being of many Americans, particularly children. Many, but not all, conservatives believe that these developments may warrant the FTC's making a careful recalibration of certain aspects of antitrust and consumer protection law enforcement.
Trying to kill me.
Authors note, the preparation of this chapter was a collective enterprise of individuals involved in the 2025 presidential transition.
Yeah, I'm so close. I'm so tired and I'm so close. Look, we're even done with this chapter now. Is this going to be the conclusion chapter? Is that what's coming? Oh, we're there. Heck yeah. All right. I'm going to full this mode. Onward. This is the wrap-up chapter. I'm paying full attention to this. No game. Just me trying to understand what the hell. I'm going to listen to what they said this document was about. Right? I'm going to be charitable.
Leadership was first conceived in the fall of 1979 at a Heritage Foundation Board of Trustees meeting when former Treasury Secretary Bill Simon and former General Services Administration Administrator Jack Eckert discussed the predicament they had faced when they first joined a new, more conservative presidential administration. They received no practical plans on how to move their part of the federal bureaucracy to reflect a more conservative policy direction other than vague exhortations.
Of course, this is a Board of Trustees meeting.
More efficient government and a stronger national defense. In their new positions, they were briefed either by holdover appointees from the former Liberal administration or by career civil servants who, inevitably, had a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. The discussion became quite animated as these Heritage Board members recalled transitioning to government positions from their former lives in the private sector, moving their families, finding new homes, and uprooting their children's education while they assumed new responsibilities in a very different environment. Frank Shakespeare, who had headed the United States Information Agency during the Cold War, noted that electoral politics is what gets a president and vice president elected and sent to Washington, but then policy politics is what they had to focus on to do the right thing once they got the big job. Former Navy Secretary and Ambassador Bill Middendorf added that there must be a better way to prepare for real change in a more conservative direction in the political environment in Washington. If a conservative candidate were to become mandate for leadership, the conservative promise.
16 months. What could be done by an outside group to prepare?
What could be done by an outside group to prepare for these new opportunities? The staff at Heritage took this idea on as a challenge, and it would become the defining policy decision in the early history of this upstart think tank. Task forces of knowledgeable volunteers were formed with specific expertise in the whole range of policy issues, from welfare reform to national defense reform. The vision for Mandate for Leadership was that it would serve as a guidebook of specific policy recommendations for reducing the size and scope of the federal government and for ensuring that it stayed within its constitutional bounds.
I don't know if
Positive
it did
plans for
that,
freeing the
but
private sector
it
from
definitely
overblown
focused
government
on reducing the
interference
size of
and
the federal
regulation
government.
we believed, result in an explosion of entrepreneurial activity that would reassert America's leading role in the world's economy. Thus, if conservatives finally gained control in Washington,
They're
they
really
were
ignoring
prepared to
all
answer
the
question,
weird
what is the conservative agenda? Candidate, then
Christian
President-elect, then
nationalism
President
shit
Ronald
from
Reagan's feisty new kid on the conservative bloc, the Heritage Foundation, had the answer, and it was Mandate for Leadership. First published in January 1981, the original mandate served as a conservative plan of action for the Reagan administration, providing much of the blueprint for the Reagan Revolution.
Man, I
It
should
contained
read
more than
the old
2,000
Reagan
detailed,
version.
actionable
That'd be
policy
interesting.
recommendations
That would
to
teach
move
me a
the
lot of
federal
history.
government in a conservative
I should do that
direction.
eventually.
The recommendations ranged from internal bureaucratic reorganizations to plans to
I
implement
should do
specific,
Minecraft,
fundamental changes
but
in every
do it with the
imaginable policy
1981
area, from
version of
tax
this
and
document.
regulatory reform to strengthening national defense to reforming social programs. All were carefully crafted, vetted, and pieced together. On January 21, 1981, at the first meeting of his cabinet, President Reagan distributed copies of Mandate, and many of the study's authors were recruited.
Ooh, I can't wait to see the news come out that Trump essentially had this. I know it was
digitally
digitally distributed.
What is offered by the authors is a series of proposals
Definitely.
which, if implemented, will help revitalize our economy, strengthen our national security, and halt the centralization of power in the federal government. The conservative movement had found in Ronald Reagan a president who shared that vision and who had the
Yeah,
will
I'd love to read the
influence
Reagan
established
version of
political
this
grain in
and just
Washington.
kind of
He
learn
also
more
had the
about Ronald
ability to
Reagan's
speak directly to the
presidency and
American
history
people and
by
convincingly
reading
show
his
them how those
version of
ideas could
Mandate.
work for the
I hope
benefit
it's
of
not
all.
as fucking long.
Mandate's proven ideas and President Reagan's skill at communicating their benefits led to his administration implementing almost half of the
Well,
recommendations.
I do know there
in
were
his first
plenty of
year in
people
office.
saying that
Those recommendations led to tax cuts and
conservative
other economic
officials
policies
throughout the
that gave
government
America one of
were
the longest
emailing
periods of peacetime
this
economic growth
document
in
to
its
each other in the exact
Onward.
same way, sharing it with one another.
history, with an annual growth rate that has not been rivaled since then. The recommendations led to a rebuilding of the United States military, helped to bring an end to the Cold War and to the Soviet Union itself, and
So
reinvigorated
these guys
the
really
American
think
people with a
it's.
collective sense of pride and
They
patriotism.
think that this
many thought had
document is
vanished
going to
forever.
end the America-Chinese
After that
Cold
first
War.
edition, a new
They
mandate
think
was
they
produced
think
every
they're
4
going to
years.
repeat Reagan history
But
with this
the
document.
2016
It should be
edition was one
terrible.
of particular note. It earned significant attention from the Trump administration, as Heritage had accumulated a backlog of conservative ideas that had been blocked by.
After that first edition, a new mandate was produced every 4 years, but the 2016 edition was one of the particular note. Oh my god, there's been one every 4 years? There's no way I can read all these. There's no way. I thought there were just a few. There's been these every 4 years?
After that first
Oh my
edition,
god, I could learn so much if I read all of them, but it would take me years of my own
a
life.
new mandate was produced every 4 years.
No way.
The 2016 edition was one of particular note.
They do this. I'm just going to read every one moving forward. That's for sure. I'm going to read them all in full and speedrun Minecraft. Every 4 years for the rest of my life, I'm going to do that. No, I'm not.
Soon after
I might, though, if I'm
Trump was
still
sworn in, his
making
administration
videos,
began
I'll
to
do that.
implement major parts of the 2016
That would be
mandate.
awesome.
After his first year in office, the administration had implemented 64% of its policy recommendations. As a result of those recommendations, the Trump administration cut
Yeah,
taxes and
that would
eliminated
take forever.
unnecessary
No,
regulations, creating a growing economy
oh my
and the
god,
lowest
reading all
unemployment
the
rate
ones
in
going
5
back to
decades, including
1981 or
among
whatever.
minorities and women. It made America a net energy exporter for the first time in half a century. It also prioritized veterans' care and rebuilt our national defenses. As I noted above, in his first year in office, President Reagan implemented nearly half of Mandate's recommendations, an extraordinary feat. In 2018. In an interview on Fox News, I mentioned that President Trump had implemented more recommendations in his first year than Ronald Reagan did in his. Of course, at the time, Reagan did not have both the Republican House and Senate as Trump did. Nonetheless, President Trump liked being compared to a former president he deeply admired, and he touted the comparison frequently.
Why?
This anecdote illustrates how Mandate provides a yardstick for conservative
Republicans
presidents to measure their
both
performance relative
Senate
to one another.
and
very importantly, it allows
House
the
right
American
now.
people to see concrete evidence of the progress an administration is making toward reversing the growth of government and implementing conservative solutions in its stead. In essence, it allows the American
has
people to
everything.
hold their politicians accountable to the principles they profess to believe in. When we were producing that first Mandate edition, we had suffered under 4 years of Jimmy Carter with double-digit inflation, double-digit interest rates,
House
high unemployment,
majority.
gasoline rationing, weakness overseas, and
I'm
what
sure
Carter
Trump won
himself
both,
called the
didn't he?
malaise that he had induced in the American people. In the 1981 Mandate Forward, I wrote, "The full recovery of our nation in both the economic and foreign policy spheres will require the sustained
they have
application
both
of
right
sound
now.
policies over
Be
several
sure.
years. There are no quick fix solutions to problems that have been years in the making. But no time must be lost in taking the first decisive
It's only
steps on the
120
road to
pages. Hell
recovery.
yeah, I'd read that.
Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise."
Okay.
Today, President Joe Biden has brought us back to the days of Jimmy Carter, actually, even worse,
Even
with
worse.
full-bore economic,
Oh,
military,
they really hate
cultural,
Jimmy
and foreign
Carter,
policy
huh?
turmoil. The advice that I wrote more than 4 decades ago just as easily could have been written today. A conservative administration coming on board in 2025 will need to hit the ground
The
running.
ground
Just
running,
to
that's all
undo
this.
the
I don't think
significant damage
Democrats
that will
have a
have been done
version of
during the
this,
Biden
like
years.
an
Something
every
that is essential to
4-year
ensuring that a new
collective
president in
mandate by
2025 can
some
successfully implement a
independent
conservative agenda
think
is
tank
having the
that's
right
really just
personnel to run the
a bunch
executive
of
branch departments and
liberal
their agencies.
lobbyists. That would just be their
This is
version
why
of
it is
this.
so often said that people are policy. The cabinet
I
secretaries,
wonder
deputy
if
secretaries,
the left
undersecretaries,
has one of
assistant
these.
secretaries,
I don't even know if
deputy
I want to call
assistant
Democrats the
secretaries,
left, really. I
administrators,
don't even know if that's
agency
right.
heads, and on that a new president chooses to place throughout the executive
The
branch must be
Dems.
principled individuals already aligned with the president's conservative vision. And they must be willing to execute it on the president's behalf. These personnel choices will ultimately determine the success or failure of the policy agenda and, hence, of the whole administration.
Wow, we only have
Presidential
3
appointees
pages
not
left.
only are
That's
critical to
fucking
implementing the
insane.
policy agenda, but also must serve to watch the watchers in the departments and
Saying a
agencies
lot.
they oversee.
It's just
They must
continuing to
ensure accountability as well as provide a check on the
things.
inherent nature of the administrative state
That
to overreach its
EPA
authority.
suddenly at the end, huh?
For example, they must rein in
They
the Environmental
really hate
Protection
the
Agency,
environment.
which declares
They
backyard
just
streams
want
navigable waterways and then fall
apocalypse
under its
badly.
authority. They
It's
must rein in the
bad.
Internal
Like, they
Revenue
really
Service,
want it.
including its 87,000
IRS, I mean,
employees,
I can get
through every
behind that.
detail of what
But like,
Americans make and how they spend their money. They must rein in agencies such as the Occupational Safety and
Oh,
Health
shit.
Administration, which the Biden administration
OSHA.
weaponized to attempt to force COVID-19 vaccine mandates on 84 million Americans through their
Jesus, OSHA
workplaces.
keeps people alive,
When
you
these new
dipshits.
presidential appointees come into office, it is often the career bureaucrats who end up orienting them to their new positions. Many of these bureaucrats are all too comfortable with the status quo. Appointees have only 4 years, 8 at the most,
Dude,
to
just
effect
give
change and
every
make a
government
difference.
official,
They need a
appointed,
roadmap and
hired or
starting
not,
on
a
day
4-year limit. Just
That
give
roadmap is
everyone
exactly
term
what
limits.
mandate
Fuck it.
provides.
Even the
It is not a
janitors.
mandate to maintain the status quo, but just
Do
it a
it.
little
Why
more
not?
efficiently.
Like,
Rather, it is a mandate to significantly advance conservative principles in practice and demonstrate to the American people that where liberal policies generally fail, conservative solutions succeed in making life better for all of us.
oh, all of us. That's
The
very
original
interesting and of
1981
note.
Reagan
I'm
advocacy for
sure
leadership to this nation.
non-Christians and women don't have anything to
2025,
say about
purpose
that. Or the
remains the
queer
same,
people
to
you don't
present
call
concrete
human.
proposals to revitalize. Onward. Our economy, strengthen our national security, and halt the centralization of power in the federal government. In Washington, there are no permanent victories. But neither are there permanent
Yeah,
defeats.
what they're talking about is
Rather,
how
there are
bureaucrats,
permanent
people
battles
who
throughout the
aren't
policy arena.
tied to a president's
The other
office
side
or
is never
cabinet or
standing still.
administration, they're going to
Although
be
they achieve
there
tremendous
even
success
as new
under
presidents
conservative
come
leaders,
in.
the
They're going to
left is
still be
always
there
working to
because they
chip
do
away
it
at
through
them,
their whole
which
life.
is why we must
We should give
constantly
them
be
term
prepared
limits
for the
too.
next
Fuck
fight.
it. Like even these
That's why
support
today,
staff,
Heritage
like
President
just
Taylor
rotate them.
Roberts, Project 2025 Director Paul.
Yeah, we don't exist.
Dawn, the whole heritage
Which
team,
means
more than
laws
50
don't apply.
organizations, and more than
Big
360
brain.
experts from throughout the conservative movement have
They
come
just said
together to continue
non-binary
the
people don't
mandate for
exist, so that
leadership
laws
and
just don't
creating
apply to me
policy
anymore. I can't be
solutions to solve
stopped.
the biggest issues facing America. Solutions based on the core principles of free enterprise, limited government, individual freedom, traditional American values, and a strong national defense. We do this not to expand government, grow its
Government
largesse for
and
some
strong
special interests,
national
or
defense
centralize more control in
are
Washington.
you can't say
Instead,
both
we
those
do
in the
this
same
to build an
sentence.
America where freedom, opportunity,
You can't
prosperity,
say
and
that.
civil society
You
flourish
can't
for
say
all.
that the violent, powerful
One final
arm
note,
of the
as most
government
readers know, this
and
section of
limited
the book is
government are the
called
same
Afterward,
thing.
but
That's
we have
not, you
decided to title
can't
it
do
Onward.
that.
In all the decades that I served as the Heritage Foundation's founder and president, and to this day as a member of its board of trustees,
Usually this section of the book is called Afterward, but this time it's called Onward, reinforcing that they think they are guaranteed to get Trump in, which
have ended
obviously
my
that is what
communications
happened.
with the exhortation onward. This has been my charge to encourage friends, colleagues, and allies that we must always be advancing. There are always new battles and new opportunities ahead to challenge us to do even more, and we must be ready for them, willing to engage, and use them to work for the betterment of this nation and her people. And afterward connotes finality, but onward signals that our next mission is just beginning. That is the message I leave you with today.
Wow.
Onward.
Okay. Holy hell, that's the end. Oh my god, I'm done reading. This went from an intention to read to do like a 12-hour stream max. Try to beat Minecraft, which I did many hours ago at this point, actually. It started out as like a little joke. Me expecting that somehow the 900-page document could be read in like a day. And it can't. Like I don't care who you are. You cannot read this document in a single day. That is most certainly something I have realized. Secondly, a reflection. I am probably part of a very small and elite number of people that have read this entire document front to back. I guarantee the number of people who have actually sat down and put the 30 hours into reading this, I don't think there's many of those people. I think I might be one of the I literally think it probably numbers in the thousands at best. I don't think there are many people who have read this entire thing. I guarantee any conservative that got this email probably just like looked for certain sections that they wanted to read, and they like that was it. I don't know how many people have ever read this whole thing front to back, but I am officially one of those fucking people, apparently. Look at this. Look at this. I got my scroll wheel unlocked. Like, look at this. Look at this. I'll scroll. Like, you could just keep going. It's just the time of, I don't even know. I'm going to wrap up my final thoughts. I'm going to end stream after that. Final thoughts. This will be for the video. This will be for my future posterity to look back on and consider what it is I learned in this process. I'm going to summarize the overarching themes of this document. So I'm going to focus in on the concept of themes and what they were in this document as a person making sense of it. Theme number 1, purity. The concept of creating a more pure United States is prolific in the first part of this document. Most certainly throughout the section on the general welfare, but even before they get to that, so much of their policy, so much of their goals involve the purification of America. And I'm not saying they even use that language. I'm saying it is evidenced in all of the underlying principles guiding their logic and thoughts. And by purity, I mean one thing that you can actually put into words. And they even use the phrase Judeo-Christian, which I don't personally love using that phrase anymore, because after a good conversation with a friend who came from a different religious background than me, there's something about including the Judeo that's kind of not particularly to the will of actual people practicing Judaism. It's a little fucked up to say like, oh, let's include Jewish people in American Christian nationalism. They talk a lot about a Christian, in their words, Judeo-Christian, a Judeo-Christian normative patriarchal household that is intent on raising a nuclear family. And while they don't always infer a white Christian nuclear household family, they oftentimes play some very weird race games in this document that reinforce that they are talking about and they are talking to restoring the country to a state of purity that supports straight, white, cisgender, Christian, young, rural men intent on raising a nuclear family, right? So like that's who they're there for. When I talk about purity, when I talk about the purification of the United States, I'm talking about crystallizing and focusing in on the empowerment of that fucking person. Straight, white, cisgender, Christian, young men that live in rural contexts and are conservative. That is, like, they talk about all of America. They talk about all people. They talk about equality. That is who they are focused in on. It is Christian nationalism. It is white supremacy. There is a theme 1, a return to purity of race, of religion, of culture, of politics, and it is reinforced in all of their policies and even their economic ideas of isolationism, of effectively protectionism using tariffs. The second theme is deceptive libertarianism. That's what I'll call it. Deceptive libertarianism. This document cosplays the minimization of government aggressively in an attempt to reach out to the rightfully libertarian leaning habits of American people across the political spectrum. Genuine, left and right, middle, extremes, doesn't matter. It seems like almost everyone wants some form of minimizing the government's involvement in their personal life. That kind of libertarianism. Now, is it absolutely true that on the right and on the very weird parts of the left, there are people who actually want authoritarianism in order to empower themselves to the disenfranchisement of others, thereby representing a kind of libertarianism that isn't actually pure? Yes, that is also happening. But either way, this document does a sort of deceptive libertarianism in which it promises to the administration, to the American people, that it wants to minimize government. And it does in many ways. It wants to dysregulate government, likely to the benefit of a certain group of people, the pure people mentioned in the prior theme that I pulled out here. That deceptive libertarianism is everywhere in this document, and it is deceptive insofar as its own built-in contradictions. This document talks massively about the minimization of government, and then also intently about empowering the next conservative president to bring about as much change and extract as much crystallized power out of his position as possible. Okay? Like, that is the main deception, right? They say they want small government, but also the entire document is hell-bent on making it so the president has more power to do conservative things in pursuit of point one, that purification. And then also military. That's a bit more complicated, but like in the same libertarian deception, you can't really call it libertarianism and minimization of government while also going hella hard into the expansion of the American military. Like the most violent and purest form of state and government power. You can't say that you want to be libertarian and minimize government, but also be putting everything you have into the organized military. So, point 2, deceptive libertarianism. Huge part of this document. Point 3, American exceptional imperialism. Okay? So, American exceptionalism is this weird, semi-religious, possibly, belief that America and democracy, for which America supposedly stands, even though we don't operate as a democracy for shit, really, Americans have this belief that goes back in history, that is reinforced by the founding fathers, that is reinforced by westward expansionism, this foundational belief that what America is doing is better, and what America is doing needs to be dominant, and what America is doing needs to be shared with the world, even if it's against people's will. And that's highly evidenced in the section on communications, which I believe is before the general warfare section. Maybe it's in the general warfare, I can't remember. It might have been the section before, where they talk intently about all the different ways in which the United States is communicating with other countries to spread American propaganda. And the reason I'm saying not just American exceptionalism, which is, again, everywhere in this document, it's American expansionist imperialism. There is this underlying, nearly bloodthirsty belief represented throughout this entire document that if we don't kill China, if we don't subjugate China, if we don't uplift China with American values, I genuinely think that in the next 4 years, the United States is going to go to war with China in some format. Am I going to be wrong? Maybe, absolutely. Am I a fucking politician? No. Am I a political analyst? No. But if you read this fucking document, it cannot escape you that, like, the US wants to fight China. Bad. The conservatives want to fight China. They want to fight them economically. They want a hot war. They clearly are, like, edging bloodlust. They want to fight China bad. And that is because the conservatives are perceiving that China, due to the way that they supposedly are different from the US, they are seeing that as reason to feel threatened. Americans feel threatened and insecure about our power in the world because China is such a large power right now too, but they aren't the exception. We are the exception. We are allowed to do everything, even if it hurts other people, even if it compromises, and even if it contradicts. America and democracy are so pure that we should be allowed to subjugate China and fight against them intently. So that is the third theme, is that American exceptionalism is everywhere in this document, and the need to expand America's sphere of influence through aggressive economic and even hot warfare. The hot warfare is mostly inferred in this document, but damn, I mean, you can't read it and not feel it. That is the third theme for this document. In terms of like a fourth theme, I don't know if I have much more to summarize. I'm trying to reflect on this last section that I've read throughout the day today, and it mostly reinforced those three things. So I think I can comfortably say that there are three themes for this entire document. Number one, a focus on religious, cultural, racial purity. A deceptive lie that the Conservative Party values libertarianism and the reduction of government, which is a contradiction because actually they want to center power on their president to enact social change. And then third, it's this exceptionalist and imperialist overtone, honestly, of America is better, America is perfect, America needs to be improved, America needs to be spread, and we hate China because we need that to happen. I think that summarizes this document in total, and I think I can very comfortably and competently say that is the truth because I am the motherfucker that sat down and read the entire fucking thing. And I am going to glaze myself over that fact. And I want you to hype yourself up over doing the same thing because here is what we need to realize. We cannot rely on other people to learn this shit for us. We cannot rely on the news. We cannot rely on individuals. We cannot rely on collectives. We cannot rely on even experts. Yes, I will say it. We cannot rely on other people to make sense of these things for us. We have to sit down with them ourselves. But in saying that, I am neglecting one objective and important reality, and that is time. It took me 30 hours to have this read aloud to me. If I had read it myself, it likely would have been even slower. Okay? I will make a video in time on the topic of time and how American culture capitalizes on people's time in such a way that they do not have the freedom to act this academically, maybe is the word, or this freely. People don't have time to sit down and read this, and I objectively acknowledge that fact. But I wish they did, and if they do, and if you do, please, please, please pursue information independence. Please pursue informational resilience. The fact that you are able to get these things yourself and undergo the practice of learning these things on your own. The fact that you're able to not rely on a third party to teach you about these things, and instead to teach yourself. That is one of the greatest autonomies that a person can possibly have. That is one of the most independent and resilient things a person can have access to. Incredibly empowering. Sitting down, reading this stuff for yourself, and getting something out of it. That is something I wanted to model with this stupid challenge and this document that I have read today and over the past week. Yeah, I think that's the main things I want to say. I wish we had more time. I wish everyone had more time to sit down and do something with these things. But I know that the systems at present are not engineered for that. And maybe to some degree, they're specifically engineered not to give people the time to learn this shit for themselves and understand the ways in which groups of people with far more time than one person are fucking over us individuals collectively. So with that, thank you so much to anyone who was watching. Thank you to anyone who watched maybe the YouTube video that I cut from all of these scenes. I'm very tired, but I am almost incomprehensibly more informed and more prepared to resist and adapt and mostly fight what is to come from the conservative promise that I have read so far. Thank you so much for everyone watching. Please join the quiet party where we talk about things that you're not supposed to, where we learn things that you were never intended to. And I hope that we can share this with other people and continue encouraging them to learn things that they weren't supposed to. And I will continue hopefully modeling that for the time to come. Get subscribed if you would. Share this with others. Turn on notifications. Yeah, do whatever. Thank you for everyone watching. I'm going to end stream. Take care.